water, earth, fire, air.
Hey Lance, have you seen this straw?
Don't freak out. He's mastered airbending already, so this is the first step, then we get the clippers.
We can't keep doing this.
Previously on Avatar.
They repeat themselves a lot, especially with things that were literally just explained to us. I'm going to add a lesson or an overarching theme to each episode we just witnessed, and the theme I'm giving episode 1 is patience. The encounter with Sokka is actually the first instance of the show trying to present a new element. Let's make the new ideas folder and put this one inside of it. This episode is a microcosm of specificity. Why on earth did they decide to make it so that the Avatar can only commune with his past lives at specific shrines? Why not just always sit near the Kyoshi statue? Why even finish your training on your own? The show seems to really want to rush through a lot of the elements from book 1. In a world with such fantastic abilities, you ask what can be done to make the lives of everyday people easier. The show instead decides to change this, making the Omashu delivery system an invention by a non-bender. Let's talk about focus. So how do you allow the individual character's strength to peak out when you're telling an ongoing story? Specifically Aang using the fucking force to help hold up that big rock. But for Team Avatar itself, they actually accomplished something. For what I think is the first time in the show? Oh, and yeah, you may have noticed there's a floating baby head on the Netflix adaptation of my favorite show. The Netflix show is the only part of this video that gets copyright claimed. The floating baby helps prevent that. He's my son, Corbin. If you want to see the unedited version, it's available for $3 on my Patreon. The link is in the description. Oh, and don't forget to like and subscribe, it really does help. Enjoy part 2. We open this episode with Team Avatar making a hasty retreat from some firebenders. Honestly, there isn't really a cold open like this in the cartoon. The cartoon was very deliberate with their fight scenes, so opening on scattered action wouldn't make much sense. The cartoon often opened on some random hijinks between our protagonists, like for the winter solstice, it opens with Aang jumping into a fluffy cloud before seeing the field of dead trees. I use that example because that's where we're going next. Before we move on though, Katara does this disc throwing thing to the firebenders, almost single-handedly taking out the troop following them. The disc throwing maneuver is done in the cartoon, but it's in episode 18 when she fights Master Pakku. And Katara taking out more than like 2 or 3 bad guys at a time is far out of her weight class in the cartoon. Team Avatar doesn't actually fight the Fire Nation a whole lot in book 1. The gang escapes on Appa and they talk about getting to the Northern Water Tribe to get Katara a master, which became their objective like today, because I've been complaining a lot about it, so I guess they fucking heard me or something. Katara also mentions in this conversation that they've been getting closer to the Fire Nation border, which yeah, they have. Peep this map, that's Heibai's village. Good world knowledge, girl. They fly over the burnt forest and set down in both mediums, the vengeful spirits being the primary focus of episode 7, the Winter Solstice Part 1. It's also called the Spirit World, but since that's an actual place, I'm just gonna call it episode 7 if y'all are cool with that. And if you're not, let me know in the comments, I guess. Alright, y'all, let's get pedantic. Sokka finds a Fire Nation medallion, I guess, and concludes that the Fire Nation burned down the forest. But in the cartoon, Sokka discovers some rhino tracks and soldier footprints that point to the forest being burnt down. In the cartoon, Sokka is livid about it and Katara calms him down because Aang is taking it really hard. In the show, no one really gets mad but Aang. The reasoning is the same though. He thinks he's failed because he's the Avatar. The line of why would anyone do this is Katara's in the show, but Aang's in the cartoon. In the cartoon, Aang says his job is to protect nature, but in the show, he says the natural world. Momo burying a nut happens in both mediums, but in the show, that's what tips off Katara about the forest growing back. In the cartoon, she's aware of it before he does this. Show Katara quotes Gran, but cartoon Katara just encourages Aang that the forest will grow back. Aang thanks her in the cartoon, but he doesn't in the show. He doesn't seem to really care all that much in the show. Okay, I'm almost done analyzing dialogue. In the show, Sokka notices a little girl watching them. In the cartoon, it's an old man who notices the sky bison and pegs Aang for the Avatar. In the cartoon, Sokka doesn't talk to him at all. In the show, Sokka recites the same haiku he sings for the women in Ba Sing Se of episode 15 of book 2.
That's one too many syllables there, bub.
Also, Waka Waka is a reference to Fozzie Bear, I guess? Do they have Muppets in the Avatar universe? Sokka then names the little girl's doll Pippin-Paddle-Opsicopoulos III, which is a reference to the disguise name that Aang used to get into Omashu in episode 5. This moment is ruined by Katara calling out Sokka's name like he'd just been captured or something. Read the room, girl. The little girl runs away and Team Avatar chases after them. And in the cartoon, the old man leads them back to his village as he's desperate for the Avatar's help. The village in the show is in this kind of swamp area, but in the cartoon it has much more of a traditional village feel. Team Avatar in the cartoon talks to a few different people, but they're not given names. In the show, the little girl name drops somebody as Shi Yang. Her father gives an explanation on why the forest burned down. The Fire Nation wanted to clear a path as they moved through. This explanation is not in the cartoon, and the motives for the Fire Nation burning down the forest are unclear. In the show, the father says that they sent out an expedition to search for food after their animals stopped grazing and food stopped growing. But in the cartoon, the Heibai spirit just straight up abducts one of the village members every day at sunset. In the show, Aang seems to instantly understand that the people were taken to the spirit world, but in the cartoon, he really needs to be led into it.
It's not like there's someone to teach me this stuff.
We now go to Zuko arguing with Lieutenant G about a report of some ice being spotted somewhere it shouldn't. The show makes this a very quick interaction where Zuko scolds his lieutenant, but in the cartoon, this interaction happened as the B story of episode 12, The Storm, and the interaction is even quicker, where he hears Zuko say the safety of the crew doesn't matter, and Zuko doubles down and leaves. Bro is a menace. Iroh tries to talk him down in the cartoon, but in the show we cut to Azula talking to Ozai about Zhao. Azula strokes Ozai's ego and makes comment that Zhao found the Avatar by himself. Ozai tells Azula to notify Colonel Shinu to mobilize the archers, but this admiral's name is pronounced Shainu in the cartoon. Other than that reference, the conversation is entirely show exclusive, as again, Azula is a Book 2 character. It's also interesting that Ozai makes specific mention that Zuko found the Avatar, not Zhao. Again, nothing like this happens in the cartoon. We actually don't know who reports to the Fire Lord that the Avatar is still alive, because he was such a background presence in the cartoon. Aang and Team Avatar talk about the spirit world. In the cartoon, they know literally nothing about the spirit world. Aang never learned and nobody could teach him. Other than knowing that he's the spirit bridge, Aang's knowledge of the Avatar kinda comes from basic folklore. He learns it from the kind people at the village who are more familiar with the role of what the Avatar actually is. In the show, Aang just knows. Aang says that the location is what will allow him to transcend into the spirit world, but in the cartoon, it's the time of year. The winter solstice is the reason that the lines between the physical world and the spirit world grow thin. Aang in the show gives this speech about how detouring from the North Pole to help these people is necessary, but in the cartoon, he never had to make this consideration, since getting into small side adventures was kind of Aang's whole thing. Team Avatar then stumbles upon a clearing of panda statues. In the cartoon, the Heibai spirit was represented by one panda sitting upright. The show also gives the statue fire damage on the left side of it and a scratch along its face. The cartoon doesn't have this, keeping the statue undamaged. Aang sits in front of the statue to meditate into the spirit world, but in the cartoon, his body is sitting atop the statue when he returns. Returns. This gets a little complicated. In the cartoon, Aang confronts the Heibai spirit in the village and asks it to stop terrorizing them. Sokka doesn't want to see Aang face it alone, so he runs out to try to help them, getting grabbed by Heibai and abducted into the spirit world like one of the villagers. Aang chases after them and grabs his hand at the last second, getting into the spirit world himself. We only got to see Aang's body on the top of the statue when he returns at the end of his journey. In the show, he just sits and meditates. Oh, and the joke about Sokka and Katara distracting him is from the cartoon as well, except it's Yue and Katara talking in the North Pole, episode 19. In the show, he's meditating until it gets dark, which may be a reference to the cartoon, when the Heibai spirit abducted people at sundown, dunno. I might be reaching. Aang enters the spirit world and, takes Katara and Sokka with him. To be crystal clear, Sokka enters the spirit world one time in the cartoon, on accident by Heibai, and Katara never enters it. It's really strange that Aang can just take them with him. They weren't meditating for 12 hours, what gives? Okay, I'm gonna get pedantic about the dialogue because this shit doesn't make any sense.
Must be the energies in the place and the thinness of the barrier and my power.
It must be the energies in the place and the thinness of the barrier and my power. What? Okay, we're just speaking gibberish at this point because those words in that order doesn't mean anything. The show just makes the Avatar a catch-all for any and all stories they want to tell. Sokka then grabs Aang and they officially travel to the spirit world. Which, how do you know that exactly? Here's what the spirit world looked like in the cartoon. This shit made no sense. Of course it was a spirit world. This shit just looks like a regular forest. Zuko and Iroh visit an Earth Kingdom town to follow up on a lead that they heard. The only time we really see these two visit an Earth Kingdom town is in the same episode with June in it, episode 15, and they're not really concerned about offending people. Zuko asks again to keep the Avatar under wraps, but it doesn't matter because his tip just loudly proclaims that the Avatar is traveling with some waterbenders. And then this interesting thing happens where the bartender asks a bar patron and he rattles off a laundry list of Team Avatar's adventures. He says that they fought some pirates, which is a reference to episode 9, that they fought off some canyon crawlers, which happens in episode 11, and how they stopped a volcano, which happens in episode 14. I have words to say about this, but we'll save that for later. The point is that the word is out about the Avatar, so Zuko and Iroh leave. When they leave, Zuko has a little hissy fit about losing everything, which is kind of a reference to when Zuko is brooding about Zhao capturing the Avatar in episode 13. Their line of thought is interrupted by June paralyzing a dude in front of them. This is taken from the cartoon, with remarkable accuracy actually. June jumps onto one of their ships and tracks a stowaway, paralyzing him and leaving. Oh shit, I didn't even realize that in the show they don't clarify that the Shearshu tracks via smell. What the fuck, why didn't they go over that? Oh, and June says don't die on me in the show, indicating that the paralyzation could sometimes be lethal. On the flip side, in the cartoon, we have June reassuring people that the effects are temporary and that he'll be fine in an hour. And lastly about this, in the show, June low-key flirts with Iroh. In the cartoon, it's Iroh who low-key flirts with June. Team Avatar walks through the spirit world, I guess. They talk about Monkey Atso, and Katara drops that she's a spiritually attuned person. Okay. Obviously, this entire conversation is not in the cartoon. Well, up until they're confronted by Wan Shitong, he who knows 10,000 things. In the show, he represents himself as the spirit of knowledge itself, but in the cartoon, Wan Shitong is the spirit who protects his library. I don't know if those are the same thing exactly, but whatever. Wan Shitong had a very specific role to play in the cartoon, as his library gave Team Avatar the knowledge of the solar eclipse. If he's not guarding the library, I guess it makes sense for him to be downgraded to just the spirit of knowledge, whatevs. In the show, Aang is the only one who can understand him, but in the cartoon, they all talk with him. He warns them that they are interlopers, and the longer they stay, the more dangerous the spirit world will become for them. This concept is exclusive to the show. The cartoon has... oh fuck, I have to talk about Korra again, don't I? Avatar: The Last Airbender does not have interlopers, but Legend of Korra does show more adventures in the spirit world, like how Uncle Iroh basically lives there now. Essentially, the spirit world isn't dangerous in the right places with the right attitude, so this broad sentiment about it will get more dangerous isn't really the case in the cartoon. Wan Shitong clarifies that the spirit world can reveal painful truths to humans, which, again, unique to the show. Then he leaves without name-dropping himself. Wild encounter. I think I've illustrated that the cartoon doesn't treat him this way, so let's just move on. Azula training is another show exclusive. However, this is the first time Azula's blue fire is seen. In the cartoon, this was her default fire, but it looks like in the show she has to get angry for it. It should also be noted that the only times we see Azula get angry in the cartoon are at the very, very end of her journey, the last few episodes of Book 3. And that was intentional, because she was a literal psychopath. Ty Lee telling Azula she's perfect is something she often did casually. The time in the beach comes to mind, episode 5 of Book 3. Iroh returns to Zuko saying he got distracted by a match of Pai Sho, which I could totally see happening in the cartoon, except Iroh mentions that they use unusual tactics, when in the cartoon it was him who employed the unusual tactic of the Lotus Gambit. Iroh encourages Zuko to work with June in the show, but in the cartoon, Zuko is fully on board with using June to find the Avatar. In the show, June wants to know more about the Avatar, but in the cartoon, she didn't really care about him at all. They, once again, do not explain the abilities of the Shirshu, and in the cartoon, Zuko specifically uses Katara's necklace that he stole from her after Katara got imprisoned in episode 6. This detail, once again, is just completely removed from the show. Team Avatar sticks to the path as Wan Shitong instructed them to, and we finally get a look at the Heibai spirit as it runs them off the path. Aang notices the scratch on his spirit face, and pegs it as the spirit of the forest. In the cartoon, Aang was only able to determine that Heibai was the spirit of the forest because he connected with him through physical touch. I know that explanation seems a little flimsy, but he learned that lesson from a dead dragon, and it's only possible because he's the Avatar, okay? It makes sense. We then get to the reveal that there's no bending in the spirit world, which is from the cartoon, but Aang learns it there by trying to glide away from Roku's dragon, not Heibai. Also, he never bends at the spirit even in the physical world, so it's interesting that Katara is trying that here. Sokka displays his one and only character trait of being brave, and Aang tells everybody to run. That bravery is in the cartoon as well, so hey, good job there. I'll take what I can get at this point. Pretty much everything else in this episode is exclusive to the show. There are things here and there that are references to things that happen in the cartoon, but Sokka, Katara, and Aang's adventures in the spirit world are exclusive to the show. We never see how Sokka actually deals with being in the spirit world, Katara never enters, and Aang's journey is, well, you'll see. There are references though. Book 2, episode 4, titled The Swamp, has Team Avatar get lost in a swamp with a connection to the spirit world. And in that episode, Katara mistakes a tree for her mother, and Sokka has a brief interaction with Princess Yue. So when I say exclusive to the show, I mean for their journeys that they specifically go through. But the swamp is kind of all I got. So let's get into the details now. The fox that Sokka talks to might be a reference to Wan Shitong's knowledge seekers. They kind of look similar, and Sokka does have a conversation with them in the cartoon, but it's one-sided since they don't talk back. The fox calls out Sokka for making jokes when he doesn't want to talk about something, but in the cartoon he just made jokes because he was funny and wanted to lighten the mood, and maybe because his trauma made him funny. The fox tells Sokka that the fog can be dangerous, and there's only one reference to a dangerous fog in the cartoon. And, fuck me, it's in Korra again, isn't it? In the spirit world, there is apparently the Fog of Lost Souls, which is a spirit that infects your mind. It's not sprayed by Heibai, it's a prison for humans. So that's probably what this is. Although it didn't lead to hallucinations in the cartoon, just madness. Katara's time in the spirit world is a show exclusive except for that bit in the swamp that I mentioned. So I guess I'll be pedantic again. Kaya should be wearing her betrothal necklace. That's how Katara would remember her, and this is a memory. Oh, right, her name is Kaya. They don't say that in the show. Oh, and the Fire Nation attacking. This does have some roots in the cartoon, except we never see it play out fully like this. It's more so pieced together from multiple different accounts, taking place in episode 16 of Book 3, The Southern Raiders. In the show, Kaya leads Katara into the igloo and tells her to hide. In the cartoon, Katara runs to her mother and the Fire Nation soldier is already inside their home. Also, yeah, in that memory, Kaya is wearing her betrothal necklace, by the way, just in case anyone thought I was being too detail-oriented for no reason. Anyway, Katara is able to leave the igloo in the cartoon, and we only get the account of how the Fire Nation killed Kaya because of the account of Yan Ra, the firebender himself. Some of the dialogue matches up, except he doesn't threaten to kill Kaya in the cartoon. The danger comes from the village being attacked itself. In the show, Katara tries to bend water to protect her mother. In the cartoon, this is a non-issue because she left the igloo already. In the cartoon, Kaya gives herself up in the same way, for the same intention, protecting the last waterbender, but it was also to bargain for the protection of the entire village. There's also this beautifully sad moment where Kaya asks to be taken prisoner, and Yan Ra says,
I'm afraid I'm not taking prisoners today.
In the show, she pretends to do a waterbending form and oh my god, what the fuck? What is wrong with you? Christ, we'll talk about that in a minute, but then Ko the face stealer pops in and jump scares Katara in her memory. I don't even know how to explain what's happening here, so for now, let's just say that Ko never faces off against Katara, and I'll get back to it soon. Next, we go to Sokka, where he remembers getting drowned for his tribe. All of this is a show exclusive, so I'll talk about the overlap. He remembers his ice dodging trials, which is actually a reference to the cartoon where he meets Bato of the Water Tribe in episode 15, and he mentions to him then that he wasn't old enough to take the trials before his dad left. So he takes them with Bato, using Aang and Katara as his crew. He receives the Mark of the Wise in both mediums, so that's a neat detail. Sokka leaves the hut and gets picked on by some boys who tell him that his trial was garbage, and then gets double slammed by his father, who tells Bato that not everybody is meant for leadership. Again, nothing like this is in the cartoon. Hakoda was only ever proud of his son, and Sokka was always made for leadership since Hakoda left and put him in charge. Anyway, he also gets jump scared by Ko, same as Katara did. Soon, I promise. Finally, Aang's turn, where he sees some of the air temples and shrugs it off because it's not real. Ko is instantly impressed, revealing himself to Aang. Okay, soon is over. So, Ko the Face Stealer was revealed in the cartoon in the Siege of the North, the finale of Book 1. Firstly, Aang had some prep before he went in to speak to him, as Roku told him how to avoid getting his fucking face stolen. In the show, he doesn't have any prep at all, and if the rules are going to be the same,
Show no fear. Show no emotion at all.
bro failed right out the gate. In the show, Ko seems to be feeding on the despair of Aang's friends, but in the cartoon, he just stole people's faces who showed emotion in his presence. In the show, Aang just, once again, randomly stumbles upon Ko, but in the cartoon, he sought him out with a specific purpose, to ascertain the identities of the ocean and moon spirits. Now, the dialogue. Ko explains in both mediums that the Avatar in a past life attempted to slay him due to the stealing of a face of someone he loved, but Aang, or the Avatar, stealing something from Ko is unique to the show. The curly-tailed blue nose laughing in Aang's face is from the cartoon as well, except before Aang enters the cave, he actually gets to see the monkey without its face. Ko then mentions that he's going to eat Aang's friends in the show, but in the cartoon, he's only ever interested in stealing faces, not eating people, as he's, you know, the face stealer. Aang runs away in the show, but in the cartoon, he very calmly leaves, having accomplished his mission, now knowing about the ocean and moon spirits. Next up, he sees a little hut that was alluded to earlier with Monkey Gyatso inside. All of this is a show exclusive, so let's see if it has any cartoon origins. Gyatso references the last game of Pai Sho they played together, flipping Aang's waist belt thingy over his face to switch around the pieces. This is actually directly taken from the cartoon, in a flashback in episode 12, although it's another example of the cartoon being far better at allowing benders to just casually bend, since Gyatso does this airbending thing rather than using his hands. Gyatso explains that after he got fucking obliterated by the Fire Nation, he chose not to move on to the next stage of enlightenment. Okay, so this concept of true enlightenment is one that's talked about a little bit in the cartoon, and it does have a relationship to the air nomads, but it's not an afterlife. Quite the opposite, actually. The first time it's alluded to is with Guru Patik in Book 2, although not directly mentioned, just more so shown by the Guru in general. It's mentioned by name in the finale of the entire show, when Aang asks Avatar Yang Chen for wisdom, and she tells him,
Many great and wise air nomads have detached themselves and achieved spiritual enlightenment.
I do not know if she meant it as an afterlife or how Guru Patik was. Doesn't matter though, since apparently Monkey Gyatso was using it as a border world between life and death.
Okay, cool, no doubt.
See, I actually have to believe this is the case since Aang would have no memory of the things that Gyatso's telling him. You can't just remember things you don't already know.
So where am I, Roku?
I don't know, Aang.
Which leads me to believe that Gyatso is actually here, I guess, unlike everybody else who just gets a memory. So anyway, Gyatso explains that Ko uses the Fog of Lost Souls as his hunting ground, and feeds on the souls of the people he gets, I guess. In the cartoon, bro just had a cave. He's a spirit, he wanted for nothing, except maybe faces, hence the fucking name. Okay, now we get a little wibbly wobbly. Gyatso tells Aang that the other avatars have tangled with Ko, including Roku, leading Aang to needing to talk to him. He concludes that he's able to talk to Roku at his shrine, same as how he talked to Kyoshi, so he leaves for his shrine in the Fire Nation. This is more tangled than my fucking Christmas lights. Okay, so the idea to seek out Roku was given to Aang during his journey to try and soothe Heibai, but it was given to him by Roku's dragon. Okay, fuck, I have to go back further. When Aang visits the spirit world, he hasn't actually crossed the spirit plane, and instead his spirit is detached from his body, continuing to wander the physical world. During that time, Roku's dragon seeks him out to show him a vision of Sozon's comet, and actually take Aang to the shrine, to give him a clue of how to talk to Roku. Upon returning Aang to the village, he pops his spirit back into his body, allowing Aang to return from his journey into the spirit world. See, this detour was important because without Roku's dragon, Aang wouldn't have learned how to return to his physical form, and would presumably just be stuck in the spirit world until he figured it out. There's also another important thing that Roku's dragon helps Aang learn, but we'll talk about that later. So now, with a more clearer understanding of what's happening, Aang leaves the hut to pursue Roku to figure out how to deal with Ko the Face Stealer abducting his friends. But before he leaves, Aang gets his conscience cleared by Gyatso, and then Aang just wakes up in his body. Well, glad that was uncomplicated. Oh right, this fucker doesn't even know where the Roku shrine is. Yeah, complications back back on. Oh, wait, he has Zuko's diary, which is basically just the wiki page printed out. We remain uncomplicated. But actually, before we leave, Aang plants an acorn in front of the Heibai statue, telling it that he's going to make this right. Which, compared to the cartoon, sounds like he's going to get revenge for the Heibai spirit. In the cartoon, Aang talks to the spirit directly and tells it what Katara told him, that the forest will grow back and nature is a cycle. This calms the spirit and allows Aang to finally be the bridge between the spirit and the physical world. But fuck that noise when we can just plant an acorn in peace, right? If that's all it took, didn't Momo already do that in the beginning of this episode? Boom, spirit at peace, and he's not even the Avatar. Also, I didn't mention it before because I didn't really have a good way to introduce something that doesn't happen, but the Heibai spirit is never in the physical world in the show. In the cartoon, he's crossed over and is actively destroying buildings and structures in the village, but he never does that in the show. Aang also doesn't get a free pass at knowing that the Heibai spirit is in the panda statue, since they don't have cuts on their face that match up. Instead, that second thing that Roku's dragon taught him was that if you physically touch or connect with the spirits, you can learn things. Roku's dragon touched its tendril to Aang's forehead to show him a vision, and Aang uses this knowledge to touch Heibai's head and realize that he's the panda, the spirit of the forest. This is bypassed in the show by never having Heibai appear in the physical world, which is probably for the best since Aang wouldn't know how to communicate with him anyway. So finally, Aang leaves to the Roku Shrine, leaving Appa and Momo here to protect Katara and Sokka. In the cartoon, all of them go to Roku Shrine on Crescent Island, although Aang, at first, does try to leave Sokka and Katara behind to protect them. They don't let him though, and they all, including Appa and Momo, leave together. We get some narration from Gyatso, and we see Zuko enjoying his time alone, and Azula training as her friends sleep, with regular fire, not blue fire. These scenes specifically are show exclusive. We then see Zhao get handed some good news from the Yuyan archers. The Yuyan archers aren't messengers, they're fucking archers. It's right there in the name. You know what is a messenger? A messenger hawk, which is what Admiral Zhao receives his news in the cartoon. The Yuyan archers are tangentially connected to that, but it's in the context that he was originally requesting the archers for his mission to hunt the Avatar, but once he becomes Admiral, his request becomes an order. And then we get Aang gliding to reach his destination. Determination on his face, courage in his heart, murder in his eyes. Wait, no, not that last one, my bad. Feeling insecure about what my hands are doing, so I'm gonna hold my mug for this one. So what did we learn? Ultimately, this episode kind of has me at a loss for what element is missing. Firstly, it kind of feels like a part 1, part 2 episode. We set up a lot of things, but nothing really has a conclusion. And I keep awake at night thinking about the fact that Katara saw her mother get burned alive. The cartoon didn't do that, and I don't know what encouraged them to show that. Maybe it was a desire to be more adult, or just change the formula, or both, whatever. But the cartoon handled it with a significant amount more grace than this, utilizing restraint. Restraint is our theme for this episode, not only for that example, but for all the other fan servicey reasons as well. Wan Shi Tong shouldn't have been in this episode, and yet he was. Mention of the Great Divide, of Ko the Face Stealer, hell, Azula in general, shouldn't have been in this episode, and yet they were. This episode feels like the writers went to the wiki page, started with Aang, and just clicked the available related articles. The Fog of Lost Souls, June and Nyla, Heibai, and really what most of these are anyway is a misplaced idea onto a character design that's familiar. June is nothing like she was in the cartoon, neither is Heibai, but damn do they look cool. Instead of developing these ideas and characters with the time they deserved, they just threw them into it with no restraint and no limits on what it would do to them as characters. So now that we've got our theme started, let's start at the beginning. This is our first episode, 5 out of 8, where the episode opens with some Team Avatar shenanigans. I don't exactly know what Team Avatar did to get chased by Fire Nation soldiers, but I do really appreciate that this is the first episode where the team is like all together, doing something I could see them doing in the cartoon.
Like, not to put too fine a point on it, but Team Avatar spent literally every episode together, and not all of them were super important battles they were fighting. Like in episode 9 of book 3 when Aang can't sleep because he's got major anxiety about facing the Fire Lord. Do y'all remember that beautiful non-essential moment? It ends with Aang sleeping soundly on a nice fluffy bed that his friends made for him. Now, it may be a non-essential adventure for Aang, but it is essential for you to get a good night's sleep. And that's why I recently partnered with FlexiSpot to try out their new Kana Retro Japanese joinery bed.
Hey you, lend me your eyeballs for just a second, Corbin's about to build a bed.
I gotta tell you, I was really excited for this bed, specifically for the ease of being able to put it together. Putting the bed together was honestly one of the easiest furniture builds I've ever done. We didn't need any extra tools at all, which made it even easier for Corbin to jump in and help. The Kana bed frame uses traditional Japanese joinery, so instead of relying on a bunch of screws and hardware, the pieces simply lock in together. The result is a frame that feels incredibly solid and secure. And trust me, it holds up. Corbin is constantly getting tossed onto the bed, a lot, like he loves it, guys. And it doesn't wobble or shift around at all. And one thing I really appreciate is how quiet it is. The reinforced center support and sturdy construction helps eliminate the squeaks and creaks. If you've ever had a bed that makes a noise every time you roll over, you know how annoying that can be. Especially if you've got a kid or something that wakes up at the slightest sound. Since we switched to this bed, it's one less thing to worry about. It's made from solid rubber wood with a durable finish that's easy to wipe and clean. And there's plenty of clearance underneath for storage bins or baskets. And Corbin likes running under there as well. Overall, it looks great, it's quiet, and it was really easy to assemble. Like, so easy Corbin actually did it. If you've been looking for a bed frame that's built to last without spending hours putting it together, together, definitely check out the FlexiSpot Kana bed. Check my link in the description or the pinned comment and use the code LANCE to get $20 off so you can see how the FlexiSpot Kana retro Japanese joinery bed can help get you ready to fight the Fire Lord too. Thank you FlexiSpot for sponsoring this video.
So yeah, happy to see Team Avatar actually be in the same room together for a change. Unfortunately, my appreciation doesn't go much beyond that. This might seem tedious, but we need to talk about the level of resistance that Team Avatar fights throughout the cartoon. And I mean all of the cartoon. Episode 1 and 2. Aang is the only one fighting Zuko's ship. For scale, one ship could equal maybe 20 Fire Nation soldiers at once. Episode 3, they don't fight the Fire Nation at all.
And when this happens for the future, I'm just gonna skip over the episode.
Episode 4, Aang and the Kyoshi warriors, with some help from Sokka, fight Zuko's ship. Episode 6, Team Avatar, but mostly the imprisoned Earthbenders, fight back against the prison of Firebenders. Episode 8 has Team Avatar run a Fire Navy blockade, and they nearly don't make it through. Then later, they all get fucking captured as soon as they directly face off against the Fire Sages and Zhao. Episode 9 has Team Avatar do some work against the pirates, but basically avoiding the Fire Nation. Episode 10, Jet's freedom fighters take out an encampment of about 20 Fire Nation soldiers. Team Avatar helps. Episode 13, Aang gets captured by Zhao, and Zuko as the Blue Spirit helps him escape. They nearly don't. Episode 15, Aang holds off Zuko and June while Katara and Sokka work to outsmart them. Note that this isn't his entire ship, just Zuko himself. Episode 16, Aang faces off alone against Zhao. Episode 17, Aang, Katara, and Sokka each use their own individual strengths to repel the Fire Nation attacking the Northern Air Temple, even then still using the help and support of Teo's gliders. Episode 19 and 20, Aang destroys boats on his own and then uses the Avatar state to send the Fire Nation away from the North Pole. Katara faces off alone against Zuko for the first time in the show. So why did I make this list? Because episode 17 is the first time Sokka, Katara, and Aang actually fight the Fire Nation in any number. They fight Zuko plenty of times, and they run from Zuko's entire ship as well, but in those instances, it's Aang using his bending mastery to create opportunities for them to escape. Katara is a powerful bender and an invaluable member of Team Avatar, but she, and let me get close here so we can be clear, she does not possess the ability to repel firebenders of this number. I know it's exciting and interesting to see real people bend elements and fight about it, but the cartoon was extremely intentional about the kind of fighting that our protagonists will get to do, and who they get to do it with. The cartoon made it extremely clear that the Fire Nation were not to be fucked with unless it was an emergency, and there was no other option. The show isn't taking this approach, and is instead choosing to make Katara a formidable fighter against them. Check this scene from the cartoon. Team Avatar storms into Ba Sing Se's capital to take on the Earth King. Katara slashes big groups of them, Sokka coordinates, Toph and Aang keep them covered with earthbending. Do you know when this happens? Episode 18 of Book 2. Like nearly the end of the fucking journey for these kids. And it was fucking earned. Seeing them all use their individual abilities to come together as a team was something they worked hard at. There was a reason this didn't happen in Book 1. They were still learning together. Okay, so why is the episode this way? Firstly, that restraint thing I mentioned. They just couldn't help themselves but have a cool fight scene that, when analyzed a little closer, ruins the careful balance of power that the cartoon had going for it. And secondly, the cartoon had 4 to 5 fighting sequences in every 22 minutes. It was packed full of action. The show, in comparison, is considerably less so. I can't actually prove this with math, but the show feels slower. It probably has something to do with the lack of casual bending in the show as opposed to the cartoon. Characters were so much more expressive in the cartoon. Even if the first episode didn't have any actual fights in it, it felt more alive. So I could see them feeling kind of insecure about wanting to put extra action into the show.
Before we move on, let's actually talk about the Ice Disc move itself.
It's a move that, in the show, she learned from the Earthbenders, apparently. The cartoon was no stranger to letting characters use other bending disciplines in their fighting style. My favorite example is Zuko using different stances during his Agni Kai with Azula. I mean, fuck it, I'm actually gonna go into detail because it's awesome. He starts with his firebending form here, then repelling the fire, he takes a wide earthbending stance. His fingers down to deflect the fire may be a fire stance or a water stance. We've seen it in both ways. This defensive bubble is absolutely an air maneuver. We've seen Aang do it dozens of times. His breakdancing moves are actually pure Zuko moves. And of course, redirecting lightning is a technique achieved by studying waterbending. The amount of care that went into showing that Zuko really learned from his uncle, especially because of this detail. Azula is shown out of breath several times, but utilizing the right bending for the right moves allows Zuko to keep his composure and not run out of stamina so quickly. It's unparalleled and unmatched for the cartoon. But back to the point. Someone who struggled with understanding other elements was actually Katara. Remember that when Toph was trying to teach Aang earthbending, it was the fluidity and positive reinforcement that held Aang back from being able to do it in the first place. This is for a few reasons. First, she's still learning. Second, despite water being the element of change, it's somewhat difficult to incorporate elements of such a stoic and immovable element into your fighting style.
But apparently in the show, water and earth mix together with no problems whatsoever.
The cartoon was very careful about this stuff, so I just wanted to make a mention of it. Lastly, when she's done with her ice discs, she turns her ice disc table into bullets again. I'd just like to show off this fight in Ba Sing Se again. Even if water sometimes struggles to be imaginative, there's like absolutely zero creativity involved in turning your element into bullets. And I hate it. Moving right along, Katara and Sokka mentioned that they're getting closer to the Fire Nation border, which I already mentioned based on this map is very true. I talked about it in the previous episode, but I'm really happy that the show is embracing that there's an actual map and location that these characters get to wade through. Going back chronologically now, we get to the Sacred Forest. So let's talk about everything involving Heibai. In the show, Heibai is never seen in the physical world. I don't know why they made this change. I imagine it's because they didn't want Sokka to get kidnapped in the same way as he did in the cartoon, so making the spirit journey intentional was their best attempt to fix that. Heibai feels more like he's playing the wounded bear trope. You know the one, where the bear is super angry and violent, but you just remove the thorn from his paw and everything's okay. But they're playing this trope, which feels lazy. Like, Heibai in the cartoon had a real reason for being mad about his forest being burnt down. There was nothing wrong with his story. But instead, it's been repackaged into something so familiar that it's boring. I once again point to the second screen theory. Heibai's story was a rather visual one, and so making his story something that people are at least familiar with eliminates the risk of the audience missing the point. So now let's move on. Zuko humiliating his officers. Like I said, this episode is like part 1, and I'm sure the rest of the storm will be in part 2, which I just gotta point out is silly. Like, the story of Zuko's banishment is told as the B story of the storm, so half of 22 minutes. Like, why can't you just tell the entire story in this episode? In the cartoon, Zuko's interactions with the crew were with a purpose. He didn't endanger their life for no reason. He had his mission, his orders. And yeah, he was rude about it, but it wasn't for no reason, as opposed to his interaction with Lieutenant G in the show. Man, like, humiliates him for no reason. Humiliation, especially as a tool for those who are in charge of other people, like leaders, is kind of a faux pas. Like, you shouldn't be humiliating your staff. It breeds resentment in the wrong way. He's 16, I could give him a pass, except he didn't do this in the cartoon, so what gives? Well, for starters, I think the writers may have just misinterpreted what Zuko was going for in the cartoon, and just decided, well, let's make him a dick to the crew. Secondly, I think this acts as a contrast to the hard life Zuko has to live, while seeing the hard life that Azula has to live. So now I'm going to talk about Azula again. So first let's talk about the relationship her and her father share. We don't get to see much of Ozai's interactions with Azula in the cartoon, and let's be completely fair, she's a psychopath, so Ozai couldn't have done that good of a job raising her. But with that said, he always preferred her to Zuko. Born lucky versus lucky to be born. I've talked about it, so why change it? I take a meta stance on this actually. There has been a significant push over the last 2 decades in filmmaking to give villains, even irredeemable ones, understandable motivations. Think Thanos, to some extent Darth Vader, and now Azula. Sure, she's a psychopath, but
my parents were mean to me.
I feel like the tide of audiences is shifting again though. And for me at least, I don't mind villains that are evil for the sake of being evil. Sure, I love Thanos and villains that I can feel for, but sometimes I just want a dude trying to take over the world because he's a bad guy. Azula was kind of that for the cartoon, even if she did have moments to feel, like the beach and in the finale. So let's add another folder for the new ideas folder, Azula's parents. Because the show is obviously trying to get us to feel for her, or at least see how she became a psycho, which the cartoon almost intentionally avoided. As far as the contents of their conversation, I think Azula playing politics really decreases the overall effectiveness of Zhao just being a good general for the Fire Nation. Like, this dude was genuinely a good officer and rose through the ranks on his own merit, and I just don't know why they take that away from him. And what's the payoff even? Like, what does Azula get from advancing Zhao other than fucking with her brother? Which she does plenty in the cartoon anyway. I can actually answer this, I suppose. What she gets out of it is being able to feel like she's actually impacting the world around her, since she can't leave the palace yet. But I just don't get that. If she can't leave the palace, why try to force her into this story? She's obviously a non-player right now. Everything she's doing could be done without her. Let's just roll on about Azula. She's angry in the show. Azula's personality in the cartoon was one of complete control, so much so that she obsessed about it. One hair out of place. I can even prove this actually. In episode 9 of book 2, Iroh details what lightning actually is, a pure expression of fire, done without rage or emotion. Only a select few firebenders can separate the positive and negative energies to produce it. And so Azula would not be able to produce lightning if she wasn't in complete obsessive control over herself. Which, oh no. Which means we're not going to be getting lightning in the show. How can we with Azula how she is now? Also consider the following. The first training we see Azula do in the show is archery, for some reason. But in the cartoon, the first training we see her do is shooting fucking lightning, an ability unseen in the cartoon up until this point. It was new and exciting, and only she could do it. I'll refer Azula to what Iroh says to Zuko about being unable to produce lightning.
You will not be able to master lightning until you have dealt with the turmoil inside you.
Go on, girl, deal with your turmoil. Speaking of dealing with her turmoil, I'm gonna put this down now. That should be easy since May is apparently a fucking therapist. I've noticed this trend in media as well. Young characters being way beyond their years and the ability to ascertain a certain situation. You know why children have meltdowns? It's because they're unable to process the emotions properly. And so they just yell and scream. It can sometimes happen if a child's happy even. But with May just here to spell out that, hey, BT dubs, your anger towards your trainer isn't actually about your trainer. She should be a psychopath in no time with mastery of her emotions like that. Also, another point for the show just spelling out what's happening instead of letting the audiences figure it out. It's hard to tell if May would have been this perceptive since her time in the cartoon was so limited. She was also able to prescribe Ty Lee's psychological conditions on the beach, but it feels like a Flanderization to take this one instance of her picking apart her friend and turning it into an ongoing thing. Let's keep this train going of everybody being a therapist and talk about the Fox. The Fox calls Sokka out for making jokes when he doesn't want to talk about something. Everyone's a therapist apparently. A bad one at that, because like, when? Sokka is dry as shit in the show compared to the cartoon, and even when he is, it's not really to avoid stuff. The only example I can point to of Sokka using comedy to deflect something he doesn't want to talk about is in the Cave of Two Lovers with Katara. But he did talk about his feelings in that moment, and he wasn't using comedy to avoid it. Alternatively, when he named the doll of that little girl, he maybe didn't want to talk about the forest, but like, I'm splitting hairs here to find examples. The Fox just wants so badly to make Sokka have a deep flaw that he just doesn't have, cartoon or show. So why do this? I mentioned earlier that the show takes a specific effort to give Sokka more depth and story, so this is likely a result of that. Only problem here is that they're trying to make a problem out of something that doesn't exist. You can't just say that a character is doing something or has a problem when he actually doesn't. I can't just say that Aang is a kleptomaniac because he's not. But no one told the writers this, I guess, and thus Sokka deflects with comedy. Brilliant. Ultimately, this conversation shouldn't even be happening because why is Sokka here? Why is Katara here? Why are these two in the spirit world? Zhao mentions in the Siege of the North that he's heard of Iroh's journeys into the spirit world, which we're supposed to view as incredibly impressive. I mean, by that point in the cartoon, no one has visited the spirit world willingly except the Avatar. But it makes it significantly less impressive if all he had to do was sit in the fucking vicinity of a meditating monk to cross over. Which also, the show ties the spirit world into a physical location, not the time of year. I've mentioned it before, but I would be damn curious to find out what about the location is so spiritual. Can we just have an earthbender pick it up and take it with them? Fuck it, can we just have Team Avatar lug the Kyoshi statue with them whenever they go and to commune with her at will? It's a stupid question, but tell me what's wrong with it. Oh, it's impractical. Bro, Kyoshi created tectonic plates. I don't care how heavy that statue is. I'm never giving up that power if I was at war. And this is the problem with tying the spirit energy to a location rather than a time of year. You can write off Aang as having such immense power since he can only access that power at certain times of the year, which if you can't tell, I think is much better. I think they made this change because they wanted to do something the audience wouldn't expect, or change up a familiar formula. Or to be rude, maybe they just didn't think it through. I don't fucking know. Take it up with Netflix. Now let's talk a bit more broadly about the spirit world itself. Aang tells Team Avatar about how it's his responsibility to help people, even if he needs to get to the North Pole. I hate this so much. This seems like such a little thing to throw a fit over, but Aang never needed to justify helping people in the cartoon. Yes, they were in a rush, but that never stopped them from helping people who needed it, especially in a situation like this where only the Avatar can solve this problem. This isn't even mentioning all the times that Team Avatar just stops somewhere for fun or to catch a break for a minute, which they also don't do in the show. This is like an actual people are gonna die situation. And on top of all of that, even in and of itself, it contradicts that detail we get a little bit later about the Avatar doing things like the Great Divide and the waterbending scroll and the fortune teller. Like, we're talking within its own universe. If in this universe, Aang is already doing things like saving a village from a volcano, why the fuck would he have to justify helping a village to Sokka of all people? In that story, it was Sokka who had to convince Aang that the village would be destroyed. Ooh, calm down, Lance. Can you see why this hurts character so much? Can you see why this doesn't make sense? Am I crazy? Let's actually talk about that though. It's no secret that the cartoon had things happen between the episodes. There are even times that Sokka mentions other smaller adventures that the team has been on that we don't get to see on screen. I'm fine with that. In theory, without unlimited runtime, having mention of other references and adventures isn't a bad thing. My problem becomes more so with these being things that we did see. We saw Aang fight the canyon crawlers. We saw them save the village in the cartoon. They totally could have showed this stuff. I mean, fuck, I would have even taken a montage. And the spiteful part of me is thinking, they're mentioning it so that we can remember it, so that the audience can fill in the blanks. They don't want to put in the work of showing Aang resolving conflict, but they want us to know that he does, and mention things that we vaguely remember. But that goes back to the in-show consistency. Why is Aang feeling like he has to justify helping people? Shouldn't he just tell Katara, oh yeah, you know, it's like that time we saved the village from the volcano. Okay, let's move the fuck on. The spirit world looks boring. Damn it, I thought I'd get to move on to something cooler. The spirit world in the show just looks like an enchanted forest. The cartoon had like this swamp aesthetic with inhuman inhabitants and nonsensical geography. It was imaginative. I could probably pin why they were trying to get the spirit world to look so familiar to the real world. They entered through a forest, so they probably wanted to keep the forest aesthetic. I just think it's lazy. So now that we're in the spirit world, let's talk about each character's journey. Starting in order with Katara. I don't know if it was the desire to be more adult, but I just have this feeling that the writers couldn't wait to show off the southern raiders in Katara's village. Like, they were probably wringing their hands going, yes, this scene will be awesome in live action. And you know what? It wasn't. Once the attack actually starts, we barely see any of it. No resistance, no fighting, not like our Chad Sokka in the show. This dude was fighting back as a child. All culminating in Kaya getting murdered, not only in front of Katara's eyes, but in ours. Restraint is spelled R-E-S. The cartoon was incredibly careful about this scene. Not only did they avoid showing it, they somehow made it sadder. They didn't make me gasp like the show did, but they made me feel, and that's harder, I think.
I'm afraid I'm not taking prisoners today.
That hurts my soul, dude, even if I knew it was coming. Like, what did I think he would say? We know she dies. When you know the death of a character is coming and you can can still feel something about it. They did something right. It's also interesting that, broadly speaking, Kaya gets more character development in Katara's memory than she ever did in the cartoon. All while not even mentioning her name. Yep, Kaya is from the cartoon, Katara's mother is from the show. It's details like that that make me feel like they just don't really care about the details. They're trying to be showy and dramatic, and the result is that they miss things. This has been an ongoing problem, so I won't harp on it. I think the why is just simply for the shock value. And I think the character development is because that was missing from the cartoon, and they maybe wanted to show that Katara's mother didn't just sacrifice for the village, but for Katara too. There's also one other element of this scene that I want to talk about, Sokka. In the cartoon, Katara's mother was also Sokka's mother. The two were siblings. The death of Kaya hurt Sokka just as much as it hurt Katara. But the show, portraying this as Katara's trauma, which, I mean, it was, she literally saw it, ignores the fact that Sokka was scarred by this event as well. And with that said, let's talk about Sokka's journey. Sokka's memories are about getting dunked on by his father and then the village. I am so tired about talking about how different these damn characters are. Okay, so Sokka was actually a capable leader in the cartoon, so I'm convinced this change was for two reasons. Firstly is actually the same reason that they had Katara and Sokka in the spirit world to begin with. They wanted to tell backstories and let them get lost in despair. Secondly is because they're still trying to do more work with Sokka's arc, and getting dunked on by his father is the next step in that. We'll wrap that up at the end of his arc, I guess, but this needed to happen since apparently there were no other examples of Sokka having disappointing moments. Don't pay attention to the B-roll I'm gonna show of Sokka feeling inadequate for not being a bender, or the B-roll I'm showing of Sokka being insecure about being a leader next to Jet, or the B-roll I'm putting of Sokka feeling sick and insecure about being accepted by his Water Tribe companion. There really was nothing they could have done to give Sokka a down moment except have his father dunk on him. Nothing at all. Speaking of Sokka's Water Tribe companions, let's talk about Bato really quick. Bato of the Water Tribe was the namesake of episode 15, and he played a very specific role. By this point in the cartoon, Sokka and Katara hadn't seen their home all season, and Bato being left behind by his tribe brothers because he was injured allowed them a little bit of reprieve and excitement to engage with their culture again. I suppose, in the strictest of sense, Bato is fulfilling the same role here as he is in the show. But in the show, it's all a hallucination, so I don't think it counts in the same way. Especially because Bato isn't the primary focus of Sokka's flashback, he's an accent piece. Yet another, hey look, remember that guy? Let's actually continue on that train because we have a lot of, hey, remember this guy moments? Let's start with Wan Shi Tong. In the cartoon, it was his library.
Wan Shi Tong's library.
Cultivating books and knowledge from all over the world. The show relegated him to being a cameo. Like, for fucking what? Like, why isn't he in his library? Also, why is he in the spirit world? Shouldn't he be in the physical world watching over his library? And if he is going to be in the spirit world, why is he here? Like, right here, so close to the Heibai spirit. Do you think these two smoke bowls together? His existence is solely because he's a recognizable character, and I hate that they continually relegate characters to that role. Which brings me to June. She's also a casualty of the part 1, part 2 structuring of this episode. This episode serves as her introduction, and she doesn't really do anything yet. So even though she's in the next episode, I'm absolutely pointing out that this is yet another example of, oh shit, remember this character? So now let's talk about her introduction specifically. For the most part, it's similar to the cartoon, except they don't explain that the Shirshu can track people based on their scent. Even if they do throw us a bone next episode, the explanation is basically nothing. The only way I would consider this moment not a, wow, remember this character kind of moment is if they actually introduce the damn characters. And as it stands, they only introduce one half of June. Nyla and June were inseparable. You wouldn't need or want to pull them apart. They work together. And so as far as I'm concerned, this introduction is a failure in the same way that Appa's introduction was a failure. Do you remember the episode with June and Nyla in it? Appa fucking fights it. Can you see show Appa and show Nyla fighting? Because I can't. I wish I could, but they're not developed. We don't care about them because the show doesn't care about them. So whatever, forget Nyla for a second. Let's talk about June. Night and day with how she's introduced. Zuko demands she pay for his ship, and holding coins, she says she's short on cash.
Drinks on me!
You know, a personality. She fulfills her purpose in the show of being, you know, a bounty hunter, but that's kinda it. She's super one note and super flat for a character with such an interesting design, so that's disappointing. There is another moment of June's character that I did mention briefly. In the show, she hits on Iroh, but in the cartoon, it's Iroh who hits on her. Specifically at the end, when Iroh pretends to be paralyzed so June can rest on him. Look guys, good people can do sketchy things sometimes. Humans are complex. He did a bad thing in a sea of good things. Everyone makes mistakes. But if you think it's okay, bro, just keep it to yourself. Don't self-report yourself like that. So this element specifically, I can see being an easy change, especially because Iroh is neither receptive nor repulsed by her advances. It turns the dynamic into something a bit more neutral. Also on the topic of removing agency, June just straight up walks into them. In the cartoon, she had two introductions actually. One as a bounty hunter, and a capable one at that, and one as a person. Zuko and Iroh sought her out after she was done bounty hunting because they thought she could help him. In case anyone is unclear on what agency means, it's the ability to make choices and affect the outcome. By having June introduced this way, how did Zuko and Iroh affect the story? She serves herself up on a platter for these boys. So why change this? Bro, at this point I'm convinced it's because the writers hate me. It's more likely that they're trying to cram too much into a short amount of time, which I wouldn't be so mad about if the ideas they were going for didn't suck. Katara and Sokka's time in the spirit world is to show off that Ko, the face stealer, wants to eat them. To clarify, the face stealer wants to devour the souls of our protagonists. Okay. He does that by making them give in to despair, which is why we got our sad flashbacks. Okay. Every step of this just fucking sucks. It feels like filler. Like, what lesson or interesting idea is being presented with this? Ko was never meant to be the villain of the story, and yet here we are, devoting all of Aang's resources to saving his friends for them. Now let's talk about Ko, actually. Ko the Face Stealer was meant to be an accent piece to the spirit world, an interesting and weird spirit in an interesting and weird world. But even with him being an accent piece, the cartoon showed him a great deal of respect. He steals faces, so they showed a monkey without a face. It's really not that fucking hard. I don't know why the show never seemed to have anybody with their face removed. That may be because he doesn't steal faces anymore. He devours souls. So change his name to Ko the Soul Eater. Or even better, just make this a new fucking spirit. This doesn't need to be Ko specifically. To me, this shows a serious lack of confidence from the writers. If you don't know the content you're adapting well enough to come up with new ideas for it, you shouldn't be adapting the old content. Ko is Ko in name only. He acts nothing like the spirit from the cartoon. So the question becomes, as always, why did they do this? Well, I think they changed Ko because they needed to increase the stakes and make the spirit journey for Sokka and Katara one they could be deadly. I'll remind you, they didn't need to come. They didn't need to be in the spirit world. They weren't in the cartoon. But whatever, they're here. So the writers needed to make it deadly for them, so endanger their souls. The fact that it's Ko is seriously only because people recognize him from the cartoon. You can let me know in the comments, but if the same storyline was given to a new spirit with a new name and design, would you really care? Would you be upset that Ko isn't in the story if it was done right? If this new character was cool, I don't think anyone would miss Ko. In the cartoon, there's also this prelude to actually meeting Ko given by Roku. Roku continues to be like the main presence for the Avatar spirit, as the last fully realized Avatar before Aang. I don't know why the show isn't giving him that level of importance. The reason he's in the story in the first place is because apparently he tangled with Ko the Face Stealer. That's it, like no other reason. We're gonna seek out Roku and the Fire Nation, not because like he literally grew up with Fire Lord Sozin, not because he stopped his friend from starting the war 25 years early and knows the burdens of keeping peace in a world riddled by war, but because Ko the Face Stealer of all people kidnapped his friends. You can see the cracks, right? The other casualty of having Roku more removed from the story is that it excludes his dragon. In case that awesomeness didn't hit you, Avatar Roku owned a fucking dragon as his animal guide. I don't think I need to justify why having a dragon is cool, but funnily enough, he actually plays a vital role in helping Aang realize how to commune with spirits, and about traveling in the spirit world in general. It's just little details like this that I wish the show had emphasized more. Aang solves the Heibai problem basically by accident. Bro plants a tree and says bye. And speaking of Aang, there's just one more part of this episode left. Aang's spirit world journey is different than his friends, and the explanation is that he's the Avatar. I am a-okay with that. What I'm less okay with is Aang's inability to get over his mentor Monk Gyatso. Aang is still brooding about losing him even before they go into the spirit world. Like, I get it. It's your entire culture. But this kind of betrays the kindness that the cartoon was aiming for. The whole point of visiting the Southern Air Temple was so that Aang could move on and get closure, finding acceptance in his new family of Katara and Sokka. And if that wasn't enough, he had the storm to finish fleshing out any feelings of regret he had for running away. After the storm, Gyatso isn't even mentioned of any note until Aang meets the Guru at the end of Book 2. It seems to me like Gyatso is putting in serious work to hold Aang back from committing himself to his new family. So why did the show make this change? I am open to taking suggestions. It might have something to do with Gyatso being a small part of the cartoon and the show wanting to amplify him, or maybe the show wanted to show Aang's culture a little bit more. But like, if you want more of Aang's culture, just go watch Legend of Korra. Oh, right, and this doesn't even address that Gyatso is actually alive, or having reached enlightenment. I had already gone over this a little bit, but it can't just be a memory of Gyatso. So our boy lived in a way, I guess. Instead of screaming about the show, allow me to counterexample with something from Star Wars. Y'all familiar with Force Ghosts? Do you know why there weren't a bajillion Force Ghosts running around everywhere throughout the galaxy? Because that would be overpowered, and that would make death pointless. So they instead only gave the ability to specific people who underwent specific training, and Anakin. The point I'm trying to make here is that when a character can't die, it ruins the stakes of the entire medium. Characters like Deadpool can get away with it because A, they still felt pain, and B, the people around them can still die. And that can sometimes be worse than actually dying themselves. All of this to say, I think Gyatso being able to commune with Aang at all kind of undermines the death of the Airbenders, and the tremendous burden that puts on Aang. So why do this? Well, I think the show wanted to introduce Gyatso's conscience cleaning service. That's right, for just one trip to the spirit world and 2 of your best friends, you too can be forgiven for surviving the genocide of your people. It feels strange to me, but I think the writers had a problem with Aang having this unresolved part of his character. Only problem is that it's not unresolved forever. In the cartoon, Aang gets to resolve this trauma with the Guru in episode 19 of Book 2. Aang cries! I cry! It's cute as fuck! Except it's in Book 2. So fuck the purpose and build up to all that. We gotta get that shit plugged into season 1 because otherwise people might have to wait for Aang to heal. Wouldn't want that. Alright y'all, almost done. A few housekeeping items. In the cartoon, to exit the spirit world, you needed to reconnect your spirit to your body, or under very specific circumstances like being in a place of spiritual energy like the Spirit Oasis, your spirit would guide you. But even in the Spirit Oasis example, Aang was a spirit who got moved to his body. He didn't just wake up. I think the show omits this complication because ew, icky complications. Can't things just be simple? Okay, I'm definitely being rude here, but I feel like I've given the show a lot of leeway for the shortcuts it's making, and I'm kind of over it. Let's talk about Aang's attempted departure to Crescent Island in both mediums. In the show, Katara and Sokka are indisposed, so that leaves the most underdeveloped Appa you've ever seen, and Momo. In the cartoon, he attempts to take Appa and Momo, leaving Katara and Sokka in the village, because he's worried about it being too dangerous. His reasoning is the same. Aside from some added complications of Sokka and Katara being indisposed, this is actually remarkably close to the cartoon. Except that in the show, he gets away with it. In the cartoon, his friends refuse to let him go alone. I've said it before, the friendship between Team Avatar is the glue that holds the entire show together. The show decides it's better than that, so it once again gives this journey for Team Avatar exclusively to Aang. And last detail, anyone remember what happened the last time Aang tried to glide to the Fire Nation? Cause yeah, I do. Turns out gliding requires airbending, and airbending non-stop for that long of a distance can be fucking tiring. If only Aang had a mode of transportation to get him from place to place without being so tired. This honestly just proves my inside thoughts that Appa was only added to the story as a transport device. Bro is a bust, not a character. Here's a quick montage of Appa having personality from the cartoon, just in case you think I'm making too big a deal out of this. This episode starts with Iroh narrating. I understand it's sometimes unavoidable, and sometimes it adds to the story, but this is a comparison video, so I gotta make note of it. There's not a single episode in the cartoon that has a bona fide narration. The only thing that kinda comes to mind is Iroh narrating the Agni Kai that Zuko had with his father in episode 12. Or Roku and Sozin explaining to Zuko and Aang their stories, but that's kind of all I got. Anyway, we start the episode with Iroh helping Zuko get dressed for his War Council meeting. This is a remix from the cartoon. There isn't a scene specifically of Zuko getting dressed, but this scene is taken from when Zuko is already dressed, trying to enter the war meeting and being stopped by the guards. His uncle tells him he's not missing anything, and Zuko talks him into letting him inside anyway. The dialogue is all different, but the spirit of it is the same. In the show, Zuko says that his father welcomes new ideas, and Iroh says he shouldn't test that. But in the cartoon, Iroh instead is a bit more stern and tells Zuko that he must promise not to speak, as the old folks are sensitive. The scene transitions with Zuko walking into the camera and walking out with his scar. Okay, I unironically love this transition. He's framed really nicely here. I really like it. Zhao taking command of Zuko's ship and crew is from the cartoon actually, episode 18, but he doesn't wave it in front of his face that he's an admiral. There isn't actually a scene where Zhao tells Zuko that he's been promoted. In the cartoon, Zhao is, let's say, professionally a dick, where in the show, he's a bit more petty. It's also comparing these two scenes that I noticed that Zhao is much shorter than Zuko in the show. We love a short king, don't worry. I just noticed because he's like a full head taller than him in the cartoon. Zhao also, again very dickishly, tells Zuko that he expects his help in finding the Avatar, but in the cartoon he's absolutely disinterested, even saying he doesn't want Zuko getting in his way again, instead inviting Iroh. Getting in the way again reminds me, let's talk about the position of this scene more broadly. In the show, this is in episode 6 of 8. In the cartoon, it's in episode 18 of 20. That doesn't seem like such a huge disparity, but the show is significantly lacking behind in development. The getting in the way that he's referring to is the capture of the Avatar at Roku's shrine, which happens in episode 8, but in the show, it happens later this episode. There's also the Blue Spirit issue, which happened in episode 13, so Zhao has this interaction with Zuko about it. Except in the show, that's also happening in this episode. So if they wanted to keep it more accurate to the order of the cartoon, they could have put this scene at the end of the episode and had it line up a little closer. I'll talk about why they didn't later. Zuko and Iroh plead with the crew about loyalty, but in the cartoon, Zuko's attitude is more so, good riddance, traitors. And lastly, before he leaves, Iroh tells Lieutenant G that Zuko has sacrificed more than he can ever know, which sounds almost guilt-trippy. The cartoon Iroh has much more of a compassionate approach towards telling the crew the story of Zuko's banishment. And later in the show, Iroh even takes insults about Zuko in stride.
Aang, you go with Iroh to look for Katara and the Angry Jerk. No offense.
None taken.
Next, Aang glides to Crescent Island. I've already talked about why this is stupid, so let's move on. Notably, the cartoon actually has a chunk of this episode blocked out for the journey, since actually going into the Fire Nation is a crazy bad idea. Team Avatar nearly gets shot down by a Fire Navy blockade on their way in, but in the show it's just a quick flight I guess, barely an inconvenience. When they do arrive, they park Appa off the path and enter the temple on foot, thinking it's been abandoned. The show omits all this world building because Aang doesn't even have Momo to talk to. Bro just went by himself. I do have to say though that the show actually has this neat world building detail where it has a picture of Ozai in the temple. An actually good example of showing and not telling that the temple serves the Fire Lord. Genuinely good job. I'm trying the positive reinforcement thing, you know, reward the good behavior. Good job, show. Good job, little guy. In the show, Aang approaches the fire sages, but in the cartoon, the sages approach him.
I'm the Avatar.
We know.
Is directly taken from the cartoon. In the cartoon, there's a bit more running away that happens, but the friendly fire sage finding them is the next beat in both mediums. He grabs Aang in the show, but he has to pursue him to prove that he's not an enemy in the cartoon. The secret door activated by firebending is true in both mediums as well. Well done. Now, small interlude to show June giving Nyla the Avatar's scent, from a scrap of clothing, I guess. Aang's costume looks fine to me, I don't know. But you know what I do know? Getting the avatars sent from a random scrap of clothing on a random tree in a random forest is simple. You know what it took to get the avatars sent in the cartoon? Zuko had to chase Team Avatar and follow them to a prison break they orchestrated to obtain Katara's necklace. They had June follow Katara to get to Aang, and upon finding them, seeks out the avatars sent from a piece of paper he hid from them in that episode. It made sense, but it's definitely more complicated than what the show gives us. Anyway, the friendly fire sage names himself as Shaiyu, and he leads Aang to the Roku Shrine. So this is actually kind of weird, but Shaiyu doesn't introduce himself in the cartoon. When Aang emerges from being Roku, he asks where's Shaiyu, but the man actually never introduces himself. Then, when all the fire sages are detained by Zhao, one of them again drops Shaiyu's name to cement who it is. But yeah, there's never actually a part where he says my name is Shaiyu. Also, the tunnels that he takes in the cartoon don't directly lead them to the shrine, but instead to the outside of the chamber. In the cartoon, there's this other challenge about having to trick the sages into opening the doors, because only a fully realized avatar can enter the chamber. That, or 5 firebenders. Anyway, Shaiyu gives Aang the tour, making mention that his grandfather gathered all the shelf relics. In the cartoon, Shaiyu's grandfather is mentioned, except it's in the context that he actually knew Avatar Roku. Shaiyu then steps outside the chamber to hold off the other sages while Aang communes with Roku. They then murder him along with the rest of the non-believers. So, this doesn't happen in the cartoon. Firstly, yeah, it's a kid's show, so it's not just gonna incinerate a guy. But secondly, they didn't need to. Zhao and his firebenders captured Katara, Sokka, and Shaiyu and tied them to one of the posts as Aang entered. They were prisoners, perhaps leverage for Aang to eventually exit the chambers. After Roku destroys the temple, Shaiyu and the other sages are taken to the Fire Lord, so Shaiyu definitely doesn't die in the cartoon, at least not on screen. So Aang communes with Roku at his shrine. In the cartoon, he enters the shrine early and has to wait for the light of the solstice to hit Roku's eyes. In the show, we ain't here for the solstice, so calm me nuts. Roku pulls a little prank on Aang, which isn't really like his cartoon counterpart. In the cartoon, Aang does bow to Roku, but it's not because he's told to, it's because he's a polite boy. In the cartoon, Roku is much more stoic and serious, since Aang was much more of the
incurable prankster?
Even though it's not like the cartoon, I kinda like this change actually. We'll talk about it more in the next section, but first, let's talk about what the scene was in the cartoon. In the cartoon, Roku sent his dragon to find Aang and show him the temple because he needed to warn him about the return of Sozin's Comet, and how Fire Lord Ozai would use it to end the war with the Fire Nation on top. It was in the beginning of the series, episode 8, and it pressed on the gas the importance of learning all 4 elements and ending the war before it was too late. Since Aang's friends are imprisoned by Ko, and that's kind of why he sought out Roku, the ticking clock is never put on. So with that groundwork laid, let's now talk about the content of their conversation in the show. Firstly, the line of "What took you so long?" is 1-to-1 with the cartoon, so great job. All downhill from here though. Let's start with the role of the Avatar. In the cartoon, Roku is the first Avatar spirit that Aang speaks to, so Roku's deference to Kyoshi's wisdom is exclusive to the show. But when Roku does talk about what his own vision for what the Avatar is supposed to be, he uses the word diplomat. Far be it from me to say that the Avatar shouldn't be a diplomat, but it probably wouldn't be Roku telling Aang that. In the cartoon, Roku offers wisdom to Aang in the finale, recapping that if he was more decisive, he could have stopped the war before it began. Stopped meaning killed here. So I just think it's kind of odd that Roku, who kind of accidentally let the war begin, would tell Aang that he can stop the war diplomatically. Immediately after this, Aang talks to Roku about Ko, and how he's stolen his friends. Since Ko isn't actually a predatory spirit in the cartoon, this conversation doesn't happen. Although there technically is a conversation between these two before Aang meets Ko, where Roku tells him who he is. The overlap between these two conversations is that Roku tells Aang how to deal with him, although the show has Roku basically give Aang the answer while the cartoon is more of a guide. So let's talk specifics. Roku tells Aang that he's once tangled with Ko, and stole a totem of the Mother of Faces, who is Ko's mother. Roku never tangled with Ko in the cartoon, only Avatar Karuk. Now, the Mother of Faces is a canon character, but she was never in the Avatar cartoon. Don't worry, she wasn't in Legend of Korra either. She's actually found in the most popular Avatar comic called The Search. To give the quickest summary possible, after the events of the cartoon, Team Avatar and Zuko set out to find his mother, and they come across the Mother of Faces, who gave Ursa a new identity. She divulges that Ko is her son in page 55 of part 3 of that comic. So she is a character and she is his mother, but we don't have any moving media of her, just comic panels. By the way, it's not really a good comic, so you don't have to read it. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but I was bored. Anyway, Roku leaves Aang with a warning that his friends can be a liability since the Avatar has to make impossible choices. Okay, so this is very unlike the Roku that we get to see in the cartoon. For starters, dude had a wife, so that noise about they'll get in the way is just nonsense. But to go pound for pound with the cartoon, there isn't really a time when Roku tells Aang not to get attached to his friends. The only attachment query we have is with the Guru, who teaches Aang to unlock the Avatar state, and he tells Aang that he must let go of Katara to unlock the Thought Chakra. But other than that, no one tells him to abandon his friends, as again, they were the glue that held the show together. So Aang leaves his conversation with Roku and now has to begin his new adventure of finding the MacGuffin statue to save his friends. Alright, so first he's gotta figure out where it is before he goes and gets it. If it's really far, he'd have to go back and get Appa, and then he'd have to trade or buy or fight somebody for it. Ooh, that could be really interesting since Aang just talked to Roku about being a diplomat. Wait, no, fuck all that noise, that sounds really complicated. The statue is actually on the shelf right next to him. How convenient. Aang then exits the shrine to see all the sages dead on the floor. Well, maybe dead. We talked about the Shirshu in the show. Nyla and June then come up from behind Aang, growl at him, and paralyze him as well. Fuck me. Okay, one at a time. Aang leaves leaving the shrine in the cartoon calls for a hastier exit, since Roku senses danger at the temple and channels his energy through Aang to save his friends. Weird that he couldn't sense that danger in the show, I guess. The shrine sinks into the volcano, and so Team Avatar leave on Appa in a hurry. Next, the Shearshu vision looks very different. In the cartoon, it follows sense, but in the show, it looks more like the seismic sense that Toph has. Strange design choice, but whatever. Aang never actually gets paralyzed in the cartoon. Katara, Sokka, Zuko, and even June do, but Aang specifically avoids it. This is because his reflexes in the cartoon were insane. Aang is an airbender, and his mobility is off the fucking charts. So the fact that he turned around, saw Nyla growl, and still got thwipped by the tongue is laughable at best, awful at worst. Anyway, he wakes up in a cave, which all of this scenario is a show exclusive since Aang never got captured by June. She monologues to him about how the world is fine the way it is, which is a sentiment entirely exclusive to the show. There's not a single damn person in the cartoon happy about the state of the world. Okay, look at this. This shit looks like it's from a play. Enter Zuko and Iroh from stage right. Like, fuck me, man. I don't know why it looks so goofy. It's probably just because, like, why are they here? They're just here now. Iroh pays her, which we never actually see in the cartoon, and then Zuko and his uncle transport the Avatar by themselves with an ostrich horse cart since Zhao took their crew. Aang pleads with Zuko to let him go temporarily to save his friends, then calls him cruel when he says no. There was only one time in the cartoon where Zuko had control of the Avatar other than the pilot, and that's in the finale of Book 1, except Aang was unconscious the entire time, and when he did wake up, his friends immediately saved him. Zuko then flashes back to the war meeting in his youth. Quick visual difference, in the cartoon, Zuko was sitting at the seat of the table closest to the Fire Lord, but in the show, he's sitting furthest from him. Ozai asks Zuko what he would do in this war scenario, which already is extremely unlike the cartoon. At least this point of the cartoon. Zuko doesn't have an answer, and his father is disappointed in him, which may be a reference to episode 7 of Book 2. Zuko flashes back to him and Azula showing off for Fire Lord Azulon, and Azula performs well, but Zuko botches it. Now, in the cartoon, Zuko was burned and banished specifically for speaking out when it wasn't his place. The way the show does this enables Zuko to actually have a dialogue with the general who suggests sacrificing the battalion. In the cartoon, the sheer idea of sacrificing the Fire Nation soldiers who care about their country is enough for Zuko to yell out, disrespecting the entire meeting. But in the show, he even has a hushed conversation with the general about it. Zuko raises his voice a bit after this conversation, which Ozai shuts down, demanding an Agni Kai. In the cartoon, the Agni Kai came because of the disrespect shown, but the show kind of makes it seem like this is kind of just how you resolve disagreements. Anyway, flashback over, Zuko and Iroh get ambushed by Zhao and the other firebenders. Going in defiance of Zhao to capture the Avatar is actually an idea taken from the cartoon. Once it's revealed that Team Avatar is going into Fire Nation territory, it technically is in violation of his banishment to enter the territory to chase him. Zhao captures him as a traitor during this encounter. However, in the cartoon, both Zuko and Team Avatar escape and continue on with the status quo. But the show uses this as the bridge to when Zhao has the Avatar held captive, which happens in episode 13, The Blue Spirit. Except it's only the Yuyan archers who capture him. No other firebenders are required. The brag in the show is that
they can shoot the wings off a glowfly from 1,000 paces.
But the same brag in the cartoon is
the Yuyan can pin a fly to a tree from 100 yards away without killing it.
Very similar, even if it's not exact. In the cartoon, when Zhao captures Zuko, he plans on taking him prisoner along with Team Avatar. But in the show, he just lets him go, even if he is in defiance of his orders. In the show, he tells Zuko that he's taking Aang to Pao Hai Stronghold, and between Zhao and Iroh, they make the place sound absolutely impossible to break into. In the cartoon, even though Zhao never tells Zuko where he's taking Aang, Zuko has already broken into Pao Hai, so it can't be that impenetrable. The cartoon doesn't really make a big deal about the fortifications. There's also this interesting detail that Pao Hai is inside the Fire Nation borders, which, according to this map, no it ain't, Lamau. Unless the village that the fortune teller was from is also Fire Nation controlled, because they are much closer to the mainland than Pao Hai is. But they had earthbenders in that village, so I doubt it. Come on, show, don't make me take points away for messing up the geography. I was really appreciating your dedication to it. Well, wait, hold on, I might have messed this up depending on what map we use. This might be my fault. If it's not, I'm gonna be mad. Although, if I'm gonna be nitpicky about it, the next shot is a drone shot where you can clearly see a river leading into the front of Pao Hai Stronghold, which would match this river between the two parts of the continent. If it's over on the left side, what river is this? Okay, I'm thinking way more about the geographical location of Pao Hai Stronghold than anybody in the history of anything. Let's just move on. We smash cut to Aang in chains, which is 1-to-1 from the cartoon as well, so great job. The tiniest of visual differences is that in the show, his legs are chained to the same pillar as his arms, but in the cartoon, they're chained to the floor. The next beat is Zhao entering with a stenographer to draft a letter to Fire Lord Ozai. He does this in the cartoon, but it's actually towards the end of their adventure, after Zuko has already freed him. He has a conversation with Aang immediately after they jump cut, but the stenographer isn't present. Zhao's conversation in the cartoon centers much more around Aang's abilities as opposed to the cartoon, where he's got a big ego about knowing if the Avatar has ever even heard of him before. Aang doesn't plead with Zhao in the cartoon. Bro straight up says, take these chains off and we'll throw down. What a fucking Chad. Zhao's threat that they won't kill Aang, just barely keep him alive, is taken from the cartoon though, which is cool. Although there is this moment where Aang looks fucking terrified in the show, but in the cartoon, dude was not only cool under pressure, he was ready to throw down. Aang blows wind at Zhao in both mediums, stumbling him in the show, but flipping him up on his head in the cartoon.
Blow all the wind you want.
It won't change your fate.
Is almost 1-to-1 in both mediums. Nice there. Next we get Zhao's speech at Pao Hai Stronghold. Time to get pedantic about the words again. Luckily, the first few sentences are 1-to-1 exactly, up until he says,
The Avatar
So pretty dope. In the cartoon, he says that the Avatar is now his prisoner, but in the show, he says we. So that's interesting. The rest of the speech doesn't really match at all. He talks in the cartoon about how Sozin's comet is returning, but that's a reveal for the end of the season in the show. And in the show, he says that they're going to celebrate, but he doesn't say anything about that in the cartoon. There's also this little smile in the end of his speech in the show that I'll be talking about later too. Done with the words now. Broad strokes. Zhao's speech is like an actual speech in the cartoon, while it's more of a conversation in the show, getting a little loud towards the end. Also, the speech is given before Zuko breaks into the compound in the show, but after he's already on the compound in the cartoon. I'd also like to talk very briefly about the editing for the Blue Spirit. The cartoon didn't often do jump cuts, but the Blue Spirit is the exception. This was powerful as it was unique to this one character. In case anyone was unaware, a jump cut is having a continuous shot have a jump in the edit, to either make it appear forward, backwards, closer, or farther away in the frame. This, accompanied by his signature instrumental cue, was the mark of the Blue Spirit in the cartoon. The show seems to forego this iconic part of the character, instead opting for more traditional camera angles for him, which, because they're not jump cutting, makes it harder to include the music cues, and so they just disinclude them. Also, let's talk visually about the masks really quick. The two are actually extremely similar, with the show even adding in a bit more detail on the rounded parts of the nose. However, it overextends the eyebrows, making the mask look even angrier in the show than it does in the cartoon. Now, actually entering the stronghold. The cartoon shows that Zuko dug a little hole in the ground so he could latch onto the carriage as it went over him, but in the show, he's on the underside of it with no explanation of how he got there. The guards are much more talkative in the show, specifically talking about the celebration, which I already said isn't in the cartoon. The visual show of the guard checking the underside of the carriage is a one-shot in the cartoon, but they use editing tricks in the show. Also, another visual difference, the cartoon has the cart pulled by this rhino mule thing, kind of looks like both, but the show has it pulled by an ostrich horse. The next shot of the camera panning up to show the large tower is actually one-to-one with the cartoon, so that's neat. In the show, it's interrupted by showing the Blue Spirit in the back of the cart, but in the cartoon, they showed that immediately after they showed the underside was clear. And now, let's get really specific. The cartoon and the show are really similar in the fight choreography, but there are some noticeable differences. The first beat in both mediums is the helmet rolling towards the 4 guards blocking Aang's door. In the cartoon, 1 guard peels off to investigate. In the show, 2 of them do. Zuko dispatches the first wave off screen in both, and now in the show, he emerges to fight the remaining 2 in front of the door. However, in the cartoon, 2 more guards peel off to investigate, and they find their friend strung up in chains, which Zuko does to him as well. In the cartoon, the last guard tries to grab a horn and sound the alarm. In the show, one of the 2 remaining guards tries to do that as well. Zuko throws a knife at the horn in both mediums, and dispatches the remaining guards off screen in the show, but for the cartoon, he throws a bucket of water on him to douse a fire blast, and trips him with the bucket, tying him up off screen. And in the show, he opens the door and the guard falls forward. And that's the fight. Pretty cool to see it line up as closely as it did. The Blue Spirit rushes towards Aang in both mediums, but in the show, Aang had grown some balls off screen apparently because he just braces for it, while he screams his head off in the cartoon. In both mediums, they are shocked, and the first line is,
"Who are you?"
None of the dialogue matches after that though, but it's inconsequential anyway. Now, continuing the matching, next is the 2 of them sneaking around, followed by Zhao asking the stenographer to send a transcript of his speech to the Fire Lord. The dialogue stops matching after this first line though. In both mediums, his train of thought is interrupted by his dispatched guards, and it continues to the stenographer making a joke about still sending a speech to the Fire Lord anyway. Let's just keep it rolling since they're apparently using the cartoon as storyboards this time. The next beat in both is Zhao announcing that the Avatar has escaped, and noticing Aang and Zuko escaping on the rope that Zuko left. However, in the show, the 2 make it up the wall. In the cartoon, they cut the rope and land on the ground. In the cartoon, they do make it up the wall, but they fight it out on the ground a little bit first. Once they do get up the wall, the overlap continues as they hold off against more soldiers for a moment before the next wave of soldiers attempts to climb the wall with these bendy ladders. Although, quick detour, in the show, Aang and the Blue Spirit seem to do a lot more combo moves, and I would even consider them evenly matched in a way. But in the cartoon, there was a very clear disparity, with Aang often coming in to save him from attacks. Next, the overlap continues as the 2 do their ladder maneuver. In the cartoon, this is thwarted when one firebender lights the ladder on fire. In the show, it's Zhao himself who stops them by hurling a fireball at them, not lighting the ladder. The airbending bubble that Aang makes to cushion their fall is actually taken from the cartoon, except it's from earlier when they fall off the rope. They hit the ground pretty hard in the cartoon at this point. When they land, firebenders try to barbecue them in the cartoon, and only then Zhao steps in saying he needs the Avatar alive. In the show, they don't shoot fire and he says the same thing. In the show, upon hearing this, Zuko seems to make a judgment call about beheading Aang. In the cartoon, this man had not even the slightest hesitation to kill the Avatar as opposed to letting Zhao have him. Aang is very surprised and worried in the show, and in the cartoon, he was worried for sure. But in the cartoon, he seems to understand what the Avatar must live means. There's a lot more frantic energy coming from Zhao in the show than in the cartoon, and a lot more suspense. In the cartoon, he alludes to the Yuyan archers before actually showing them. I mention only for comparison's sake that the Yuyan archer in the show is a woman, but a man in the cartoon. In the cartoon, Zhao's instructions are very clear about knocking out the thief so that he can deliver him to the Fire Lord. In the show, it doesn't seem like he cares very much about him. The archer also nods in the show, but says nothing in the cartoon. It also happens super fast in the show, but in the cartoon, there's this POV of the arrow itself. The slow-mo of the blue spirit getting hit is in both mediums though. The overlap continues again as Aang creates a smoke cover in both mediums. However, he ascertains the blue spirit's identity before he does this in the cartoon, after in the show. In the show, the mask gets chipped, but in the cartoon it's undamaged. The overlap continues as Aang unmasks the blue spirit, plans to run, and decides against abandoning Zuko, saving him by the time the soldiers arrive. However, in the show he leaves his swords behind, but in the cartoon he grabs those as well. In the cartoon, they're actively hiding from the soldiers as they search for them. In the cartoon, they flash to white and we don't see Zuko and Aang until the next morning. And then the overlap stops. In the cartoon, their conversation is extremely short and one-sided, but it actually happens later in the show, so we'll save it for then. Just know that this extra conversation is nowhere in the cartoon. The first real beat of the conversation is about Zuko's diary, which couldn't have been in the cartoon anyway. Zuko and Aang's conversation leads to them smiling at points, so points to their friendship, I guess. I word it that way because in the cartoon, when Aang returns to Team Avatar, Sokka asks him if he made any new friends, and Aang says he doesn't think so. Sad face. Zuko also mentions here that he of course wants to be Fire Lord, which was not ever really a motivation of his in the cartoon. Matter of fact, in the finale, when he asks Iroh to fight the Fire Lord, Zuko asks him to take the throne when this is all over. I mean, I'm pretty sure it doesn't even match Zuko's motivation only in the show. I thought the whole point of him catching the Avatar was to return to his father. Zuko tries to shoot fire at Aang, and Aang parries it, knocking him out. We then flash back to Zuko's Agni Kai. Just as a refresher, we get to see this in the cartoon as Iroh explains to Zuko's crew in The Storm, episode 12, which fittingly is actually the episode right before the Blue Spirit, episode 13. Broad strokes first. Most of the Agni Kai is narrated by Iroh in the cartoon, but not in the show, leading to the reveal that Zuko is fighting Ozai to be given by him directly. The arena itself is very different as well. The show actually kind of has it look like the Agni Kai arena that Zuko fights Zhao in episode 3. The one that Zuko duels his father in is more ceremonial, with stadium seating for the onlookers. The explanation of he slighted Ozai, not the general, is the same in both mediums, but it's explained directly by Ozai in the show and Iroh in the cartoon. In the show, Iroh tries to intervene to protect Zuko, but in the cartoon that doesn't happen. Now, the absolutely mind-bending difference of this Agni Kai is that Zuko actually fights back against his father. In the cartoon, he refused to fight, and likely was scarred worse than if he didn't. So this entire fight sequence is show exclusive. Honestly, the choreography isn't all that bad. Oh my god, Zuko could have won. Okay, sorry, got a little freaked out there. So in the cartoon, Zuko didn't stand a fucking chance.
You think you're brave enough to face me, but you'll only do it during the eclipse.
But in the show, he could have easily won this Agni Kai, or at least inflicted a huge hit on his father, but instead chooses mercy and compassion. Ozai takes advantage of this and throws him down, scarring his face. He tells him that he showed compassion and that makes him weak, but in the cartoon, he specifically has the line of,
You will learn respect, and suffering will be your teacher.
It's chilling. Zuko in the show is squirmy, sure, but he was way more stoic than in the cartoon, where he was bawling his eyes out, kneeling, and shaking. Oh, my poor baby. There's a nice insert of Iroh and Azula reacting to this, which is taken from the cartoon as well, except we don't know she's important yet. In the cartoon, Zhao is also behind Iroh, which is missing from the show. Zuko wakes up in his boat, and Aang now tells him about his friend Kuzan. Except for the setup of Zuko in the boat, this conversation is basically one-to-one with the cartoon, so that's pretty cool. And it also ends a little differently, with Aang leaving really fast in the cartoon, but a little slower in the show. Iroh then tells Lieutenant G about how Zuko actually cares too much, and we flash back to him taking care of Zuko after his duel with his father. Firstly, Iroh explaining Zuko's origin to the crew is from The Storm, like I mentioned, but this flashback is entirely new content, 100% show exclusive. The only reference this could possibly be to the cartoon is in episode 12 of book 3, when Zuko flashes back to his early days of his banishment, and his bandage somewhat matches the one used in the show. In the show flashback, Ozai clarifies that he was dishonored by Zuko showing compassion. Then we actually get to see him get banished, capturing the Avatar as his only way to return. Then we get to the best change in the show.
And since you're so concerned with the 41st Division, take them with you.
Wow, I can't wait to talk about that in the next section. Zuko then returns to his ship, and Iroh is massively concerned. In the cartoon, after he returns, he simply asks Zuko where he's been, and tells him how he missed music night, which Iroh does say, but he uses it as a soft lie as to why the crew is being much more respectful to Zuko now that he's returned, even referring to him as our prince, which earlier in the episode they said he wasn't. The 41st all bow to him as he returns, and when they do, they use the Fire Nation hand bow, which is a pretty solid detail, because the one that Aang does is slightly different. We get to see the detail in the headband, episode 2 of book 3, and now we get the wrap up. Aang returns to his friends and meditates for what's presumably going to be another 12 hours. Oh, no, it's instantaneous. Say, he's never brought anything physical into the spirit world before. How exactly does he plan on bringing the MacGuffin to Ko? Fuck it, no one cares. Let's talk about this MacGuffin real quick. There actually is a MacGuffin in the Blue Spirit episode. Sokka and Katara are sick, and Aang needs to bring them frozen frogs to suck on, which he grabs before he's captured, but they thaw out and leave him during their escape. But since his friends aren't sick, and there aren't any frogs, and the MacGuffin didn't get lost at any point during the escape, it didn't feel necessary to mention. But I would be doing a bad job if I didn't draw a comparison that there is a MacGuffin MacGuffin at play in both mediums. He gives it back to Ko, who releases his friends and everybody wakes up on command again. No one even talks. Lame. Can't be complicated, you know? All the villagers return as well, which, when this happens in the cartoon, it was after Heibai was calmed by Aang, and returned to the forest and helped some bamboo bloom. The villagers and Sokka just calmly walked out of there and rejoined their loved ones. And Aang goes back to the hut that Gyatso was in to find that he is no longer there anymore. Show exclusive, I'll talk about it in a minute, let's move on. Zuko getting tucked in by Iroh only really happens once in the cartoon, and it's episode 18 of book 2, when Zuko gets his inner turmoil sickness and Iroh helps him recover. In the show, Iroh finds the blue spirit mask, but in the cartoon, Iroh never sees the mask in Zuko's possession. He sees Zuko with it on in episode 17 of book 2, giving us my favorite Avatar scene of all time, but he never sees it independent of Zuko. It should be noted that this is the first and only episode that doesn't have any spoken dialogue from Katara or Sokka. The first and only time that happens in the cartoon is Zuko alone, episode 7 of book 2. I mean, also technically Appa's Lost Days, but that episode had Toph, Aang, and even Suki speaking, so I don't count it. Alright, let's get started. Broad strokes. What was this episode about? What did we learn? It starts with Aang visiting Roku on Crescent Island, then he gets captured by June, then he gets captured by Zhao, then the Blue Spirit saves him, then we see Zuko's origins, then everyone ends up fine. Quick question. If Sokka and Katara didn't get captured last episode, and they just awoke from the spirit world with Aang, planted the tree and left, what would we have missed exactly? That's right, folks. Episode 6, one of only 8 episodes in the Netflix show, is filler. With the tiniest tweak of Katara and Sokka waking up at the end of episode 5, the entire episode could have been avoided. What lessons did we learn exactly? What story did we advance? This episode essentially set our protagonist back to neutral footing, and the only new information given to us was about Zuko. Now, the cartoon wasn't infallible either. It had its occasional filler episode. Like in book 1, it had the Great Divide, the Fortune Teller to some extent, and the Storm to even less of an extent. But each of those episodes, with the exception of the Great Divide, taught us something more about more than just one character. This episode in particular only taught us new information about Zuko, which, while his origins are pretty dope, the 11 minutes of this episode spent talking about them don't justify the entire 50-minute runtime to me. And all the jumping around, Roku, June, the Blue Spirit, everything feels so convoluted and straight up disorganized to me. Which is why the title for this episode is Intention. A lack of intention kind of leads every one of these changes, so let's talk about it, starting at the beginning. Okay, kind of bad segue, because the first scene is actually one of the best in the entire show. Like I said, Zuko's origins are pretty dope, and his scenes in the show don't really present any problems, until that one part. Firstly, and I know I've steered clear of talking about the acting a lot, but I adore Zuko's acting in this first scene. It feels extremely natural and fitting for the situation. It may be the best acting in the entire show, actually. I know that it's gonna sound a little harsh, but with all the action and running around, have there really been any scenes that made you at home go, wow, they are really giving it their all in their acting? Yeah, Aang cries a few times in episode 1, but So yeah, I'm taking it where I can get it. Despite my praise, it's not all good words for this scene. The show has Iroh tell Zuko he'd advise not testing whether or not Ozai wants new opinions. But the cartoon has him say,
"These old folks are a bit sensitive, you know."
It feels like better foreshadowing than the former, since the cartoon is intentionally setting up the misdirection that Zuko would be dueling his father, rather than the general that he slighted. Let's actually keep that rolling and get all of the Zuko flashbacks out of the way. The War Council meeting presents different information compared to the cartoon. Firstly, the acting again. The reason I talk about acting so much is because when we're dealing with actors, they can make mistakes and lead the audience into thinking, oh, that face he's making is totally about pride. With someone else going, pride? No, it's about shame. And one third person going,
pride is not the opposite of shame, but its source.
Thank you, Uncle Iroh. This was never a problem in the cartoon, since the artist could draw whatever emotion they wanted and have the voice actors match it. It was much more controlled. Look at some of these facial expressions and tell me there's any ambiguity over what they're feeling. But again, not complaining here. Zuko's face speaks to me of a child who's trying to contain their excitement. It's fantastic. It's that slight smile. It's the looking around at every detail in the room. Amazing communication to the audience. It's the writing we've got to talk about, as usual. Zuko in the cartoon speaks out of turn because he's mortified at the casual loss of life from the soldiers in the Fire Nation. In the show, he's able to contain his frustration until after everybody gets up. It almost feels more about ego and slighting the officer than being passionate about your nation. I'll get to why in just a moment, but let's talk about Fire Lord Ozai. I've already talked about the very delicate care put into keeping him as removed from the audience as possible before book 3, and the flashback scenes tell it like this as well, where instead of Ozai scheduling the Agni Kai himself, it's Iroh retelling it, allowing the veil to stand between Ozai and the audience. The show omits this, and I don't know if it's for better or worse, but it feels very different, and less purposeful, I guess. So why make the passion versus ego change? I think the show knew that people would expect Zuko to speak out during this meeting, and wanted to throw a wrench into everyone's expectations. And on top of that, it allows Ozai to have more screen presence this way. I mean, if they're not gonna keep him a secret like the cartoon, they might as well full send it, right? Next, and most problematically, the Agni Kai. It's crazy to me that Zuko fights his father at all. So out the gate, why the hell would they do it like this? Well, the answer is in the question. They wanted Zuko to win, or at least get a hit off. It's unclear if Zuko in this position would have outright won the Agni Kai, or if he would have just given his father a big fireball to the face, but we're playing by Rocky rules. All he needed is one hit. This scene in the next scene really harp on destroying Zuko's compassion, making him as ruthless as his father. And so winning the Agni Kai, and by extension having the Agni Kai, are to show us that Zuko is actually a compassionate person who would show mercy. Let's zoom out again. Compassion wasn't really ever the focus of Zuko's character in the cartoon, so why is it now? Well, like the previous episodes, it ties back to book 1 wanting to show us that Zuko isn't a bad guy. They wanted to get a jumpstart in his redemption arc and figured, wow, what a waste it would be to have one of 3 seasons with Zuko as a bad guy, which fundamentally misunderstands the inner premise of Zuko, and I really weep for what Crossroads of Destiny is going to look like, but whatever. So, that's why we're in this situation in the first place. I think the angle to have Zuko's scar be about showing compassion is an interesting change, but I can't help but love the emotion that went into the Agni Kai in the cartoon. Zuko was not only pleading for mercy, he was bawling his eyes out, he was shaking as Ozai approached him. Let me tell you guys, I personally have a lot of empathy for people who are scared and terrified, and my empathy meter goes wild here. I just want to give this little guy a hug and tell him it's all gonna be okay. I think having Zuko be more stoic in front of his father as he got burned was a bit of a misfire, and I almost think it would have been more impactful if he asked his father once more for mercy this close to him. He isn't crying in the show, and yeah, he squirms, but I'm not really getting terror in the same way I was in the cartoon. They're trying to send a different message here, so I understand, but you can't beat the classics sometimes. Actually, there is a happy little accident that occurs from Zuko being burned over showing mercy. When Aang asks him if they would have been friends, Zuko immediately hurls a fireball at him with absolutely no hesitation. In the cartoon, you can see the softness in his face before he does this, and a little after. The cartoon made Zuko question himself for a moment, but the show actually makes this a cause and effect. He showed mercy in the past and that got him scarred, so he won't do it again. It's kind of a happy accident since the cartoon did it better. Now that last flashback scene. Remember earlier when I gave the direct example of cutting to the chase? I'm feeling similar about this scene of Zuko getting banished. Did we really need to see the words being said? Well, we got him, so let's talk about it. In the cartoon, he was banished because he refused to fight. In the show, he was banished for showing weakness. In both of these circumstances, it seems a little interesting to use hunting the Avatar as a way to resolve these reasons. Although I can apply reasoning to both. Since before Zuko referred to Aang as the ultimate warrior, it would make sense that he would see a fight with him as a way to strengthen his weakness. And in the cartoon, he was never expected to find the Avatar at all. It was all just a way to keep his son chasing after something unattainable. But because the cartoon made this all insinuation, it allows Ozai to make these decisions at his own pace. The show, however, has Ozai come up with the punishment of finding the Avatar on the spot. And even if he can justify it, it just doesn't seem thought out. He hesitates, he stutters, it feels kind of like unrelated. Which I think is just super unfortunate and absolutely avoidable. And it could have been avoided with a little more intention, am I right? And now, what people say is the best change of the entire show.
Take them with you.
Let me be clear, yeah, it probably is the best single change made to this story, but guys, it's not like mind-melting, okay? It's a good call, it helps Zuko and the crew, absolutely. I'm glad the change was made even. I just don't want to blow it out of proportion, you know? It's one great thing in a sea of questionable changes. I personally wouldn't give up Ko, Roku, and Appa's character integrity for this change. I think that's just too steep of a price. And that's all the flashbacks, so let's get back to the current time stuff. The first present day scene is Zhao commandeering Zuko's ship and being a huge dick about it. So why is he a dick? Well, I think the answer is actually pretty clear-cut. He's high on power. This is another one of those really great acting examples for this episode. This episode might actually be the best single-acted episode of the entire show, which is awesome. His mannerisms, his tone, his hand gestures, this man is high on the power that's been given to him. And there's a difference between Zhao using his newfound admiralship to order the Yuhan archers to work with him and stealing Zuko's crew. And the difference is how he got the power. In the cartoon, he earned the admiral title. The man had a run-in with the Avatar at Crescent Island. He was manning a blockade for the Fire Nation and was able to outsmart Zuko at several occasions. In the show, he was given the title because Azula played politics. Now, I have a clear answer on which I like better, but I think it's actually a really interesting consequence of the political game that they're playing that they would change Zhao's character to compensate. Now that's the kind of writing I like to see. After Zhao leaves, Iroh tells the crew that they should still be kind to Zuko because
my parents were mean to me.
Iroh basically asks the crew to commit mutiny on Zhao, and they say no, and Iroh dunks on them again. I'm being a little hyperbolic, but telling the dude who doesn't know the story that he sacrificed more than you ever could is like, bro, why are you being so rude about it? Between this and dunking on the Earth Kingdom soldier, I think we have our answer as to why this is different, and it's super interesting to see. The show wants so desperately to make Iroh the peace-loving uncle he was in Book 2, and the hardened badass he was in Book 3, and I think they're struggling to find the balance, which is why it comes off sometimes as super rough for no reason. Lieutenant G explains that him and the crew have been abused by Zuko since day one, and Iroh doesn't even acknowledge it. G is right! Like, yeah, Zuko sacrificed, but he's still a fucking dick, bro! Iroh was sweet, kind, and forgiving in the cartoon, but he would never have excused Zuko's behavior, only asked for forgiveness. I'm just not getting the same energy energy from the Iroh in the show. Okay, fuck it. While we're here, we're just gonna keep talking about Iroh. After Iroh tells G that the 41st was taken on as Zuko's crew, which he probably should have done at the beginning of the episode, he expresses to Zuko that he's worried about him. Iroh is much better at expressing his feelings in the show. The cartoon did more showing and less telling when it came to this aspect of his personality. Like, when he finds Zuko in the Crossroads of Destiny, he gives him a huge hug. Or in Book 2, when Zuko leaves on his own path, Iroh tracks him without his knowing. You can see, like, with your eyes, the love that is expressed through Iroh. This change was likely due to the continuous second screen theory I keep talking about. It really kind of sucks that I have that as an excuse, because I feel like it limits my analysis. Character repeats themselves 4 times, second screen theory. Character announced when they entered a room, second screen theory. The writing in general is just awful, second screen theory. We can't think to make things too complicated for our smartphone-addicted viewers. Also, probably the same reason that they made Zuko more of a redeemable character in Season 1 in the first place. They probably wanted to make it very, very obvious that Zuko is more gray than bad. They also maybe didn't want to spend the time really letting it marinate, so, you know, just throw it all in at once. There's also the very last bit when he tucks Zuko in, and he puts the blue spirit mask in the drawer. Firstly, awful hiding place. Second, there's a lot of subtlety in the interaction between the blue spirit and Iroh. In the cartoon, they meet face to face in episode 17 of Book 2, and Iroh doesn't speak first, the blue spirit does, calling him uncle. This confirms that it's 100% Zuko, and Iroh didn't have to do anything. But beyond that, Iroh has been tracking Zuko since they split up. I think it's fair to say he knew that he was the blue spirit the whole time. There's just a lot of subtle evidence that Iroh could have, 1, figured it out, and 2, tracked him to Lake Laogai. The show skirts this entire subtle interaction by making Iroh figure it out immediately. Awesome. Why the change? Because they don't want to add all those details into Crossroads of Destiny when they eventually get to it. Okay. That's too harsh. But I do think it has something to do with missing the subtlety that went into their interaction. Okay, finally done with fire. Let's move on to air. Aang's first thing to do in the episode is to make it to Roku's shrine on Crescent Island. In the cartoon, they had to run a fucking blockade, which was dangerous and showed us a definite power level for the Fire Nation, which so far we'd only seen on Zuko's ship and in Zhao's dockyard. Taking on that level of resistance actually really puts Aang out of it for a moment, and Sokka almost fucking dies. The stakes were high enough for this mission, seeing as Roku can only commune with Aang during certain parts of the year, but damn, what an incredible fight scene that the show just decides to leave out. The why is pretty easy. Easier to run a blockade without Appa. But the why to the why is a bit harder. Why did they leave Appa, Momo, Katara, and Sokka behind in the first place? Why did they make the Roku adventure another solo mission? I think it's because they wanted to mimic the solo adventure in the cartoon when Aang got captured. And it's much more of a loose end to have Appa just hanging out on Crescent Island if Aang gets captured, so the simplest solution was to not bring him. More broadly, I wonder if the writers thought that excluding Sokka and Katara from this mission was worth it because we got to see their flashbacks in the last episode. Guys, I'll be fucking honest. We got to see those flashbacks in Book 3. They're unimpressive to me. I would have been willing to wait 2 more seasons to see them. Whatever. So Aang arrives at the temple and we get to see what I described as genuinely good world building. The picture of Fire Lord Ozai in a place where it shouldn't have been. You know when you have a kid in school and they get like straight Fs until you offer them some kind of reward and their grades improve? And the first thing you think is like, wow, you could have done this level of work the whole time and weren't? Because that's kind of how I'm feeling about this. On one hand, it's actually a genuinely good job. But on the other hand, it's like, you could have been doing moments like this the entire show and you just haven't? The other option is more likely what happened. This good thing was a complete fucking accident, and I'm assigning way more praise to something no one even thought about the broader implications of. I'm just gonna take it as it is. Good job on this one. We hope to see more of it in the future. Next, the tunnels themselves lead directly into Roku's chamber, so we don't actually spend any time in them. Let's do a quick comparison on entry-level exposition dump. When Xiaoyu takes them under the tunnels, there's about a minute worth of talking where they just talk. The show also takes about a minute, but the difference here is simply the way the conversation happens. In the cartoon, it's an actual conversation, but in the show, Xiaoyu just kind of dumps the information onto him. Like I said, entry-level exposition dump. Straight up basics. If you need to exposit information, should one character be speaking or more than one? The answer is that it should always be a conversation when it can be. Call and response. Ask a question for fuck's sake. The tunnels in the cartoon lead to this big chamber door, not inside the shrine. Why this change was made is really simple. How the fuck is Aang supposed to get past this heavy-looking door without Sokka's cunning? In a meta sense, the door's purpose in the cartoon was to establish that Sokka is an incredibly smart person who can come up with solutions to problems very quickly. The show misses this once again, removing the opportunity for our characters to be smart. Whoop-de-fucking-do. Oh, and then Xiaoyu dies. I can't exactly clarify why I feel this way, but Xiaoyu dying feels like how they keep killing off villains in the MCU. Like, why not keep him alive for potential future use? Why does he have to be a one-use kind of guy? Okay, now the conversation between Roku and Aang. This may sound harsh, but to me, Roku's advice screams the writers have no idea who Roku is. Roku gave Aang the advice of being more decisive in the cartoon. He wouldn't have told Aang to be a diplomat, and the only reason they changed this was because Kyoshi told him to be a warrior, which they didn't need to do anyway, but they did. Word of praise, I do like that they made Roku kind of a jokester. It seemed like the show was getting a little too fucking serious there for a while. Now, why this MacGuffin has anything to do with the Mother of Faces, I think is entirely due to meta-knowledge. The Search was a pretty popular piece of extended material, so similar to the Kyoshi novel, I think they'd want to take something from it. I don't mind the inclusion of another spirit in principle, I just don't like that they had to make it part of Ko's I've kidnapped your friends story. Lastly, Roku telling Aang to let go of his friends is a giant middle finger, especially since they're not here. Like, how fucking separate can he get from them? They're never around. I don't exactly know why they did this. It wasn't an element from the cartoon at all. The only reasoning I can think of is that they really wanted to lay on the Avatar has to make impossible decisions aspect of this character. But he hasn't had the time to develop the relationship with them for fuck's sake yet. Like, come on, this conversation could have been better in book 2. Like when the guru tells him he has to let go of Katara and he's like, wait, how could I do that? We've been through so much. Aang can't even say we've been through so much right now. Are you rushing or are you dragging?
So you do know the difference!
Aang exits his talk with Roku and the MacGuffin is just sitting right fucking there. I already said before, but it bears repeating that it's fucking absurd that the MacGuffin is revealed and then it's needed and then it's right here with no problem at all. Okay, hold on. You know what would have been a really easy fix to this? If Roku buried it at Pao Hai's stronghold. That way, when Aang gets captured, it would have just all been according to plan. Except getting captured ended up being a little bit too much for him, like he bit off more than he could chew, and then the blue spirit saving him would have rectified this mistake he made. Rewatching the cartoon for this reminded me that Aang makes a lot of mistakes in the cartoon. He keeps the note from Sokka and Katara's father from them, he accidentally burns Katara, he's an ostentatious little shit on Kyoshi Island. Where are his flaws in the show? Getting in over his head would have been a great first fucking mistake for our protagonist to make on episode 6 of 8. So anyway, Aang grabs the MacGuffin and he gets paralyzed by Nyla. Please observe Aang's absurd reaction speed at various points in the cartoon. I'll wait. Which makes sense, because he's a master airbender. The show straight up nerfs Aang's abilities because the story called for him to be captured at this point. It's embarrassing. That's not even mentioning all the work that went into June finding them in the first place. In the cartoon, she had to get hired by Zuko, they had to present a scent sample of Katara, which he only got from stealing her necklace. In the show, she just finds a random ass scrap of clothing on a tree. How do you even know that's his scent? What if you chase down some random nobody? That's why in the cartoon, she asks,
so who's got something with the Avatar's scent on it?
You know, she does her fucking job with more competency than just assuming that any random scrap of orange clothing is Aang's. The secondhand embarrassment doesn't even end here, because as I mentioned before, just look at this. Enter Zuko and Iroh from stage right. It's embarrassing. Characters had reasons for being in certain places in the cartoon. They often showed how they arrived there. The show is lazy. Do not stand for it. Do not let them convince you that this is good. It is not. Despite all this, there is actually a new idea presented in the conversation with June and Aang. Another one to add to our folder. The world is just fine. This idea is extremely small and only really shared by this one character, and I don't know if it's luck or intentional, but
it's reflected in both of our episode protagonists, Aang and Zuko.
The world isn't better with the war. Aang's people got wiped out. The world isn't better with the war. Zuko's life is miserable. But for June, she's settled into the complacency that comes from people when they know that the world is on fire around them, and that's not something that the cartoon ever explored. Not verbally, at least. I mean, people were still getting by. The world was burning, but it was less apocalyptic and more late-stage capitalism. It's not that food wasn't available, it just cost 30% of your paycheck. And I'm fairly certain that this idea is the only reason Aang and June got to have a conversation at all, since they never talked in the cartoon. But so, moving on to the next contrivance, Zuko and Iroh take the Avatar. Something I only just thought of, and it probably would have been more interesting and messy, is if June was intercepted on her way to the rendezvous site, instead being offered a higher sum and delivering Aang to Zhao instead. Instead of first having her deliver him to Zuko having him for like 20 seconds and then Zhao taking him.
I'm almost certain that the sole reason Zuko had any possession over Aang was to tee up his flashback in the war room.
Which is super disappointing. Like, imagine you had the problem, how do we flash back to Zuko's origins in an organic way? And this is the solution you came up with.
You couldn't have always been this way.
I feel like Iroh telling the story to his crew worked fine in the cartoon. Why didn't he just do that again? Another consequence of Zhao capturing the Avatar from Zuko capturing the Avatar from June is that the Yuhan Archers don't do jack shit in this show. In the cartoon, these fuckers captured the Avatar all on their own. And holy fuck, I just realized the irony. In the cartoon, Zhao says that the general who owned the squad was wasting their talents relegating them to a security force. Then what does Zhao do in the show? He relegates them to a security force. And to be honest, I'm not an archer, but I feel like shooting the crown off of Iroh's head from that distance isn't all that impressive.
Impressive for sure, but not quite as impressive as what's shown in the cartoon.
In the cartoon, they chase the Avatar all over the valley, landing shots on his feet, trapped his arms. Aang was scared of them, and they're basically just a cameo in the show. I know why this happened too. The show thought their purpose was to knock out Zuko at the end of the Blue Spirit encounter, as opposed to using them for multiple things like the cartoon did. Again, with that MCU feeling of just having a character be for one purpose. Let's also talk about the Yuhan Archers' skills in relation to that last shot. The impressiveness of the Yuhan Archers means that when Zhao says,
"Knock out the thief,"
it shows that keeping the Blue Spirit alive was very intentional. If they could really pin a fly to a tree, they should be able to shoot through his face eye holes and just fucking skewer him. The only reason they didn't in the cartoon was because Zhao wanted a prize. But in the show, Zhao just says take him out, which sounds to me like
kill that guy.
But maybe it means something different to the Yuhan Archers for whatever reason. You see the problem though, right? The Yuhan Archers should have fucking killed Zuko in the show, but it's excused in the cartoon since Zhao gave them an order to knock him out.
I know that was all a little rough, but now we're at the best part of this filler episode, Pao Hai's stronghold itself.
Like I said before, the overlap between the show and the cartoon is actually actually pretty fucking incredible in this one part, and I am very impressed and happy. I wonder if other people are too. Like, let me know in the comments, because I'm making a big deal about just do what the cartoon did, but maybe people are bored with that. So anyway, there are still a few differences that I wanted to talk about. Aang's attitude about being captured in the cartoon is one of defense. The kid isn't taking any shit, even challenging Zhao to a 1v1. In the show, he's far more naive, simply pleading with Zhao to let him go so he can save his friends. In the cartoon, his friends were also in danger, but he didn't plead with anybody about it. When Zhao threatens to almost kill Aang in the cartoon, Aang gets sad, but he picks himself up quickly. In the show, the kid looks terrified. I think this change might have been to make it more realistic with Aang. He is only 12, and him being told about something like this has gotta be scary. And that's about all the leeway I'm willing to give the show, since the same exact circumstance in the cartoon didn't warrant these emotions. Next up, the speech that Zhao gives. He's much more bombastic and proud in the cartoon, while in the show, he's much more giddy, excitable. Remember when I said earlier in the episode that Zhao is probably on a power trip, and it's even shittier because he just did politics to get into his position? I think this is another example of that. And to go back to the episode having like the best fucking acting in the entire show, check out this little hesitant smile he gives at the end of his speech. This speaks to me of a nerdy kid who never really got the attention of the room before, and he's killing it. First of all, the fact that I can read all of that off of a half smile speaks volumes to the acting. Secondly, this is nothing like the Zhao of the cartoon. But thirdly, I think that's okay, because it's actually extremely logically consistent with the direction they were bringing this character in the show. Simply being different isn't enough to be bad, and seeing all the work they've put into turning Zhao's character into something different, I think it's gonna get a stamp of approval for me. I do miss the very competent, I rose through the ranks on my own Zhao from the cartoon, but I don't mind this Zhao, and at least for me, that's a win. Moving on to the next small difference, there's a hesitation from the Blue Spirit to threaten Aang's life. In the cartoon, the man moved as quick as humanly possible to threaten the Avatar's life, but in the show, he kinda has to think it over for a second. I don't really have an explanation for why this change was made. It may even just be as simple as a directorial decision, something someone felt at the last second, or even an editing decision, because I didn't need to include this lead up. I can't think of any narrative reason Zuko would hesitate in this situation, especially since no less than 5 minutes later, he attacks Aang without hesitation anyway. Let's talk about that part actually. Zuko and Aang have an extra conversation in the show than they did in the cartoon. They talk about the kind of quill Zuko uses and Zuko's motivation, and they smile at each other. While I've been confused on why they've done certain parts of the show, I can pretty confidently draw the same through line that I have with the other decisions. They're trying to rush Zuko's redemption. The Blue Spirit was like the only good thing that he did in the cartoon for book 1. This dude was a menace otherwise. So the show probably thought, hey, why don't we build on that so we can just make him a more likable character sooner? Just the same cutting corner shit. And finally, the last note. I feel like the Blue Spirit in general really amplifies how lacking the music is in the show. The music in the show just feels like the same generic fight music that most shows are using these days. Avatar: The Last Airbender specifically used unique instrumentation for their unique world, and the Blue Spirit utilized music from the Daeduk. It gave his character an extremely unique feel. There's nothing like that in the show. I'll even take it a step further. In the music from Zuko and Zhao's Agni Kai, I can't play it because copyright is stupid, it features unique instruments, a high BPM, and vocalization to produce an overall dope music track. If you're gonna have Zuko actually fight Ozai, the only Agni Kai in the entire show, why not give it some fucking awesome music to go along with it? It's almost completely silent with some basic drum beat in the back. Drums were a huge part of the Avatar soundtrack, so I can kind of see what they're going for, but the brass sections just make it sound like a generic action movie again. And this is coming from a guy who actually likes action movie music. But Avatar's soundtrack was truly something unique, utilizing instruments from all over the fucking world like the Daeduk, the Eru, and the Guzheng. I've felt like the show has been missing the mark on the music for a while in the show, but this is the first like tangible example I can point to of saying, wow, it's just, there's something missing here. Alright, this first scene is a mess. So Lieutenant G bursts in to warn Prince Zuko that the Royal Guard is on their way to apprehend him for being a traitor. So he sets off in a longboat where Zhao blows it up, killing Zuko with Iroh watching. The sequence that tipped off Lieutenant G that the Royal Guard is coming is exclusive to the show, as is Iroh knowing about Zuko's involvement at Pao Hai Stronghold. There is a sequence in the cartoon where Zuko dies in an explosion, but it's not on a longboat, it's on his Fire Navy ship, after his crew has left. That happens in episode 18, The Waterbending Master. The people to blow him up are specifically the pirates that he tangled with in episode 9, but they were commissioned by Zhao. Zhao only commissions them because when he takes Zuko's crew, he enters his quarters and notices the same swords that the Blue Spirit used to free the Avatar. Since that scene from the cartoon is missing, I have no idea how Zhao knows that Zuko is a traitor, but he's dead set on it enough that he murders him over it. And lastly, Iroh does see the ship explode with his nephew on it in both mediums. Aang explaining to Team Avatar that Zuko saved him from Pao Hai Stronghold happens way later in the cartoon, Book 3, Episode 12, when Zuko tries to join their group. But definitely not, oh my god, explaining that him and Zuko aren't different, and that they've both been carrying a lot of weight on their shoulders. Everyone grab your shovels, let's dig a grave for subtlety, because it's fucking dead in this show. Breathe. almost done.
Aang then also says that number 1, he hasn't learned any of the other bending skills, which is true.
Why the fuck haven't you started waterbending yet?
And number 2, he'll probably keep messing up.
Which is blatantly false. Name one thing in the show that Aang did that was a mistake. We went over it last episode, but he messed up a lot in the cartoon. But what did he do to mess up in the show besides run away from home? And he didn't even do that on purpose. Katara then casually calls them Team Avatar, which wasn't actually a name given to them until The Drill, episode 13 of book 2, when Sokka has the idea to create a team name after hearing the name Terra Team. Team Avatar then just flies into the Northern Water Tribe, but in the cartoon they were basically using Appa as a boat since he's so tired from flying for so long, and waterbenders ambush them not knowing who they are. Oh wow, I kinda meant that figuratively, but no, Appa just flies into the Northern Water Tribe. Part of the reason they had Appa so tired in the cartoon was so that they could show the waterbenders shaping the world to their advantage in the Northern Water Tribe, doing drainage canals to allow boats in and out without using machinery, similar to how the Earthbenders use the mail chutes in Omashu. But nah, fuck that noise, fly right inside. We don't really need world building, do we? That sounds like a lot of work. This random dude welcomes the Avatar to Agna Kella, which is a name exclusive to the show. In the cartoon, they just call it the Northern Water Tribe. Aang asks that Appa get plenty of seaweed, which is a detail taken from the cartoon, as that's what they're feeding him in the feast. Team Avatar meets with the chief, whose name in the show is Arnook, but he isn't actually given a name in the cartoon. In the cartoon, they do the introductions of Master Pakku and Princess Yue at the feast to celebrate their arrival, but in the show, they just do it at the steps of the palace. He offers them their hospitality and protection in the name of the ocean and moon spirits, but in the cartoon, it's Princess Yue who mentions these spirits and asks them to protect the entire tribe in these troubling times. Aang then warns that he saw a vision that would put the Northern Water Tribe in danger, which is again entirely a show exclusive. Chief Arnook says that they already know, because they noticed Fire Navy fleets moving towards the north. In the cartoon, that wouldn't have been possible, since Zhao only sat down to track Team Avatar's movements with his generals immediately before Aang arrives, which is at the beginning of episode 18, and his fleet wasn't actually ready to mobilize until the end of episode 18. Master Pakku then says he's grateful for Aang's presence, which isn't much like his personality in the cartoon, where he was a rude old man even to the Avatar. Sokka stares at Yue and Katara has to tell him to stop, but in the cartoon, Sokka was a Riz Master, so Katara didn't need to tell him to stop.
I'm thinking maybe we could do an activity together?
God, I wish I had his skills.
Next up is Zhao being furious to Iroh about the death of Prince Zuko. This also happens in episode 18, but he's not angry when having the conversation. Iroh says he knows who did it in both, but it's pirates in the cartoon and Ozai in the show. I remember seeing this for the first time and thinking, oh my god, who is he gonna pin this on? Pirates were an obvious choice in the cartoon since they, actually did it. But who the hell is Zhao gonna pin this on in the show? Zhao then tells him that Ozai has given him the honor to attack the north. Iroh says that Zhao isn't his first pick, and Zhao admits that he's a little inexperienced in battle, which remains consistent in the show, although very different from the cartoon. Zhao then fucking dunks on Iroh, saying that,
I have no track record of failure, unlike you.
In the cartoon, Zhao personally invites Iroh to be a general on the expedition, seeing the value in his experience, even if he says the attack will be nothing like his failure in Ba Sing Se. We then cut away to Azula fighting an imprisoned Earthbender, which never happens in the cartoon. They hardly show anybody in shackles in the cartoon. I think the only time is when Hama gives her flashbacks in episode 7 of book 3. Azula is given a below average grade and she gets super insecure about being the one. I mean, how can you be the one? Look at this shit.
One hair out of place.
Azula was a million things in the cartoon, but insecure does not come to mind.
Next, we get to the Water Tribe feast. There was a feast in the cartoon as well, but most of the information from that scene was transplanted into the scene where Team Avatar met Chief Arnook on the palace steps. Although when Sokka says,
"Say what? Hey there, Sokka, Southern Water Tribe."
It's actually an extremely funny meta joke, since that's actually word for word the first thing he says to Princess Yue in the cartoon. Aang then thanks Katara for taking the journey with him, which isn't something in the cartoon either. I guess once they accelerated to family level in episode 3, they just assumed taking the journey together would be an altogether thing. Master Pakku meets Katara in the feast at the show, but he doesn't meet her in the cartoon until the next morning when Aang unexpectedly brings her to train with him. Well, more specifically, Pakku knew that Aang was bringing a friend, but he didn't know that that friend was a woman. Katara in the show says that she couldn't wait to get to the North Pole to find a waterbending teacher, which, yeah, you could have. The entire collective Team Avatar didn't even mention you having a teacher until episode 5. Do not let them change that narrative. But anyway, Master Pakku is a super compassionate and empathetic person to Katara, which he wasn't in the cartoon, not even to Aang. Pakku tells Katara to visit Yagoda to begin her training, which he does do in the cartoon, but in the cartoon he makes it clear to her then and there that Yagoda is a healer, not a fighter, and that's what Katara will be learning. Yue then steps away to waterbend some ice cream for a little girl in the village. This scene is exclusive to the show, but more importantly, Yue is a waterbender. She most definitely wasn't in the cartoon, or if she was, she's a shitty friend for letting Katara fight Zuko on her own. Sokka is Rizless in the show, but once again, he wasn't in the cartoon. He eventually finds his footing and the two of them talk about the responsibilities they both face in their lives, which is unique once again to the show. This idea that Sokka always wished he could be a normal person, unburdened by his duties, isn't an idea explored in the cartoon at all. So hey, another new idea unlocked. Sokka then asks Yue how he knows her, which is unique to the show because he never saw her in the spirit world in the cartoon. Han then comes to pull Yue away in the middle of their conversation. Han was only introduced in the cartoon in the middle of the siege, and he was a dick from the moment he was brought out. He's actually kind of
kind in the show, so that's different as well. Which actually carries over into the next scene when he asks Sokka for fighting advice. In the cartoon, Han calls Sokka bold for being able to answer all of the Chief's questions when he asks them, and as such, the Chief demands that Han listen to all of Sokka's advice. But Han doesn't ask him for it, he's actually kind of over Sokka. In the show, he asks for some reference about the Fire Nation armor, which is a reference to when Han actually wears the Fire Nation armor in the cartoon, and Sokka laughs at him for the shoulder spikes. After Sokka leaves, Pakku asks Aang to lead the attack, kind of acting as a military advisor. That wasn't his role in the cartoon, he was just a waterbending master defending his home. He wasn't militaristically involved, as far as I can tell. Aang then says that airbending is a defensive discipline, which is true, but he doesn't say that in the cartoon. Matter of fact, he is leading the attack in the cartoon, single-handedly taking out a dozen Fire Navy ships. So I don't know what he's talking about in the show.
It would have been wise to have focused on your training during your journey.
Yeah, I know, I've been saying that since episode 1! We then get to Katara witnessing her first instance of water healing. In the cartoon, the first instance of water healing was when Aang accidentally burned her hands, and she healed herself in episode 16, The Deserter. But the healing looked a little different. It would cause the hands and water being used to glow. The water would drip away, and the damage would be repaired. In the show, it just kind of zippers up this man's cut. That's only the first time she uses water healing, though. The scene with Yagoda and the healing huts is in the cartoon as well, episode 18, but it looks a little different. It's a class of very young girls, all circled around a pool of water with a healing mannequin in the middle. When they heal the mannequin in the cartoon, the entire body glows, but in the show it doesn't. Yagoda tells Katara she's a natural, which in every sense of the word wasn't the case in the cartoon. Katara then asks Yagoda when they get to the fighting, which wasn't necessary in the cartoon since she was fully aware that the healing huts were for women. The conversation she has with Katara is actually pretty similar to the one she has with Pakku in the cartoon. Then we get to Sokka and Han training some more, where Han clarifies that none of the Northern Water Tribe have ever actually fought before. Which wasn't expressly stated in the cartoon, but I could see an argument in both directions. Their Fire Nation armor is 85 years old, but the Waterbenders were on patrol when they found Team Avatar in the first place. So, I don't know. Up to you to decide. Sokka then asks about Yue, and Han drops that he used to be betrothed to her, but when she turned 16, he broke it off. Okay, Han is not only kind in the show, he's downright respectful. Very different than the Han of the cartoon. We stan a guy with a commitment to consent. Oh right, the cartoon. So over there, Yue actually turned 16 on the day that Team Avatar arrives in the North Pole, announced by her father. She has her betrothal necklace when she talks to Sokka at the end of that episode, so she was likely betrothed before then, but she hasn't broken it off. She actually never does in the cartoon. She just turns into the moon spirit, and well, that kind of resolves the issue. Aang then goes to see Avatar Karuk's statue to ask him for help in the coming fight. Avatar Karuk was the most recent waterbending avatar before Aang, but he only has one appearance in the entire show, and that's when Aang communes with his past lives about if he has to kill the Fire Lord during the finale. Definitely not at the North Pole. Yue then says that Karuk has been mostly forgotten, and he didn't engage much with the world, spending most of his time in the spirit world. So Karuk tells his story in the finale, that he was a go-with-the-flow kind of avatar, and people seem to work out their own problems. So maybe he was a little inattentive with the physical world? Yeah, that part can match up. He then says that Ko stole his wife's face, and Ko also remembers meeting the Avatar as well, so that lines up too. Maybe that meant he spent a lot of time in the spirit world, but I think he would have mentioned that. Instead, the only advice he gives to Aang is to shape his own destiny and be more attentive. So take the overlap as you will. Aang talks to Karuk and asks him to control his body like Kyoshi did, and he says he can't. It's all show exclusive, whatever. Karuk says he spent his entire life fighting off dark spirits in the spirit world to protect the physical world, and then lost his wife to Ko. First off, I don't think there were ever dark spirits in the cartoon, only neutral spirits who have been corrupted, like Wan Shi-Tong or Heibai. I could even see how Ko is just a true neutral spirit. Dude just likes faces, especially if he's the son of the spirit of identity. Now, and I hate talking about this, Korra did have dark spirits, especially in the form of Vatu, the dark avatar spirit. It's embarrassingly bad fanfiction, so I'm not even gonna go over it, but you do need to know they existed. Karuk mentions that despite his war on the dark spirits, he couldn't save his love from Ko, which is the one actual detail about Karuk's time as Avatar from the cartoon, so that matches up. Karuk then tells Aang that the Avatar must walk alone again. Sokka walks in and finds Yue and Aang. The only time that Aang is in the Avatar state and is unresponsive to the people around him is in the finale, when he visits the spirit world and Zuko tries to capture him. I guess there's also when Aang talks to Roku on the summer solstice in book 3, but you know, we don't really have any scenes of Team Avatar responding to that. The conversation they have is exclusive to the show, since Yue was never a fox in the cartoon. However, she mentions to Sokka that she did almost die at birth, and was touched by the moon spirit to save her life, which is her story from the cartoon, given to us in the finale. She tells it to all of Team Avatar though, not just Sokka. In the show, she tells him that she gets to be the bridge between worlds, which, no! In the cartoon, that job was exclusively the Avatars. Then they talk about his journey into the spirit world, which he never talks about in the cartoon. Yue then kisses Sokka, which she does do in the cartoon, at the end of episode 18, when she she reveals that she's betrothed and can't be with him. Karuk then tells Aang to stop being selfish, again exclusive to the show. Aang wakes up to see Sokka giving Yue a carved bear, or fish. Either way, this is a reference to the carving that he made Yue in the cartoon, episode 18 again. Katara then calmly asks Pakku where she'll be stationed for the battle, where Pakku makes up for all the missing sexism they cut for Sokka by directly saying that women aren't strong enough to fight. Yikes. This scene is exclusive to the show since it basically happened earlier before she did a healing session with Yagoda. It should be noted though that the room she meets him in isn't in the Avatar cartoon, but it may be a room from Legend of Korra. In Avatar, they were much more Asian inspired, sitting on the floor during their feasts, but the Legend of Korra transitions that culture to one with tables and chairs, much like in the show. Aang then pulls a sexism and agrees with Pakku that Katara shouldn't fight. Super strange and not at all based in the cartoon. In the cartoon, Aang was so against the North Pole's traditions that he was willing to train Katara in secret during the night so that she could secondhand learn from Master Pakku. He reveals that it's not because of sexism, but it's because he's worried about Katara getting hurt. And outside of the winter solstice, when they were flying to Crescent Island, there's no instance in the cartoon of Aang deliberately benching Katara because he's worried about her getting hurt. Zhao talking to Iroh about becoming Zhao the Conqueror is from the cartoon, but he's more affirmative about him being given that name in the cartoon. Zhao was an extremely capable admiral in the cartoon, so Iroh's concern about his battle strategy isn't found there either. Zhao alludes to some destiny that he's uncovered in the show. All that is found in the Siege of the North, Part 1. Iroh then tells Zuko that he'll be landing soon and asks him if he has a plan. Zuko says he's working on it. Those specific lines from the conversation are mirrored in the cartoon, but the rest of their conversation and the speculation about Zhao working with someone else is exclusive to the show. Azula then standing up to her father is exclusive to the show as well. She has never had any reason to do that in the cartoon since she was Daddy's princess. Her shooting out lightning for the first time is in her first ever appearance, episode 1 of book 2, when she practices on a boat. Her lightning is significantly stronger in the cartoon it seems though, and she isn't aiming it at anyone specifically. She tells Ozai to cut her loose into the world, but in the cartoon she was sent into the world at Ozai's request, to hunt down Zuko and Iroh, that happening as the very last scene of book 1. Sokka then comes in to tell Katara that she should still fight despite the cultural bias. There's kind of a scene like this in the cartoon, but it's not about fighting, it's about training. Sokka is actually the one who suggests that Aang trains her at night. Katara telling Sokka that she's going to pick a fight with Pakku is exclusive to the show. In the cartoon, it's actually an extremely impulsive decision because Pakku demands an apology for breaking their customs, and she instead challenges him to a fight. Katara continues in the show about how she's not going to win this fight, but it's actually Sokka who says that to her as she storms out of the palace in the cartoon. Sokka then encourages her, telling her to kick his ass. It should go without saying, but there's no swearing in the Avatar cartoon.
But you can't curse in a Disney film, mate.
The show actually takes my lesson from earlier about cutting to the chase, starting the scene with Pakku saying, "I'm not going to fight you." Pakku's line of "go back to the healing huts" is from the cartoon, but he says this to her as he walks past her, and in the cartoon he adds,
"Where you belong."
And now, the fight. The water whip to the back of the head starts us off in both mediums, but, and this is kind of a recurring note, it seems like the cartoon really put a lot more punch into these hits.
Fine. You want to learn how to fight?
Study closely.
Is 1-to-1 in both mediums, but in the show he pulls water from only one basin and in the cartoon he pulls from 2. Okay, I tried to directly compare these choreographies, but it was really hard since it seems like not a lot of the original choreography was carried over. So here are the highlights. In both mediums she uses an ice ramp to take a defensive position on top of something, and in the show she tries to punch him in the face much earlier than she does in the cartoon, but that does happen in both. In the cartoon, Sokka takes some collateral damage as Katara fights, lol. She does her ice disc move to Pakku in both mediums, as well as the slow-mo reflection in it. The show knocks Katara's hair out of her braids much earlier in the fight, while in the cartoon it happens pretty near the end. And the show uses this, like, hurricane wind to do it, while the cartoon has her basically get drive-byed. There's actually more dialogue in the cartoon than in the show, but
You're an excellent waterbender.
But you still won't teach me, will you?
No.
Is in the end of the fight in the show, but in the middle in the cartoon. The show has Katara get trapped in these ice spikes that restrict her hands, which happens in the cartoon as well, except in the show he kinda launches them at her from his Frozone ramp, and in the cartoon he brings the water above her, turns it into ice, and launches them downward. He intends to leave her like that in the cartoon, but in the show he releases her as the fight concludes. However, the show pulls a different meaning from this conclusion. The show has the conclusion of the fight be that even if Pakku still won't train her, all the other waterbenders are still impressed by her, so what did she really lose? The cartoon was a bit more nuanced, where Pakku picks up her mother's necklace and notices that he was the one who made it, revealing that he was their grand's betrothed. But she left the Northern Water Tribe because she didn't want to conform to their sexist culture. But anyway, after the students gather around Katara, her and Sokka reassure Aang that they're all in this together. Which, yeah, happens in the cartoon. In episode fucking 3. And finally, Momo eating a piece of soot and spitting it out is taken from the cartoon as well, episode 19, part 1 of the finale. But the presence of soot covering the entire North Pole is a bigger deal in the cartoon. This episode was hard to name because it kind of felt like nothing happened. It's weird to say that we spent an entire episode just kind of establishing necessary elements for the finale, but that's basically what we did. See, this is the tricky part about adapting a show that has a 22-minute runtime per episode into an episode of television that has a 50-minute runtime. You're wasting quite a lot of time if you only adapt one episode into each episode. This issue also arose earlier this season for episode 2, when the show adapted Kyoshi Island, a 20-minute adventure, into a 50-minute piece of a Netflix story. So in order to keep pace with the story, you're going to need to adapt 3 episodes of the cartoon into every episode of the show. Despite how horribly it was done, this was actually an advantage that episode 6 had, running through cartoon adventures like the Blue Spirit and the Winter Solstice. But other than Avatar Karuk, the beats of the Netflix show all follow the same exact beats as episode 18 of the cartoon. This is bad because it means you've basically wasted 30 minutes when you could have told the story in 20. I was looking at the notes for this section and basically everything I had boiled down to a lack of foresight. And so that's the lesson of this episode. Although in a way, a lack of foresight is really just a result of an ongoing problem throughout the show. For instance, removing the waterbending scroll episode means that there was no way to introduce the pirates, which means that there's no good or easy way to have Zhao kill Zuko. The contrived nature of Zuko's death in the show is kind of a big middle finger to what the cartoon was establishing. On paper, there's really nothing wrong with Lieutenant G getting a tip and alerting Zuko. I think it's more about the fact that we were robbed from getting something better, and I think the why is basically the same explanation. They didn't have a good way to kill Zuko, and so they just made Zhao do it directly. Next up is Aang telling Team Avatar about how him and Zuko have stuff in common. And I'll be honest, I'm getting really tired of the show spelling shit out for everybody. It's like they're writing for children, but I don't even want to insult children like that because the actual children's show handled this much better. So why is it different? Well, the obvious answer is once again, they're trying to rush Zuko into being a more redeemable character earlier. There was a lot of nuance in Zuko's character to book 1, because that was the only book in the show where he was not actively trying to be a good guy. Even still, you can see the good things he does and the way he handles himself compared to the other Fire Nation officers, especially in the scene where it's shown how he gets his scar. And so the show wants to make it crystal clear to everyone watching, and then even everybody listening, and everybody in the other room who's barely even paying attention, that Zuko is not a bad person. Immediately after that, they just arrive at the North Pole. I've already talked to death the idea that the show is trying to kill every good bit of world building that the cartoon was trying to establish, so I'll try to keep it brief when I talk about it this time. Similar to the mail delivery system in Omashu, the water canals were the way that the waterbending masters of the North Pole interacted with the world around them and bended it to their will. The only reason I can think that they would have removed this is actually an unfortunate meta reason. Effects are expensive. I've avoided mentioning it until now because I like to give stories the benefit of the doubt, but I've seen too many examples of the show just simply not doing something bending related for absolutely no reason. So the options are either the story thinks the feats of bending our characters do on a day-to-day basis is irrelevant to the world building, or they couldn't afford it, or just couldn't be asked to do it. Next big thing I want to talk about is Master Paku's attitude adjustment. Similar to Zhao, I don't care on paper how they make a character's personality. I care much more about what they do with that personality. Here's a question, dear viewer. Master Paku was an absolute dick in the cartoon because he was trying to exemplify the extreme divide between Katara's perspective and his perspective. By removing those elements and making him a kinder person, how has the story adjusted to reflect that? The answer is, it hasn't. This also isn't the only time it happens. The show seems to be unable to pick a lane on whether or not it wants the Northern Water Tribe to be sexist, or if it doesn't. Another example of this a little bit later is when Han respects the shit out of Yue's consent. Han is actually another example of character assassination. Again, I don't really care that it was changed, I just care how the story adapts with it. And the way that the story was affected by Han being less of a dick is that now the Northern Water Tribe's sexism is inconsistent. You ignore consent enough to still have arranged marriages, but you respect when someone doesn't want to do them. So why have it at all? So now you have both Master Paku and Han who are kind people but uphold the ideals of sexism for no reason. I do have to say that there is a very interesting and actually subtle example of how people within the Northern Water Tribe uphold sexism within their society without ever thinking about it. Yue is revealed to be a waterbender when she bends some ice cream for children. They use this as a reason to get her out of the limelight, but think about it, she could have gone outside and smoked a cigarette, or sat on top of the roof and counted the stars. Instead, she went to the kitchen and started making food for others. She is unknowingly reinforcing the sexist norms that exist on her because of her society. It's very possible this was an accident and she just likes to create ice cream for children, especially because she does give the excuse of wanting to serve her community. I just thought it was pointed that a woman who is also a waterbender wanted to escape a party and went into the kitchen. So if it was intentional, well done. Let's keep talking about Yue though, since we're on the subject. There are actually 2 new ideas that are unlocked through this episode in the show, and one of them is given to us by Yue in the kitchen. She talks about the social expectations that come with being a princess, which wasn't talked about in the cartoon. It's actually fascinating because with all of the different royalties that go along with each nation, the Fire Lord, the Earth King, the Water Tribe Chief, there wasn't really a whole lot of screen time devoted to exploring what their lives are really like. And so this quick look into the life of royalty gives us a new idea. Yue is just like us. There's a bit more later in this episode about Yue, so let's go over it now. She saw Sokka in the spirit world a few episodes ago, and he recognizes her when he sees her in person. Why they elected to do that in the first place was to have this moment where Sokka recognizes her. I can speculate as to why they wanted this scene. They probably thought that Yue should have gotten some more use out of being touched by the moon spirit, as if living wasn't enough use. I did always feel that the spirits were an underrated part of the Avatar mythos, but that was kind of the point. In the same way that there was the mystery of the Avatar, the spirits were supposed to to be given in extremely small doses, with the Avatar being the only real way to peer into that world. Which is why I find it strange that Yue gets to be the bridge between worlds, as she puts it. Like, those are her exact words. How can you even do that? That was Aang's main job. That was the whole purpose of the Avatar, and now Yue gets to do it because she was touched by the moon spirit?
You start spinning a web and I'll shoot!
Okay, Lance, before you get to screaming, why? Well, like our lesson of Foresight, I think this was a consequence of having her in the spirit world at all. They just had to justify it somehow, and this is what they came up with. There is a bit of meta-knowledge that comes to mind here too. I remember a while back reading a popular fan theory that Yue was supposed to be the Avatar if Aang had died at the normal time in his life, 100-ish years after he was born. Wow, okay, that is a lot more popular than I thought. I personally never thought that there was a lot of validity in this theory, but it's possible that this was written by the writers to try to pay some mind to it. There is a bit more talk in regards to Yue and Sokka's relationship, however. I haven't done the math to prove this, but I feel like they actually got to spend more time together in the show as opposed to the cartoon. Their relationship feels a bit more real in the show. That might be because there's a lot of new ideas that have been added to their dynamic, with the second new idea for the show being Sokka's burden. An idea that was unexplored in the cartoon was how Sokka felt about being in charge of the village. He would often talk about how he was left in charge when his dad went to war. However, he didn't often get to talk about how he felt about it. There wasn't really time. There were kind of bigger things at stake here. He definitely felt insecure and down at certain points in the story, especially compared to all of the exciting benders that we get to see, but this is definitely a new element of the character, and I'm not even all against it. I think it's a little unnecessary at worst, but if that's the worst I can think, I'm pretty fine with the idea.
Reasonably.
I'm less fine with Yue giving Sokka absolution for his past trauma with his father. I think if the show wanted to give Sokka something to work through, it's pretty stupid to have Yue resolve it so fucking quickly. She's the moon spirit, she's the Avatar, she's a therapist, the lady can do anything, except fight apparently. That's not allowed in the Northern Water Tribe. Let's talk about that actually. I have some thoughts on the Northern Water Tribe, or more specifically, some of the things they say to Aang. Chief Arnook says that they were tracking Fire Nation ships before Team Avatar's arrival. This is a small detail, but it once again shows a misunderstanding of the chain of events. The Fire Navy weren't in the North Pole waters before Team Avatar was. They couldn't. They specifically were tracking him, and it was Zhao who pointed out where the Avatar was going. After that, he had to put together a huge invasion fleet before setting sail. Until this invasion, the North Pole was said to be impenetrable, so why would the Fire Navy be up there before they had a reason to? Later, Master Pakku tells Aang that he's heard of his adventures where he saved villages and the like. I know I brought it up previously, but why the fuck don't we get to see any of this? If Aang had saved villages, literally the only one we've seen is the one on Kyoshi, which granted, he definitely did, but I feel like you can't just make a pattern out of one example. And so yes, it's another example of the show desperately trying to get us to believe our characters are a specific way without actually showing us any of their accomplishments. Doesn't matter though, since Aang refuses to lead the attack anyway. And back to the idea of a lack of foresight, this is what you get by having Kyoshi take control of Aang without asking him first. I know that seemed like an extremely small and insignificant note, but even the smallest ripples ended up giving us horrible results. Aang didn't get a chance to accept this power, and so he never had to accept that destruction is part of the job. What did he expect? He'd be able to make it to the North Pole and ask the Firebenders to leave nicely? While we're talking about the Avatar's failures, let's talk about Avatar Karuk. I have words to say about Avatar Karuk. Aang asks him to tap into the same power that Kyoshi used to help the North Pole. Wait, so he did accept the power? Pick a lane, Aang, my god. But whatever, Karuk can't even do it because apparently he'd have a hard time controlling it. I'm sorry, what exactly does that mean? It would hurt? Aw, poor Avatar gonna get an ouchie. You were the one telling Aang he's gonna have to sacrifice. Rules for thee, but not for me, huh? Obviously, Karuk rejects giving his power because the writers needed to have the Koi Avatar, and having Karuk unleash his power would have taken the wind out of those sails. But again, with the lack of foresight, they had to address it because if Kyoshi can do that shit, why can't Karuk? Even past that, here's something I thought of because I understand the world building consequences. If Karuk can't do it, just ask the Water Tribe Avatar before him. The Avatar has been around for millennia. Unless Karuk was the first fucking Avatar, there should be like literally hundreds of avatars that Aang can seek help from. Did the Water Tribe turn in their statues each iteration like a new car? Foresight. I'm also fairly sure Aang talks to Karuk in general because they wanted to do the whole an avatar of every nation thing. He's already talked to one from Earth, he's already talked to one from Fire, so why not round it out? And the last thing I have to mention in regards to Karuk is that he gives the advice to Aang that he needs to rely on himself and let go of his friends. This is now the third past life of his that's telling him he has to do this. I can't pin why exactly the show keeps trying to get him to do this. Part of me feels like the show is desperately trying to establish an identity of its own, like when a child is told they're like their parents and instead decides to rebel against it. Someone told the Avatar adaptation that they were going to have to be like Avatar, and they went, no, we're nothing like the friendly Avatar cartoon. At least that's how my read of it feels. I have no concrete explanation why the show demands that the friendship aspect of Avatar be left on the cutting room floor. Well, unfortunately, it works on our characters because Aang feels the need to bench the rest of Team Avatar, or at least try. And let's be clear, there's no way way this was actually going to happen. The North Pole is about to be attacked, and there's absolutely no universe where they all just sit that shit out, and it's embarrassing to think that Aang would think this. Unless he doesn't know these people at all, which I think isn't out of the realm of possibility since he did all of his adventures without them. He spent like, what, 30 minutes total with them? Like, let's be clear how spaced out these characters were. Episode 1 gets a pass since it's the establishing episode. Episode 2, they're together the whole time, so that's 1. Episode 3, they arrive in Omashu together but all leave to do their own side quests. Episode 4, they don't start together, and they spend the entire episode apart until the very end. Episode 5, they start together, then get separated in the spirit world rather quickly. Episode 6, they don't share a single fucking scene together. Episode 7, they arrive and spend most of the episode together, even if they've all got their own stuff to do. I'll give this one a half point, because Sokka spends all his time with Yue, Aang spends most of his time with Pakku, and Katara spends most of her time mad about sexism. Which, not to invalidate it, that is a thing to be mad about. I'm pretty sure they're all together just because they're all in the same city, basically. Episode 8, they start together, but Sokka spends the entire episode with Yue, Katara spends the entire episode with Pakku, and Aang spends the entire episode fighting, and they only come together at the very end, so I'll give that one another half point. So out of 8 episodes, all 50-ish minutes long, we get 2 episodes total where Katara, Aang, and Sokka are actually together as a team. So yeah, not impossible that Aang feels like he needs to bench them because he doesn't know who the fucking people are. Which also makes it embarrassing when the resolution of the episode is them telling Aang that they're not going anywhere. Like, this never had to be stated in the cartoon, especially not here at the North Pole. Imagine traveling from one end of the world to the other and only now getting the reassurance that your friends are your friends. It's just like super embarrassing for Team Avatar. So now let's pivot over to the other element that we haven't talked about yet. Let's talk about broad strokes first. Admiral Zhao has had his personality completely changed from the cartoon. While the show has changed certain superficial aspects of his character's involvement in other storylines, nothing drastic has changed due to this adjustment. Which means that even though so much has changed with this character, not a whole lot has changed as a result of it. I bring it up again because I feel like if you're going to make such drastic changes to a character's personality, there should be some consequence to that. And with Zhao, there just kind of aren't. Moving on from Zhao, I have a bone to pick with Iroh. Well, not specifically Iroh himself, more the writing they give to him.
I know who did this. It was Ozai.
Ah yes, the obvious choice. And again, this is due to the lack of foresight from removing the pirates. I almost feel like you could have June kill Zuko instead of just straight up having Zhao do it. I mean, fuck, we already made her an empty husk of a character, why not, right? But seriously, this was done because they didn't have any of the pieces in place for the story, but they still wanted to tell the story anyway. I almost wish they took more ballsy routes or interpretations with these stories. If we're gonna admit that these are remixes and not adaptations, we might as well tell the story in a completely different way, right? Just full send that shit. If I'm allowed to be nitpicky about the writing again, I really don't like the inclusion of what feels like Marvel humor again. Having Zuko go on about how important capturing the Avatar is, just to have Iroh say,
"So no plan."
Feels very he's right behind me, doesn't it? Not the biggest thing to get in a tizzy about, but I wanted to mention it, I suppose. Let's round out the Fire Nation stories with Azula. Obligatory, why is she even in this story? Let's move on. When we see her, she's fighting an Earthbender who has been taken prisoner. It's not an idea they play with, but I should note how rare it is to see anyone in chains since the cartoon was a kid's show. But the reason that an Earthbender is here in the first place is because Ozai wanted to play games with Azula. I feel like I've talked to death about how Ozai's relationship with Azula has been thoroughly dismantled, so I guess I'll save that for when it pisses me off again. But similar to how I said I would rather them just do something completely different, I am now presenting a double standard where I feel like they should not have done anything different for Azula. Azula's place in the original cartoon was to act as a foil for Zuko, and let me be clear, she was in the story plenty to establish her role in the family. We are not hurting for scenes of Azula, and the show seems to think that we were. So I guess the conclusion of the story is that she stands up to Ozai, shooting lightning past him to display her power. This in contrast to the cartoon, where she didn't have to demonstrate her power to Daddy. A true king doesn't have to say he's a king and all that. And it ends officially with her requesting to go into the world as opposed to the cartoon where it was an order. There was very gentle care into giving Ozai a relationship with Azula that was authoritative, royal, and yet still preferable to Zuko's. And the show isn't doing that because they wanted to shove these details into our face, and by doing that, they remove the nuance. So that's what happened. And you've already heard my feelings about it, so I'm pretty good about moving on. Well, actually, not quite yet. I'm really mad that Azula seems to have her power levels nerfed. She can't produce blue fire, the lightning that she does is just a demonstration to her father, and it's kind of pathetic. And again, this all could have been avoided by just not having her in the fucking show. And so the last thing to talk about in this episode is Katara's fight with Master Pakku. First of all, I feel like there's something to be said about the emotion of the situation getting in the way of the rationality. In the cartoon, it was an emotional decision to fight Master Pakku, which echoed the emotional decision that accidentally freed Aang from the iceberg. Looking at the series as a whole, you can see that emotional moments really do serve as catalysts for the biggest decisions that our characters make. You have Zuko throwing down his swords at Lake Laogai, Sokka's pursuit of Azula ruining the day of Black Sun. Even Aang's decision to run away from home at the beginning of the show was driven by emotion. I know that it's kind of obvious to say that emotion drives decision, but when it comes in the form of bending, it's worth mentioning for the world of Avatar. And so having having Katara's fight be something that was premeditated and thought out removes this element from the show. I suppose there are worse things that could have been done to this fight, and overall it's not that bad. Except that they're missing a really big moment for Katara as a character, but I'll actually talk about that next episode because it'll be more relevant then. Which leaves us with my last note. Sokka says a swear word. I don't have a whole lot of analysis to give here. They didn't swear in the cartoon because it was a kid's show, and the showrunners have already talked about wanting to make the world more adult, but I think there's something to be said about being able to tell a really dramatic and emotional and straight up action-packed story without a single swear word ever said throughout it. It's like being able to tell a story without using words. It's hard to do, and when you can pull it off, it should be celebrated. Oh, he's doing a cute thing. We start episode 8 with Team Avatar taking down a Fire Navy ship. Aang leads the charge while Katara covers him, and Sokka heads to the bridge to hit the ship into submission. Notably, they thank Sokka for his plan and leadership this time. Then they notice what's essentially a buttload of Fire Navy ships. In the cartoon, there wasn't a sequence where Team Avatar takes on the Fire Navy, really just Aang. When the attack begins, Aang takes the fight to them and takes down a ship all by himself. It's actually rather impressive. The Waterbenders of the North come and finish the ship off, and Aang flies high above to see the buttload of Fire Navy ships, so that part overlaps. Even the dialogue of,
"You gotta be kidding me,"
is 1-to-1. Another detail that I wanted to talk about is actually that the front of Zhao's ship has the brass molding, and that is found in the cartoon, so nice detail there. Iroh giving Zuko his wisdom before he takes off for the North Pole is from part 1 of Siege of the North, except it happens at nightfall in the cartoon instead of during the day like in the show. In the show, Zuko tells Iroh that Lu Ten would have been proud, but in the cartoon, it's Iroh who divulges his feelings towards Zuko that he sees him as a son. Iroh's advice about his breath of fire is interesting because in the cartoon, it's kind of meant as this annoyingly loving advice, even followed with put your hood up, keep your ears warm, but in the show, it's more of like serious advice. Team Avatar then tells the North Pole to ready their shores for the attack. This isn't in the cartoon at all, as everyone in the North is very aware that the Fire Nation is coming because of the soot. In the cartoon, they've been ready for the attack since then. I don't know what they've been doing in the show. Oh, another small detail. In the cartoon, Katara gets a new jacket. In the show, she has the same jacket she has since she left the South Pole, but in the cartoon, she receives this new one with the moon on it. Zhao then tells Iroh that he's opening a new front on the North Pole, and shows him the war balloon. The war balloon was captured by the Fire Nation at the end of episode 17, after it was used against them, but we don't actually see anyone from the Fire Nation use one until near the end of book 3. Note the visual differences. In the cartoon, the basket, I guess, is always made of wood. In the show, it's made of metal. Their conversation is cut short by all the Fire Navy ships launching their ballistas at the same time. It's actually kind of unique and cool since we didn't get to see the siege from the Fire Nation's perspective like that. Although it is more akin to when Team Avatar tried to run the blockade on their way into Crescent Island, so maybe some inspiration was taken from there. The North Pole's waterbending defenses are much stronger in the show than they are in the cartoon. As in the cartoon, they kinda straight up took these fireballs to the face. There are definitely instances of them defending successfully against them, but not quite as effectively as in the show. Next, we have Katara telling Pakku that the women can fight and he should put his pride aside and let them. He says no, and she gestures to all the women in the tribe. This was unnecessary in the cartoon as Pakku had already capitulated and allowed Katara to train and fight. Chief Arnuk then grabs Han and tells him that he'll be the first line of defense, and oh hey, Han has that mark on his forehead. The mark is from the cartoon as well. All the warriors of the tribe get it as the chief tells them they may not return. Sokka gets one in the cartoon as well, but not the show apparently. The chief tells Yue that she's gotta take over if he dies, but that detail is not in the cartoon either. It seems a little bleak for a kid's cartoon. The chief then tells Sokka to protect Yue. In the cartoon this happens as well, but the chief uses Sokka's fight with Han as a smokescreen to do it without raising eyebrows. And he does it during a lull in the battle when the Fire Nation stops their attack due to the full moon, not in the heat of battle. Pakku then sends some students to serve under Katara in the heat of battle. This never happens in the cartoon. The only team that Katara ever really leads is Team Avatar. Iroh then warns Zhao that the waterbenders draw their power from the moon and they should stop their attack. That comes from a scene in the cartoon as well, except they're standing on the ship, not flying in a balloon. How exactly do you plan for him to stop the attack from way up there? Either way, in the show, Zhao says no, but in the cartoon he agrees with Iroh. Well, he agrees with him on the first day. The Siege of the North is a 2-day attack, where the Fire Nation stop their attack on the first night, but continue it in the second night, aiming to take the Moon Spirit out of commission. So, the Fire Nation fighting through the night isn't exclusive to the show, but it doesn't happen on night 1 of the cartoon. Zhao then explains that it's not just any moon, it's a full moon. Ice moon, sorry. What's an ice moon? Oh, it allows the barriers between the physical world and the spirit world to grow thin. Okay, so there's no ice moon in the cartoon, but the phenomenon where the physical and spirit worlds draw thin is a concept from the cartoon. It's called the winter solstice, so fancy that fucking irony. Zhao explains how he came across the information of the spirit oasis. In the cartoon, he divulges that he found an underground library with information about the spirits. In the show, he visited Roku's shrine and the fire sages told him, I guess. I feel like if they had this information just lying around, they probably should have shared it earlier, but what the fuck ever. The fire sage also explains how the waterbenders learned to waterbend by observing how the moon pushed and pulled the tides and learned how to do do it themselves. This explanation was in the cartoon as well, but it's given by Yue to Katara and Aang, not to Zhao. The Fire Sages then continue that the spirits transition to a physical form for one night a year. In the cartoon, it was true that the ocean and moon spirits did give up their immortality, but it was for eternity, not just for one stupid night. And I really can't stress enough that in the cartoon, Zhao had to learn this information by hunting down an underground library guarded by a fucking library spirit, and Aang had to travel into the spirit world to confront the oldest spirit there just to ascertain the knowledge. This knowledge wasn't just lying around. Aang then hears a whisper of Avatar Karuk, who warns him that his knife has been returned to the north, and he can feel it, I guess. This knife wasn't found in the cartoon at all, since, you know, the spirits gave up their immortality, which means you could kill them with a heavy rock if you found one. Zhao then divulges that he's planning on killing the ocean spirit, but in the cartoon, this is an extremely closely kept secret. The best he gives is that they will face the consequences of crossing into the physical world. Next, we have Sokka, Yue, and Momo herding people into the palace for safety, when a chunk of building is about to fall on a random girl, and Momo, of all people, pushes her out of the way. So Momo doing acts of kindness in the cartoon was few and far between. He was an animal after all. He definitely looked after and defended Team Avatar, but he didn't get to interact with other people all that often. I can look to the Tales of Ba Sing Se, where Momo freed the same animals trying to eat him, so at least there's that moment, I suppose. And next, Momo fucking dies. Do I have to pretend to be sad about this? Look at this shit. This shit makes me laugh every time. I'm sorry, I can't take this seriously. They're gonna do a fake-out death with the most least developed character in the entire show, maybe tied with Appa. Anyway, this doesn't happen in the cartoon whatsoever. Yue takes Sokka and Momo to the Spirit Oasis. First off, in the cartoon, the door wasn't a big symbol that swung in and out. It's a very small and inconspicuous wooden hatch. Next, when Yue visits in the cartoon, it's to bring Aang and Katara to the center of spiritual energy in the North Pole, not for any kind of healing. They also don't seem to use the term Spirit Oasis in the show at all, probably because they changed its purpose to be a hot spring, I guess. Although even without that name, it apparently still fulfills the same purpose as Yue explains. She saves Momo and Sokka hugs him and thanks her. Okay, so despite all my laughing, there is actually a cartoon parallel here. In the cartoon, Sokka's first impression of Momo was that he was dinner, chasing him all throughout the Southern Air Temple. However, in the finale of the entire cartoon, Sokka's grown quite affectionate over Momo, even diving into Appa's mouth to try to save his little buddy. But again, that was the finale, with much more time to cook. Momo actually was a character in the cartoon. We then see Zuko come up from underneath some ice. This is in the cartoon as well, except it's a bit more intelligently done as far as how he actually got into the city. Sokka and Yue then take cover to hide from the war balloon arriving in the Oasis. In the cartoon, Zhao actually arrives at the Oasis before Team Avatar does, as they were out trying to save Aang from Zuko, so they got there a little late. Or lotta late, considering Zhao plucks the ocean spirit from the waters. The show has Iroh accompany Zhao because Zhao doesn't actually know what form the spirits will take, but in the cartoon, he says he was shown a detailed illustration, and didn't actually take Iroh at all, he just shows up later. Aang and Katara head to the Spirit Oasis as Zuko catches up with him and loudly proclaims that he's coming with him. Right. In the cartoon, he was much more interested in shooting first than asking questions never. Just gonna throw that out there. Katara then tells Aang to leave and she'll deal with Zuko. Okay, so Zuko does arrive to capture the Avatar in the cartoon, but he arrives at the Oasis to find Aang meditating, leaving Katara as the last line of defense to defend him. The show has Aang just like leaves? Like, I can't quite pin down why, especially because in the cartoon, Katara had been training for 11 episodes. In the show, she literally hasn't done any training whatsoever. The choreography is vastly different since in the cartoon they were fighting outside, not inside. But all of the dialogue is actually one-to-one. Well, except when Katara self-diagnoses herself as a master. Trapping Zuko in ice is the final beat in both mediums, but in the cartoon, he has to wait until sun to rise to draw power from it and escape his ice shackles.
You rise with the moon, I rise with the sun.
While in the show, he just breathes on it, okay? Iroh warns Zhao not to trifle with the spirits, but that specific line of dialogue is found earlier in this episode, before he actually does it. However, the show rolls this dialogue right into the line about,
"Whatever you do to that spirit, I'll unleash on you tenfold!"
which is given at the Oasis, except it's when Zhao already has the spirit contained in a bag. Zhao just shrugs him the fuck off in the show, but in the cartoon he actually responds to this threat by releasing the spirit. Also, Zhao comments that Ozai has been so distracted playing games with his family that he can't see the bigger picture Zhao is trying to create. Which, fellas, he's right. Zhao then rips the ocean spirit from the pond, and the world goes red, which is one-to-one with the cartoon. Even the speech he gives is extremely similar in both mediums. So, good job there. The next beat in both mediums is Aang arriving and Zhao threatening the moon spirit, and Aang trying to talk him down. Aang offers himself in place of the spirit in the show, but in the cartoon he doesn't do that. He just tries to talk reason into him about destroying the balance. Zhao then asks how much of a threat Aang will be once he eliminates waterbending from the world, and yo, he's kinda fucking right.
Master of 3 elements! Doesn't quite have the same ring to it.
Okay, that is unironically really great writing and I love it. Zhao then asks Aang if he's ever actually mattered, and Aang goes on another father's self-deprecating monologue about how he wasn't around when people needed him. Iroh actually strikes first here, forcing Zhao to drop the fish. In the cartoon, Zhao responded to Iroh's threat, so he didn't have to strike first. Once it's on the ground, Aang uses the Force again to levitate it into the pond, but Zhao stabs it with the knife before it gets there. In the cartoon, immediately after he deposits the fish back in the pond, he slashes it with fire, surprising everyone and killing the spirit. In the show, the red filter strobes with the black and white filter, but in the cartoon, the red filter goes away to transition to color, and then when the spirit dies, everything immediately loses its color. In the cartoon, the Water Tribe's I can't bend moment actually comes from when the ocean spirit was removed for the first time with the red filter. Also, this moment where the ship crashes into the ice wall happens much earlier in the siege in the cartoon. Katara then loses her bending in the middle of her fight with Zuko, which was resolved before this in the cartoon. She's actually at the Spirit Oasis with Aang when Zhao kills the fish. The sequence of Chief Arnook and Han fighting off the firebenders without bending is unique to the show, but kinda cool to see non-benders standing their ground. We had an example of this in the cartoon with Hakoda, Sokka's father, taking all the men of the Water Tribe, but we never actually got to see them in action. Iroh then takes down all the firebenders Zhao brought with him, and he does this in the cartoon, but in the cartoon he moves quicker and has swifter strikes. Yue then says it's over, and Aang responds with no it's not over, entering the Avatar state. These beats were taken one-to-one from the cartoon, but Aang flashing back to the past avatars telling him that he needs to put his own needs behind that of the world is unique to the show. Aang is very talkative in the Avatar state. The only time we get to see him talk this much while he's glowing is when he's yelling at the Sandbenders who stole Appa in episode 11 of Book 2. Aang becoming the Avatar Koi is the finale of the cartoon as well, but the cartoon doesn't actually give a verbal explanation of what's happening. Yue in the show says that he's allowing the ocean spirit to channel its rage through him, which, as far as an explanation goes, I'm fine with. Oh, visual difference time. There wasn't many things that still had color after the moon spirit had died, but Yue's eyes actually were one of them, piercing blue in a sea of gray, but the show omits this. I mean, they kinda have color, but that could also be the reflection. The Avatar Koi is very bright. Aang's tattoos and eyes glow white in the cartoon until he merges with the ocean spirit. In the show, he's blue the whole time. Yue then passes out, which he kind of does in the cartoon, except it's once again when the spirit is removed from the pond, not killed. Iroh exits the Spirit Oasis and finds Zuko there, but in the cartoon, they don't reconvene until the siege is over, at the very end of the episode. The Northern Water Tribe bow before Koi Avatar, which is a note taken from the cartoon as well. The soldiers firing fireballs at the Koi Avatar and fighting back in general is in both mediums, but Zuko contemplating going after Zhao is exclusive to the show. In the cartoon, he shoots first and asks questions never.
You're alive?
Is one-to-one though. Zhao calls Zuko a traitor, which is taken from the cartoon, just not in so many words. Or actually more words when you count them. The two of them then start punching each other. Like, are we firebenders or not? Jesus Christ. Zhao then spells out to Zuko that his mission to capture the Avatar was a lie, which again is never said in the cartoon, it's always just implied. And then Zhao says that Zuko was motivation for Azula, which once again is show exclusive. Oh, and I guess we have our answer for how Zhao found out that Zuko was the Blue Spirit. Instead of deducing it himself, Azula told him. God, this show is pathetic. There's very little talking between these two in the cartoon. Zhao plans on striking Zuko when he has his back turned, and Iroh saves him, killing Zhao. Okay, so Zhao dies in the cartoon by being dragged into the ocean by the ocean spirit after Yue sacrifices herself to allow the moon to return. Okay, yes, technically he's not dead, he's in the spirit world, fuck Korra, we're moving on. The point is that Iroh saving Zuko from Zhao isn't how this story ends in the cartoon, but it does kind of have its roots set earlier in the series. In episode 3, after Zuko wins his Agni Kai with Zhao, he tries to strike him with his back turned, and Iroh steps in to stop the attack and save Zuko. In the show, Katara tries to talk down the Koi Avatar, but in the cartoon, she's stuck at the Spirit Oasis with Sokka, Yue, and Iroh the whole time. The choreography of the spirit fight isn't all that accurate, but it's a big monster fight scene, it's whatever. Sokka then has the idea that they can bring the moon spirit back to life. This idea was given by Iroh in the cartoon, however. Yue kisses Sokka, but in the cartoon, she only kisses him after she's turned into the spirit of the moon. Yue freezes Sokka's feet and tells him her plans, which is unnecessary in the cartoon as Sokka understands what needs to be done. She enters the water and the moon returns, with Koi Avatar seeing it. In the cartoon, that's all Aang needs to see to return to shore, but in the show, he still doesn't quite come back yet. Instead, Katara talks him down, saying that he wasn't meant to die 100 years ago. This conversation and wording is taken specifically from The Storm, episode 12. I don't know how we can hear her fucking whispering from all the way over there, but whatever. Aang then jettisons out of the water, giving us the first, one, and only example of him waterbending in the entire show. And it's when he's in the Avatar state, so it doesn't even count. Then we see the destruction of the Water Tribe, where those students Pakku sent to Katara fucking died, as well as Han. Han did maybe kinda die in the siege in the cartoon, but it's because he tried to take out Admiral Zhao on his ship during the attack. He's not found in the rubble afterwards. The cartoon actually has very little to show about the destruction of the North Pole after everything settles. Sokka's conversation with Chief Arnook is vastly different in both mediums. In the show, the Chief reassures Sokka that she was a big girl and could make her own choices, and that Sokka was a hero even if he wasn't a warrior. In the cartoon, they focus the conversation mostly on Chief Arnook losing his daughter, and the respect Sokka has about that. Master Pakku then talks to Katara, which also happens in the cartoon, but the only line he has to say about rebuilding is that he's actually leaving the North Pole so he can head to the South South Pole. Paku then tells Katara that he told her water is the element of change, which, no you didn't, was this a deleted scene or something? Paku then asks Katara to remain in the North Pole, which again, he wouldn't have asked in the cartoon since he wasn't even staying. It seems like in the cartoon, people did understand that Sokka and Katara are his travel companions while he, saves the fucking world. But the show doesn't really seem to get that. There's then this line of dialogue from the cartoon.
Then he better get used to calling you Master Katara.
Which got turned into,
He couldn't have asked for a better master.
I'm gonna be really pedantic and nitpicky here. The show is implying here that Katara has learned waterbending, and it's not the first time that they've implied this. The cartoon instead just implies that she would be continuing his training. Maybe I'm looking too much into this, but the show seems to really be wanting to give Katara a black belt, while the cartoon was very fine with having her still learning. Paku then gives Katara some water from the Spirit Oasis in the North Pole, which actually doesn't happen in the Siege of the North, but the first episode of Book 2, as a parting gift. He also clarifies that it has special properties, but he doesn't clarify this in the show. Next, Iroh and Zuko ride off in a canoe, but in the cartoon, they were escaping on a piece of constructed driftwood.
A man needs his rest.
Is from the cartoon, but the rest of the conversation isn't. Aang crying over the destruction and beating himself up over it is unique to the show. In the cartoon, the last conversation Team Avatar has for Book 1 isn't actually a conversation, it's just a hug between the team, as an understanding that the battle isn't over yet. In the show, the conversation has Aang finally let go of Gyatso. Like, Jesus Christ, I can't believe that took you all season. In the show, Ozai gets a report from the Fire Sages of all people about how the Siege of the North went. In the cartoon, the last scene of Book 1 is Ozai proclaiming to Azula that Iroh is a traitor and Zuko is a failure, and that he has a task for her. And that's all we see of Ozai, so everything else going forward is a show exclusive, including the capture of Bumi and the takeover of Omashu. That definitely happens in Book 2, but we don't get to see it revealed until the last shot of Episode 2. Whether or not Ozai used the Siege of the North as a distraction is anybody's guess. My assumption is that these elements were not related. It's revealed that Azula is the one who captured Omashu, but in the cartoon she wasn't involved. She only visited Omashu after it was conquered to find Mai. The Fire Sage then takes Ozai into a room and shows him this planetarium device, which did exist in the cartoon, except it was in Wan Shi-tong's library, not the Fire Nation. Although likely they did have one off screen, because while the Fire Sages in the show say that tracking the celestial motions can be difficult, the Fire Nation in the cartoon had no problem plotting out when celestial events would happen, knowing the precise dates of both Sozin's comet and the solar eclipse. So anyway, the Sage tells Ozai that they'll see the return of Sozin's comet soon. In the cartoon, we the audience were very specifically aware of when the comet was returning because Roku told Aang in episode 8, allowing us to start our ticking clock for the entire show. Even throwing this knowledge at the very end of the series, the ticking clock doesn't start. I'll talk about that soon, but first let's go over why this shit even happened. As I look at our finale, I think about what lessons we've learned along the way. We learned about how the show could stand to have more patience, focus, restraint, and I think our final episode could really use some damn fulfillment. Because trust me, they tried. This entire episode is trying to fulfill the promises it set up in episodes past, all the way from the very first episode. But the truth is, it just fumbles all of them. Every bit of storytelling they're trying to wrap up in this episode just had me screaming, why are they doing this now? The biggest and ugliest elephant in the room for me is Aang's self-deprecating attitude. I could see a valid argument that Aang's biggest character trait for the show is his seriousness. Aang had his serious moments in the cartoon, but it would be a far cry to say he was a serious character. In this episode in particular, he's fighting, crying, and complaining about his absence. The fighting is more stale than it is in the cartoon. I think that's a limitation of the mediums, though. It's easier to show facial expressions on cartoon characters when they're in the middle of intense combat, but since living humans have to actually, express energy, it's harder to make their faces jovial. Aang cried a few times in the cartoon, but every purpose was personal. He did not shed tears lightly. He cries when Appa gets captured, then rescued. He cries when a new baby gives him hope again, and once more when Aang releases the grief he's held in for the mourning of his people. Aang never actually cries at the destruction of pain caused by the Fire Nation. He seemed more understanding that this is war and these things happen. His understanding of that was enabled by his lack of complaining in the cartoon. Well, to be more specific, he complained, but not about things that actually mattered. And his complaints about not being able to be there for the world stopped after episode 11. That shit resolved itself rather quickly. It had to. So having Aang say over and over again that he wasn't there for the world is just so foreign. I think it was an effort to garner fulfillment. The show was attempting to wrap up this arc of his, but for this battle to happen in a way that was actually fulfilling, he needs to have gotten over this and already be unburdened by it. I think that's the reason for the overabundance of self-deprecation. And let me say, it was an overabundance. Every other scene with Aang in it has him complaining that he wasn't around when the world needed him. Ditto for Aang letting go of Gyatso. I can't believe he spent the entire season being shackled by his grief about his people. So much for having a fun-loving avatar. But in the spirit of attempting fulfillment, he finally forgives himself at the end of the episode for Gyatso. And I'm just thinking, like, here? With Katara and Sokka at the North Pole? Do we really need this? Who is this for? And the last thing I have to talk about for Aang is when he goes Koi Avatar. Katara tries to talk down Aang, which I guess is fine in theory, except that she's still doing the we're a family routine. In the cartoon, of course they were fucking family. They hashed this shit out in episode 3. They traveled halfway across the world together. If cartoon Aang heard that, he would have been like, yeah, next slide, please. It's just so embarrassing. It makes me feel like they wrote this as the first episode, wrote the other episodes, and then never went back to revise this. It's similar to last episode, that this is a failure of foresight. If Katara had done this routine in episode 1 when Aang found Gyatso for the first time, she wouldn't have had to do it now. Now let's go back to talking about things in order. For starters, they changed Aang taking out ships by himself to it being a team effort. And I gotta say, it's nice to see Team Avatar actually doing something together. They spent so much of the show separated, and this 1 3-minute intro sequence is making me appreciate their dynamic. I have been starved. It's not all good though. I have mentioned it before, but Show Katara does the same like 2 hand movements over and over again, especially this one, which she also does on the poster of the show. I don't know how difficult it is to create stances for her to do, but she's always doing that one, and I'm getting tired of seeing it. Now let's talk broad strokes. The Siege of the North is called that because it takes multiple days in the cartoon. The show makes the entire attack happen in one night,
and they don't even use the term siege anywhere in the show.
This term isn't what makes the battle great,
but siege does signify something larger than just a battle, allowing the attack to happen in multiple planned stages. The show only mentions in passing that the waterbenders get stronger from a full moon.
In the cartoon, they had to pause their assault because of that. Instead, the show gives us an ice moon. An ice moon. Any of you guys in the back ever heard of an ice moon? You know, makes the barrier thinner between the spirit and the physical worlds.
The winter solstice?
No, that's something different. That is an astrological phenomenon
that is from the cartoon and has the exact same properties as an ice moon.
But no, unfortunately an ice moon is very different because it's new. You've never heard of it before, so, you know, that makes it better. Because the solstice is stupid. I'm grasping at straws here, guys. Why make something new for something that already existed? Are you worried about the timeline? Because I can promise you the timeline is fucked. I don't know if they were rushed or if they could even be rushed since they had 7 episodes to establish these things, but the siege just had more phases in the cartoon, and I appreciate the dynamic shifts of each section. It actually bugs me a lot that we had an entire episode devoted to the setup before the attack, and we're still playing catch-up in the form of Chief Arnook hastily explaining that Sokka is going to protect Yue. I understand that they may have wanted to do this in the heat of battle to make it more exciting, but episode 7 felt like it wasted so much time, and I didn't even get a full return for the time wasted. Oh, going back to dynamic sections, Zuko captures the Avatar. That part was excluded. The first actual victory he had since he caught Aang in the South Pole. It was a different section of the siege that flipped the script and showed us something different. And without having that, as the show did, the entire thing is just a fight. It's a big old fight. And yeah, cool. I just wish it had more dynamic action happening. I think they changed this because they wanted to give Katara a win over Zuko, and because maybe they thought having too many moving pieces in too many different locations would confuse the audience. I don't know. Oh, there was also one more beat in the siege that did pause the action. All the women standing around doing nothing. Great look, guys. I'm not here to shit on the moment. Any women watching can let me know if you think it's empowering, as this whole standing up for your gender thing is foreign to me. But I just feel like it could have been done better. Like, picture this, right? What if the women just put themselves into the battle? A waterbender gets burned and a woman comes over to heal him, and she creates a big ice wall to protect them from an incoming fireball, and he is shocked because he's never seen a woman waterbend like that before. Like, fuck, come on, man. Anything would have been better than this. I only harp on this moment because there was a much stronger moment of women being tough as fuck in the cartoon. When Katara is fighting Master Pakku, she has this moment where she fortifies herself on the steps and yells,
"You can't knock me down!"
And everyone cheers for her. There's 2 layers of this. One to Katara's worth as a fighter, and one to Katara's worth as a woman. And both are equally elegant and stronger than anything in the show. I know, it's a remix,
but at least remix it into something good for fuck's sake.
I do know that the one new beat of the siege that wasn't in the cartoon, the war balloon, completely fucks up the entire war for the rest of the show. Let me explain. Do you remember the first time control over air power was shown from the Fire Nation in the cartoon? It wasn't in book 1. It wasn't even in book 2. It was during the eclipse. Right when Team Avatar and the invasion force were getting close to the Fire Nation capital, the Fire Nation launched airships over them to destroy the submarines and prevent them from leaving. Only a handful escaped on Appa, meaning that nearly everyone on the planet who wanted to stop the Fire Nation was captured in one fell swoop. That was the impact of the first appearance of air tech from the Fire Nation. It completely turned the tides of the war, and basically made it impossible for anyone to oppose them anymore. Now, take that moment and those feelings,
and think about this moment for the show. Firstly, what an emotional letdown. Aang fucking cries over the impact the war balloon has in the cartoon. In the show, he doesn't even know it exists. Secondly, what a missed opportunity for Sai, the mechanist, since he had them turned against him. But thirdly, why even put the war balloon in the Siege of the North?
The cartoon did just fine without the use of a war balloon.
I mean, forgive the fuck out of me for thinking that the stakes of killing the moon were enough on their own. And the worst part is that the show doesn't even realize that this piece of machinery changes everything for the Fire Nation.
How is anyone supposed to oppose the Fire Nation now? How are we supposed to have book 2 and 3 when the Fire Nation basically have their endgame technological development? What are we going to be excited for, the drill. So why did this happen? I think it's trying to make sense of the ripples that were established in episode 3 with the Mechanist. In the cartoon, his episode was right before they reached the North Pole, so the Fire Nation didn't have time to play around with the air technology. But in the show, they had all season to muck around with it, and they wanted that shit to pay off immediately. It's kind of crazy how patient the cartoon was in retrospect, only introducing elements and not have them pay off until like 40 episodes later. Some other miscellaneous moments of the siege include when the non-benders defend the waterbenders who have lost their bending ability. This is a new moment added to the show, and I'm kind of glad they did it. It's really cool to see it like this. A moment I'm not cool with seeing is the show's insistence to give Katara a shortcut. The show has 2 separate instances where it implies she's a master. This bitch learned waterbending like yesterday and has had no training whatsoever. Being in a fight is not equivalent to mastery, and I despise that they're trying to make that connection. Just because she's the most skilled because no one at the North has ever fought doesn't make her a master. Especially because no one but me was concerned with getting her to the North Pole to find a master. Okay, if I'm being a little kinder, sure, they can call Katara master, just like a white belt might call a blue belt master, but it just feels unearned. But even she thinks she's a master. She tells Zuko that the master she found was herself. You dick, you can't just do that. You can't spend 1 day around benders and become a master. You didn't do any training. Let's actually talk about Zuko's fight with Katara.
That's what we call a nothing burger. That was nothing.
Quick show of hands, who in the audience knows why Katara fighting Zuko at the North Pole was significant? The answer is because that's the first time she was fighting him in the entire show. He's tangled with her since episode 1, but she's never been strong or confident enough to actually stand her ground. And at the North Pole, under a full moon no less, she earns this victory against him. Not to mention, she's defending her friend, the Avatar. Everything is on the line in this fight. What's on the line in the show? What are the stakes exactly? Aang isn't defenseless. Matter of fact, bro just leaves. What happens if Zuko isn't stopped by Katara? He heads into the Spirit Oasis and is killed by Zhao? Why am I invested? So why have the fight if you remove all of the stakes? It's because the show is attempting to fulfill a stake from earlier. Katara stood up to Zuko and, albeit barely, lost to him. So the show is trying to let her have her moment where she comes back stronger and more powerful to deal with the same threat that took her down earlier. That's the reason. The show barely explains that she's stronger because of the moon. She hasn't done a fucking lick of training, so it absolutely fails in my eyes. But hey, most of this show is a failure to me. It's starting to blur together. And the consequence of removing it is that we don't get Zuko's triumphant line of,
I rise with the sun.
Showing that different factions draw their powers from celestial bodies has never been more clear, not to mention setting it up for the eclipse 2 books later. Like I said, the cartoon was hella patient. We're gonna ping pong around here, but let's talk about Zuko. Allow me to set the scene. In the last episode of the cartoon, Zuko successfully captures the Avatar, but fails to escape, is rescued by Team Avatar, fights and defeats Zhao, and escapes with his uncle, finally resting and pausing his hunt for Aang. Talk about compounding character into 22 minutes, huh? Zuko in the show shows up, fights with Katara, is rescued by Iroh, tries to fight Zhao again, gets fucking dunked on, gets saved by Iroh a second time, and escapes, except the characterization that specified that he's taking a break from hunting Aang is missing. Here you have on-brand Zuko, and here you have best market Zuko. I'm sorry, best market, I'm sure you're a good product. I actually have quite a big problem with when he fights Zhao. First off, they fucked up the coloring. In the cartoon, the fight was gorgeous, the fire creating the only shading on our characters that was the only color in the scene. Broadly, they seemed to be going for the same style, but they didn't full send it, making the show only desaturated, while the cartoon was straight up black and white. During their fight, there's explosions all over the place, and it lights them up more than just their own fire. I have some theories as to why they did this. I imagine it's rather difficult to follow live action if it's simply in black and white. Information may have gotten lost. The solution I would normally suggest is shooting in black and white. See, there's a difference between setting your camera settings to black and white and turning off the color in editing. I can't directly confirm or deny this is what happened, it's just my speculation. I'm getting too in the weeds about it, but I think the explosions ruin the style they were going for. Okay, enough stylization, the fight itself. In the cartoon, Zuko breaks out of his ropes on his own, and in the show, Iroh comes and saves him from his fight with Katara. Remember before when I talked about the show's ugly decision to continually remove agency from all of our characters? In the cartoon, he makes a choice. In the show, he's chaperoned. This goes double for Zhao's death. In the cartoon, there was a real character-defining moment where after he was grabbed by spirits, Zuko puts his hand out to save him. Zhao rejects it, but the point is that Zuko offered. It was the last piece we needed to start describing him as morally gray, setting him up for book 2 where he was officially gray. And don't even get me started on the fight choreography itself. You have 2 incredibly powerful firebenders, and these 2 fuckers are punching each other. Are you joking with this? In the cartoon, close-up fire blasts were extremely powerful. There's a moment in the cartoon choreography where Zuko does kind of punch him in the stomach, but some fire comes out afterwards. Imagine how hard that would hit in live action. Imagine going through all the work to create a bending system, create special effects for it, and instead having people punch each other. It's embarrassing. In the show, Iroh kills Zhao, saving Zuko. Right. So if I had to guess why, they really wanted to nail home that Iroh would protect Zuko no matter what. Or maybe they thought they developed Zuko enough that they didn't have to have his offer to save Zhao. I wish I had a better explanation than that, but that's kind of all I got. Let's talk about Zhao now. I have a kind word to say here, actually. I like bringing Iroh with him to the Spirit Oasis. In the cartoon, he went by himself and Iroh followed secretly. But in the show, Zhao intentionally brought him with the party because he was hoping that Iroh could identify the spirits. This seems like an actually totally normal extension of Iroh, and I think this one's a win. I like that decision. What I don't like is when Iroh says,
"Whatever you do to that spirit, I'll unleash on you tenfold!"
And Zhao replies with,
"Spare me your empty threats."
I don't like that. Iroh has been a step down from his cartoon counterpart, but we have definitely seen him do enough that we know you don't want to tangle with him. Cartoon Zhao respected this threat, and I guess show Zhao is just too cocky to care. It kind of fits with his personality, but I remember it being a big deal to see Iroh choosing the balance of the world over the Fire Nation, and to have Zhao kind of spit on it is disappointing. Don't worry, he doesn't have the only line of dialogue that I hate. Iroh says,
"Even Ozai wouldn't want that."
Bro,
something in my bones tells me that Ozai doesn't care about throwing the world out of balance.
I know he's only saying this to garner some pause in Zhao since he's a bootlicker and probably would care very much about what Ozai has to say, but Iroh should know that's not a good bluff. Everyone knows that it's not a good bluff. I don't know why he pleads it this way.
Especially because Zhao reveals that he has his own aspirations to be Fire Lord himself. It's just such a misfire on every level.
Then there's the matter of how the spirits are killed. In the cartoon, Zhao made it to the Oasis first, put the fish in a bag, and the moon went red. Team Avatar knew that they had to return to the Oasis to stop him, and the red moon is how they knew. In the show, Zhao doesn't remove the fish until they're already there. Sokka and Yue are there because Momo died, and Aang is there because he was told by Avatar Karuk to go there. It just feels so much like when a 3-year-old tells you a story. We call that and then storytelling. And then Zhao and Iroh went to the Spirit Oasis, and then Sokka and Yue are there, and then Aang shows up, and then Zhao takes the fish. Nothing really connects to each other. The characters don't have to use their intelligence and decision-making skills to figure out what to do next. It also flows much better in the cartoon. Zhao plucks the fish, the moon turns red, Aang shows up, he puts it back, and then out of rage and ego, he kills the spirit in the pond, surprising everyone. But in the show, it feels like a foregone conclusion, like we knew what was going to happen. Maybe that's why the show didn't even bother with the surprise element, because it felt like it was ruined from the moment we introduced Karuk's knife. Chekhov's gun, Karuk's knife, Speaking of the spirits, Zhao apparently deduced the knowledge of the ocean and moon spirits from Roku's shrine in the Fire Nation. I'm gonna have an aneurysm over how lazy this is. Where is Wan Shitong's library? Why is it so easy to obtain this information? Why did Roku know about Tui and La? Oh yeah, that's their name, by the way, just they left that out of the show. Another consequence of this being at the Roku shrine is that the information of how waterbending started is given to Zhao, arguably the person who needs it the least in the show, if only because he's about to die in 10 minutes. But more importantly, this means Aang doesn't get this info. Don't you think it's kind of important that the fucking Avatar knows how waterbending started? Is this not the Book of Water? Oh, and that's not even my biggest gripe with the new ocean and moon spirits. They only take physical form for one night? For why? Was giving up their immortality permanently too steep a price for them? Fucking cowards. But it does raise extra questions. I guess Zhao knew that they were going to be mortal on the night he attacked. Or what, got lucky? Yeah, Zhao, the bumbling, incompetent hothead. We're supposed to believe that the guy who got promoted through politics is smart enough to track the mortality schedules of 2 fish spirits. Get real. Additional question, did Yue's dad ask the spirits to save her? Dipping her in the Spirit Oasis cartoon was a no-brainer since the spirits were always there, but in the show, did he just wait like a whole fucking year or did he get lucky with the timing? This isn't explained, and the show has no interest in entertaining what I'm sure it would call nitpicky questions. The only reason I am harping on them is because I find doing these nitpicky questions much harder in the cartoon. Not impossible, but everything is much tighter and usually has an explanation. I'm just saying that if Tui and La are going to be mortal for one night of the year, that's some incredibly lucky timing going on for all of our characters. So why make the changes? At this point, I really am starting to believe it's because they're desperate to be different from the cartoon. Doesn't matter if something worked or worked better, the show doesn't want to take from the cartoon. Oh, while we're talking about the spirits, apparently Avatar Karuk's knife is the only knife that can kill the spirits.
A knife that is kept at Roku's shrine, apparently. Fuck this show, man.
This seems unnecessarily contrived, and a consequence of it is that he can feel it approach the North Pole when Zhao approaches with it. First off, why can he feel it approaching? Does the Avatar spirit have a direct connection to physical items? This is a quality not only completely unique to the show, but Avatar Karuk personally. We've met a handful of spirits at this point, and I can't think of a single other one who had a tie to the physical world like this. And what does this mean for Aang? Why can't Aang feel it approach if Karuk is his past incarnation? And why do you need a spirit knife to kill spirits in the first place? Fire worked just fucking fine in the cartoon because they were just fish. They gave up their immortality. That was the whole point. So let me get this straight. On one night a year, we have 2 spirits who give up their immortality for 24 hours, which has to overlap with an ice moon so the barriers between the physical and spirit worlds can grow thinner. And even after all that, you have to have a very specific knife in order to kill them. The word of the day is fucking contrived. So why do it? Because the show fucking hates me. Okay, let's move on. Karuk says that the power of the Avatar spirit pales in comparison to the elemental spirits. Can someone explain to me what the fuck this mumbo jumbo means? He's not talking about the elemental powers of the elements like earth, fire. He's talking about the elemental powers of the spirits? Do you mean celestial powers? Also, what's the fucking difference exactly? I thought Aang was a spirit in a sense. I mean, definitely if we ask Legend of Korra, but even that aside, I thought the Avatar was the bridge. What do you mean he pales in comparison? He's the only one who can access and talk to them. Well, except for Yue for some fucking reason. So someone please explain to me. I eagerly await your explanation. And finally, the aftermath. The show gives much more screen time to the destruction of the North Pole than the cartoon does. The cartoon is kind of eager to get the story wrapped up as soon as our characters are in a good place. So I actually think this is a positive, showing that the Fire Nation has real lasting consequences, taking lives, hurting people. It's not that the cartoon was shy on showing these things either, but they usually did it in a more contained and spread out way. Otherwise the cartoon would look kind of bleak. So I like what they did here. What I don't like is the resolution itself. Chief Arnook talks to Sokka in both mediums, but in the cartoon it's Sokka who consoles the Chief about his lost daughter. And in the show, it's the Chief who tells Sokka that he's a hero. The cartoon didn't need to tell us this. Sokka was always a hero. There's also this awesome moment.
The spirits gave me a vision when Yue was born. I saw a beautiful, brave young woman become the Moon Spirit.
This shit is awesome. It's like full circle acceptance that his daughter has done a noble and selfless thing. And it makes this moment not one of sadness, but one of hope. The show just misses this because they wanted to instead wrap up Sokka's arc. An arc that didn't need to happen, but I'll get to it in a minute. In the cartoon, Master Paku explains that him and a group of waterbenders are returning to the South Pole to help rebuild their sister tribe. The camaraderie of the water tribes was always tied into community, so I always loved this choice, which of course means I hated when the show omitted it. I think this is a consequence of showing so much destruction of the North. Kinda like, how can I go help the South if the North needs my help? And I get that. In which case, if I had to trade showing the destruction of the North for Master Paku going to the South, I think I would. I like the full circle nature of it, returning to the South Pole where the journey began, even if we can't see it for ourselves. Okay, and aside from the ending, let's talk about a funny note before we move on to the conclusion. Momo dies. I know it doesn't sound funny, but I can't help but laugh when I think about how they tried to squeeze a kill the dog moment out of a CG character who had a total of 10 minutes of screen time and absolutely no personality. I think they tried to do this because they really wanted to have a character fake out death and couldn't quite figure out who to give it to, since everyone had their own individual side quests. I also think they're relying on the audience's nostalgia for the character, instead of, actually developing him. Similar to how when they kidnap Appa in season 2, we'll feel bad about it, but not for this CG monstrosity, for this cartoon king. What a shit show. In my previous videos, I had a deep respect and admiration for the material I was covering. I liked the show and I liked the comics they were based on. I really did go into this project with an open mind, thinking, yeah, it's gonna be different, but that's okay, let's see how it's different. And what I found was that the way it's different is that it's bad. It's just bad. All the original details, characters, world building, and nuance that made the original Avatar: The Last Airbender so great have been stripped away entirely, and we're instead left with the story design for people who are barely paying attention. For some people, this will be their first introduction to Avatar as a franchise. For a lot of people, they saw this show and thought, wow, it's so great, I can't wait to see more. And that's fine. I don't know if you need to hear this, but you're allowed to like bad things. You could have watched my entire video and gone, damn, this guy is really overreacting. And that's fine. But in the end, this is a comparison video. And pound for pound, blow for blow, the cartoon just comes out on top. That's not to say that there aren't actually some neat ideas that the show tries to pull off, so let's review. Episode 1 brought us the submission and compromise idea. The idea that the Water Tribe would cooperate with the Fire Nation as opposed to constantly being at odds with them. I think this idea may have come from episode 6, Imprisoned. In that episode, Team Avatar discovers an Earth Kingdom village that is under occupation from the Fire Nation, and they're straight up bullies. So in the spirit of making the show more adult, why not make it so there's some measure of compromise? If we give up an outsider, our insiders will be left alone. I bring up episode 6 because it's the only real example I can find of this happening. Haru saves an old man with his earthbending, and in the night, the man narcs on him. Other than that, every other example of a village or settlement being under occupation from the Fire Nation is extremely one-sided and impossible to compromise with, even within the Fire Nation, as seen with the village of the Painted Lady. I don't think that this is a bad idea. I actually think that the cartoon would have maybe played around with this idea more if it had the option to be more adult than it was. But at the end of the day, it was a kid's show, and we gotta respect that limitation. The next idea was Zuko's diary. I've talked about it enough, but I like this idea. The concept that if Zuko needed to capture the Avatar, he would spend his entire being devoted to finding out how to do that, learning your enemy and all that. This element is only explored a tiny bit in the cartoon, in which Zuko visits the Western Air Temple via a flashback in Book 3. The idea in and of itself is really fantastic. I just kinda hate the ripples it creates. Nearly, if not every important decision or knowledge gap that Team Avatar and Aang had to have filled was found in his book. I joked before that it's basically the wiki page printed out, and yeah, it kind of fucking is. They got the script in there.
Well, let them read the screenplay. It starts here on page 1.
It allows them to skirt the idea of why and how. But I mean, who needs those elements in a show anyway, right? Isolationism. Unironically, my least favorite word in American politics. So imagine my feelings upon seeing Omashu engage in a policy from the 1800s. I'm being too emotional, let me get specific. Isolationism is kind of the opposite of the general attitude of the cartoon. Nearly every time that a character, village, town, or people in general could help out, they did. It was extremely uncommon to have gates, borders, or assistance closed off to our protagonists. So hearing Jet say that Omashu doesn't take kindly to outsiders does does point me to this new idea. The thought that Omashu has probably been burned by outsiders before, and they don't want to see that happen again. For me, the wind is kind of taken out of those sails when Omashu falls anyway. That, and the destruction of the world building and mercantilism. Here's a question. How exactly do you have a bustling street economy if you don't take kindly to outsiders? The only way that would work is if you had your citizens leave, acquire wealth, and return to purchase goods. But then you wouldn't really be an Earth Kingdom stronghold, would you? Yeah, it all kind of falls apart when you think about it for like 2 seconds. Still, it's a unique idea that the show tried to play with. Even playing with it a second time when they mentioned that Kyoshi Island stayed out of the war by remaining insignificant. It's a new idea, even if it destroys other aspects that I care about much more. This does kind of piggyback onto the next idea though, the 100 Years of War. A century of fighting was an ever-present theme in the cartoon, but having Boomy specifically talk about it makes it unique for the show, because he was the one actually engaging in the war the entire time. The Fire Nation went through 3 generations of Fire Lord during this conflict, but Omashu was under one king's rule the entire time. And I honestly wish they did more with it. Maybe instead of making him spiteful, make him overly strategic. Make him constantly consulting with war advisors, since that's what he would have had to do since forever. And just as I'm saying this, I realize it conflicts with our last theme anyway, since Omashu was isolated from the rest of the world. Damn, that idea really kind of messes up everything, doesn't it? And speaking of new ideas that are interesting but a mess, let's talk about Azula's parents. In the cartoon, Azula never needed to be abused or manipulated like she is in the show. The cartoon did plenty to show that Ozai manipulated Zuko, from his Agni Kai to his banishment, to holding the mystery of his mother over his head, and I feel like having Azula be a foil to that, the idea that Ozai isn't awful to everybody, really solidified that Zuko is a good person caught in an abusive situation. This revelation came in the middle of Book 2, which sought to humble Zuko through a Fire Nation manhunt, putting him back on neutral footing. For all of Book 2, he wasn't even hunting Aang. Even when him and Team Avatar met together to face off against Azula, they ended up working together. All these elements that tied together Zuko's journey into 3 distinct parts, and Azula was the foil to that, because not only was Ozai manipulative towards Zuko, so was Azula. But thanks to the show, Azula is just as scarred and fucked up as Zuko is. She's another victim of circumstance instead of a knowing and willing perpetrator.
Trust is for fools. Fear is the only reliable way.
That right there is a line of dialogue from a girl who was basically groomed to be just like her daddy. Speaking of being groomed by tradition, another idea that the show plays with is that Yue is just like us. The show has extended scenes of her and Sokka to build their relationship, in which we discover that even though she loves her people, she just wants to be a regular person. This actually was rather far from the cartoon, as nearly every person who was bred into power or politics accepted that role. Except for one notable exception. Can you guess? Yep. It's Uncle Iroh. But anyway, this is a new idea, and it's pretty basic compared to some of the other ideas, which is fine. They don't all need to be game-changing. It ties together with our other idea, Sokka being unburdened. That shit sounds like a Final Fantasy subtitle. But this idea that Sokka never got to be a normal kid in his village due to having to step up to be his village's leader is again exclusive to the show. It's an interesting idea to play around with, even if it entered the story kinda late in the run. Okay, maybe a little in episode 3 when Sai tells Sokka that he could be an inventor instead of a warrior, but it wasn't really explored there. It goes hand in hand with Yue's idea, and it probably is just to allow them to have extra things to talk about. But if the show made it clear that they wanted to explore Sokka's character a bit more, I kinda like this. Alright, now 2 more ideas, and they're actually my favorite ones. Firstly, the world is just fine. June tells this to Aang when she has him captured, and it's an idea I can only recall one instance of in the cartoon, and not even by name. It would be with the pirates, who, after having captured the Avatar, try to leverage him with Zuko, and Sokka points out that the Fire Nation would pay more for Aang than Zuko can. But the specific idea that the world is doing just fine is shared by not a single person in the cartoon. I can't think of a single person, besides the Fire Nation maybe, who thinks that the world is better off now than it was before. And June is the perfect person to have this thrown onto. We don't get many bounty hunters in the cartoon, June being kinda the only one, besides the bounty put on Toph's head by her parents, or Sparky Sparky Boom Man. So it makes sense that she would be the one to tell Aang that the world is better off. And the final idea that the show plays with is Katara's PTSD. I think this idea is phenomenal, and I'm glad that the show amplifies it. I wish that it was something that the cartoon could have dove into, but I understand why they couldn't. So I'm glad to see a little bit of it here in the show. I wish the show went further with it though, maybe in her conversation with Jet, but you know, I'll take what I can get. So all in all, I think the new ideas are an exciting new part of the story, adding elements that couldn't quite be explored in the cartoon. A few of them have dual purposes though, like Sokka and Katara's also contributing to their character arcs. Let's be clear, as if you didn't hear me ranting about it all video, the characters in the show are shadows of their former selves from the cartoon. Kinda like a zombie. It looks like them and it kinda feels like them, and there might be something in there, but that's really all you got. Nothing more. And so, the character arcs that each character gets feels familiar enough for the cartoon. The cartoon had a bunch of smaller character arcs for each character to go throughout a bunch of episodes, and a handful of things that the characters worked at throughout multiple. So, it stands to reason that the show, with a less episodic format, would serve us better as far as developing characters. I would hope. Let's start with our main guy, Aang. The show has his arc begin in episode 1, with the revelation, and explicit exposition, that he doesn't doesn't want to be the Avatar. After awakening, he deals with needing closure on the death of his people and the state of the world, and takes steps towards getting there by visiting the Southern Air Temple. After that, his arc kind of becomes a little shapeless. He wavers and floats between his guilt about not being there for the world and his reluctance to actually be the Avatar. This all culminating in the finale when he finally accepts his pain about the death of his people and moves forward with being the Avatar, surrounded by his friends. It's a really weird arc when you lay it out from beginning to end. For Aang, and all the characters really, each step of his arc was its own episode in the cartoon. Accepting the war was episode 3. Dealing with not being there was episode 12. Starting his journey to master waterbending was episode 9. This is definitely his arc for the show. I don't think it's particularly great, especially with how disjointed it is, but that's what we got. Maybe Katara will fare better. Katara starts her journey in episode 1, not knowing the first thing about waterbending. She meets Aang and picks it up very, very quickly, but it's not until episode 5 when she actually starts to think about getting a master and working towards mastering her element. But besides that specifically, her arc is one of gender stereotypes. It really starts in episode 4 with her talking to Jet about how her power comes from herself. Now, pause. This sounds weird because it's like the wrap-up from her time with Jet, but Jet never actually disbelieved in her power or ability. So her clapback about her giving herself power isn't actually part of his story at all. Simply her arc. The Cave of Two Lovers continues this, where she yells at Sokka about not taking her seriously. This idea of Katara not being taken seriously or not having enough power is actually the core of her arc. It has a very loose beginning and actually a pretty solid middle with her time in the spirit world. As much as I hate her time in the spirit world, it plays into her arc rather well. It finishes with her standing up to Pakku, asserting her own worth, and then standing up to Zuko, repping up her defeat from episode 2. So far better than Aang's, but still really loose, and it takes a while to get started. Someone whose arc doesn't take long to get started is Zuko. His arc begins from his first real scene in the show, establishing his banishment. His arc as a whole is more so about establishing for the future, and most of the establishing evidence is reinforcing something that I know I've talked about, Zuko's grayness. The most important beats of his time in the show are doing things morally gray, or understandably wrong. Rescuing the Avatar, all of his flashbacks with the crew, his flashbacks with Iroh and Lu Ten. I'd even put fighting Zhao as a morally gray, or even just flat out good for the world kind of thing. And it's funny to say, but his ineffectiveness at hunting the Avatar in the show makes it so that there's not really a contest. These elements in the cartoon were standouts because Zuko was constantly hunting them. Into Crescent Island with June and Nyla, up at the Spirit Oasis, but since all of his actually effective moments of hunting the Avatar have been removed, he just constantly looks down on his luck. This sets him up for future seasons of the show, and puts him in a place where, when he does confront Team Avatar at the end of the story, he won't have to apologize for that much.
You sent Combustion Man after us?
No.
So it may have started in episode 1, but it doesn't really fare that well as far as him being a strong character. So how about Sokka then? Sokka's arc kinda starts in episode 2, when he reinforces his decision to be the warrior of his village to Suki. Then in episode 3, when the Mechanist tells him that he could be an engineer, he struggles about what that might mean for his identity. This struggle actually continues into the Cave of Two Lovers with Katara, when he's assertive as he's always been, but due to the changing circumstance, it's not working the way it used to. Even into episode 5, when his flashback takes him to when his father doubted his identity that he'd asserted onto himself. It begins its wrap up in episode 7, when upon reaching the Northern Water Tribe, he finds himself the most capable and knowledgeable fighter. His time with Yue helping reinforce that heavy is the head that wears the crown, continuing to question his identity about if it even wants to be a warrior. And finally, the decision is made for him to defend the Northern Water Tribe, with Chief Arnook giving him reassurance that Chief Hakoda, his father, couldn't give him, that he is a hero. As far as a solid arc goes, I think Sokka comes out on top. The man has every step of his journey make sense, honestly, even if it's not really an element that the cartoon explored, which, as I mentioned before, is absolutely intentional, as the producers of the show wanted to give Sokka more development than his cartoon counterpart. So we got one good arc out of the show at least, and we just had to sacrifice all the individual episodic arcs to do it.
I'd make that deal.
Damn good deal.
I would really love to end the arc section here, but let's talk about one more character, Azula. Azula's arc is similar to Zuko's in the fact that they're basically setting her up for the future, kind of in the same way that she was in book 1, but she wasn't really a part of the story until book 2. Funnily enough, she actually has one of the more complete character arcs. She starts the season off in episode 3, where she presents herself as a loyalist to her father and a psychopath at that. After rooting out traitors and being shut down by her father, she tries to set up pawns to affect the world around her, even while not being able to leave the palace. She spends a lot of time angry until she finally confronts her father, and he allows her to go out and conquer Omashu, proving that she was right, completing her arc. It's a small one, but as far as other characters go, it's actually making a lot of sense. The only part of her story that doesn't make sense is why she's even in the story to begin with. And ladies and gents, I know I've been yelling about it for hours now, but I actually have an answer. My researchers have uncovered a really fantastic interview where the producers of the show explained a bit more about their decision-making process. The first thing to mention is everything involving Azula. In case you're not someone actively involved in the film world, allow me to Captain Obvious something for us. Filmmaking costs money. Specifically, that money is spent on things like set design and set building. Once you have a location, if it costs you a lot of money, you're gonna want to get your money's worth. Can you see where I'm kind of going with this? They knew that they were gonna have to build the throne room for Zuko's banishment scene, but once they had it, they thought, well damn, wouldn't it be a shame to just use this awesome set for one scene? And thus, Azula's entry into the series was born. Because think about it, you could have Zhao writing and playing politics with someone in the Fire Nation capital, and reveal it as Azula at the end. And cutting out all of her scenes would impact impact not a single damn thing. So my thoughts of why is she in this story are actually and unironically because of the money. It was cheaper to tell her story and get some worth out of the set than lose money building a set for one scene. How disappointing. Especially because think of all the scenes we missed out on for Team Avatar in order to throw her story into this. She's like that filler episode I mentioned. You could skip through every scene with her in it and not miss a damn thing for this season. But this isn't the only example I have of money impacting the production process. Remember how I talked about bending being casual in the cartoon and missing that mark repeatedly in the show? Well, effects cost a lot to do, and do you know the most expensive and, in the producer's opinion, important special effect of the show? Koi Avatar. From there, they worked their way backwards. Spend all you need on that special effect scene, and then whatever's left we can use for bending during the rest of the series. So Zhao and Zuko fist fighting, Katara and Aang splashing with their hands, Aang holding the rock above his head with the Force, all a consequence of a lack of a special effects budget. And to be clear, it's not that the budget was small, it's just that they prioritized it for the big spirit monster scene. Another example I wanted to mention was the Agni Kais. Here's some fun trivia. How many Agni Kais do we see in the cartoon? The answer is 3. 2 are super obvious and memorable. One is between Zuko and his father, which we see through flashbacks. One is between Zuko and Azula in the finale, and the one which most people forget is between Zhao and Zuko in episode 3. The show cuts that last one out, and you can point towards Zhao being a completely different character, but it's also probably because of that special effects budget. Instead, they give the one and only Agni Kai to Zuko and his father, and since it was the only one, they wanted to make it action-packed, and so Zuko fights back. A lot of elements do get tied into the decision-making process for things like this, and so that's my line of thinking. It all comes back to the money. Shifting gears, another potential problem with the budget, which could also easily be adequated to laziness, is the cinematography. When Avatar gets brought up in conversation, this isn't an aspect that gets talked about a lot in the cartoon, but it's really important and impressive. Take this scene from Lake Laogai. It starts with a standard growl from Appa. Then we do a low-angle shot to show the scale of Zuko standing in front of him. Low angles usually indicate a lack of power, but in this instance, it's flipping that on its head since he is the one with the power. Or maybe it's reflecting how he's feeling, since, as we learn in a second, he doesn't really have a plan. Then it goes to a POV from Appa, looking down on Zuko. Once again, supposedly indicating that he has power over him, but the opposite is true. In the background, we see a door open. Then we get a not-so-quite POV to show that Zuko has accidentally threatened his uncle, who appears very small on the screen. He wasn't even a thought until he entered the room. Then we get really close as Iroh yells at him. Low angle, indicating power. Iroh has power over Zuko as he yells at him, not only for what he's saying, but for the position that Iroh plays in his life. Now we get these two half shots, one where Zuko fills half of the right side of the frame, and then Iroh filling half of the left side of the frame. The duality of these two is deciding what to do with Appa. We then get a full shot of Zuko turning his back officially on Iroh, deciding to take action on his own, only to be followed up with a close-up of his face, which the camera moves to show Iroh behind him, his conscience that won't leave him. By the time Iroh is done speaking, Zuko's scar is only barely in the frame, as he decides to make the right decision and not capture Appa. And that's just one scene from the cartoon. Here's an example from book 1. I won't go into super detail like I did for the last one, but it's imaginative. Here's an example from book 3. Again, you can see that there's just a lot of variety in how they capture this conversation. But the show, on the other hand, falls much more often into just shooting the show like any other project. Here, I'm gonna scrub through episode 3 for you. Can you see any interesting angles, really? It's mostly just full shots, medium shots, over the shoulders, or establishing shots. And it's not like live action shows can't have really interesting cinematography. Breaking Bad and The Walking Dead have amazing camera work to show their stories. And so I just wanted to bring the cinematography to everyone's attention, because it's just like so dull in the show, and it doesn't have to be. And now finally, let's talk broad strokes about the writing. The entire show doesn't develop Team Avatar as a character, instead insisting that Katara, Aang, and Sokka be dealt with as separate people. Imagine them like characters in a different TV show without the knowledge of the cartoon. Aang gets the A story, Katara gets the B story, Sokka gets the C story, and they all come together at the beginning and end of the episode. But this formula plagues the show for the entire season. I already went through how often they're on screen together, but bottom line is not a lot. I just cannot see a world where they create an Avatar TV show without his travel companions. Even Legend of Korra knew how important having a team Avatar was. Diving a bit deeper into character, let's talk about Proto-Aang. The Aang of the show feels like the Aang before book 1 even begins. Or maybe the first half of it, when he has a hard time understanding and comprehending that the Fire Nation is actually evil and destroying villages and stuff. Even up until the very end of the show, he has a hard time internalizing the evil that has taken hold of the world. But this was an aspect he accepted rather quickly in the cartoon, so that he could actually begin his journey. The show instead makes me feel like they're only ready to start the Avatar journey in the finale. Like, what the fuck were we doing the whole time if not starting the journey? That question actually keeps me up at night, because I can't help but wonder, after watching the show, what else will be completely cut out of future seasons. I imagine them trying to put on a season 2 and including things like details from book 2, but having a finale with him going, okay, I'm ready to start earthbending now. My train of thought is like, oh, by putting the comet as a reveal of the end of the season, they're probably setting it up so that Sokka and the gang can discover that instead of the solar eclipse. They'll probably just skip over the eclipse. But wait, he discovered that in Wan Shi-tong's library. Are they even going to have the library? Are they going to have Appa get captured at all then? If they don't have Appa get kidnapped, what the hell are we going to be doing for the entire fucking season? And every time I think of that question, I cry, because I imagine someone in the writer's room posed the same same question. And out of all the solutions that were posed, have Katara and Sokka get captured in the spirit world by Ko the Face Stealer was the solution that rose to the top. So see you all in season 2 when Avatar Roku finds a way to the physical world to steal Aang's glider to feed it to the sea serpent in the Serpent's Pass, because that's the level of sophistication we're going to be working with in the Netflix writers room. Speaking of writers, I had mentioned in the intro that Mike and Brian, the original creators and writers for the cartoon, were part of the project but eventually left due to creative differences. One member of the original cartoon production team that wasn't a part of the adaptation, however, was Aaron Ehasz. I think people within the Avatar sphere put a little bit more importance on Aaron than necessary, but there's no denying that the man did have a really big impact on the cartoon, being the head writer for all of its seasons, which, Aaron or not, is very, very different to how the show was handling the writing. Remember briefly like 3 hours ago when I said that we'd keep an eye on the title cards because I thought they might indicate location? Well, my researchers actually found that each episode of the Netflix show was split into pairs and given to a different writer. Episodes 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6, and 7 and 8. Each pair had a different writer attached to it. So we've solved the mystery for the title cards, but unfortunately we've opened a new horror. Why would you ever structure a TV series this way? The entire fucking show, I felt like everything was so incredibly disjointed that sometimes they would have a really great storytelling moment and fun details, and other times they didn't even give a shit in the slightest.
My knife is near.
You would have, as I explained, character arcs all over the place with no explanation. And this is it. A different writer for every 2 episodes. Holy fuck.
So technically, it's actually worse than that. It's a different director every 2 episodes, with a different writer credited literally every single episode. No one talked to each other on this project, and you can fucking tell.
So you want to know why the show is like this? You want to know why Netflix's Avatar: The Last Airbender is the way it is? It's not because of the themes this time, it's because of the leadership. So, we've gone over already that each episode is its own microcosm of a missing element. But you know, in spite of the knowledge we just learned, I really want to end this video on a positive note, so instead of tearing down, let's build up and appreciate. Sure, the show wasn't great, but it doesn't have to be. It's something separate. Its existence doesn't dismay the lessons that the cartoon taught us. It taught us how to be patient, allowing us to take in all of the new and fantastic world without overwhelming us with a million details.
It maintained the patience with specificity, including small details that we didn't even know would be relevant until later. It maintained a good length of time for the story,
with runtimes that never quite felt too long or too short. It balanced that length with focus, not letting us forget our beginning, middle, and end for every 22 minutes. It demonstrated restraint, not only because it was trying to appeal to both kids and adults, but because it made the story more interesting. It steadied that restraint with intention,
sticking to telling just one story per episode and making it a good one no matter what.
It presented its phenomenal foresight, allowing us to get payoffs to things that happened all the way back in book 1. And holy mother of pearl was it fulfilling. It allowed plot lines to have satisfying ends. It enabled characters to create the world around them, for growth to happen incrementally, for the story we loved and followed for years to be wrapped up in a way that fills us with hope. And you know what? We wouldn't be sitting here appreciating these elements without Netflix. So go ahead, Netflix, stand up, take a bow. Allow us to appreciate you bringing this wonderful show back into people's heads, for letting people take a look and be reminded of all the fun, exciting, action-packed, and emotional moments of this franchise. Thank you for allowing us a new way to view the show, and making sure that the cartoon we remember wasn't just The Last Airbender.
Thank you guys so much for watching. What do you think? Was I overall too harsh on this show, or do you think it actually had it coming? Thank you to every single one of my patrons, including Sid Montoya, my God tier patron. We have a new Discord, I've put the link in the description, so join it if you want to talk about stuff. Another reminder, if you want to see the video without the baby head copyright, you can buy it on my Patreon for $3. Thank you again to FlexiSpot for the sponsorship, and thank you all one more time for your continued support. Subscribe if you haven't already, drop a like, and keep an eye out for the next one. We'll see you soon. Bye.